The story begins with several carriages stop and some soldiers starting to prepare for a battle. An army of beings resembling goblins with improvised weapons rushes towards the carriages to loot them. However, all the mercenaries there stand in defense to fight against the monsters. And then the two groups charge at each other, with the only thing remaining being a sea of blood from all the beings involved in the fight. A bearded nobleman, watching the battle while smoking a cigar, complains because these attacks were happening day after day. Distracted, the poor fat man does not notice that some beings were gathering behind him to attack. When the man realizes it, he can no longer react, but for his salvation, a person with long hair charges at the beings to counterattack. The goblin tries to hit the long-haired man, but is immediately cut in half without even seeing it. With a sword in one hand and a shield in the other, the man defends against another monster's attack. He uses his shield to counterattack, hitting the goblin's head and throwing it far away. But despite this, there is still an enraged goblin charging at our protagonist, aiming to kill him and avenge his companions. The irritated man stops using his shield as defense, leaving his hands free, and immediately grabs the poor goblin's skull. With one hand holding the monster's skull and the other holding its arm, he exerts force to tear it apart. And then, in an extremely cruel manner, the man begins to rip the beast in half, while the nobleman from before merely watches. In shock, the nobleman is incredulous that the man had torn a goblin in half with just his bare hands. With his face stained with the creature's blood, the boy continues to stare at the beast's body while the nobleman asks who he was. But before all this happens, we see a man working on a computer, and our protagonist begins to explain that since he was young, he always liked games and that it was not a sin. The world of games had various elements like the case system and poverty, where the nobility reigned, betrayals and murders of close people or even strangers, and last but not least, numerous monsters and ferocious beasts that only think of destroying and killing. Our protagonist introduces himself as Dallin, and his appearance is of a tall man with long hair dressed in medieval clothes. However, he reformulates and says that his real name was something else while he remembers his life in his former world. But before stating his real name, the scene cuts, and we see the boy writing in a book with a quill already in another place. He was in a carriage while the sun shone on his face, and the boy continued writing something in his notebook. A bald and bearded man arrives and says it was time to change shifts, notifying Dallin. Dallin puts away his notebook, then asks if something had happened, and the man replies that no, everything was very quiet as not even a single goblin had appeared. They continue talking about the weather and why the creatures were no longer appearing while Dallin starts getting ready. However, the horse-drawn carriage passes over a stone, causing the bald man who was drinking to spit out his drink. Dallin finishes preparing and wishes his friend a good rest, then leaves. The man wipes the liquid he had spit out and the one in his mouth, only wishing Dallin good work. As the boy leaves the carriage, he is greeted with good morning by several people around. We see that the carriages from before are arriving at a huge city, and Dallin begins to explain that 2 years ago, he started the tutorial of this game. He informs that the starting point of this game is known as the Bastion of Humanity and was called the Labyrinth City Pagan. Looking at the huge castle and all the structures, the boy says that it was on a completely different level from what he saw through his computer screen. Walking towards the gates, the boy adds that it was a huge city with many people and also the only safe way to go to the underground labyrinth. Dallin says there is no other path but this one that allows avoiding the monsters appearing in the labyrinth, which holds numerous treasures buried inside. Concluding that moreover, at the lowest part of the labyrinth, there is an object called the Stone of Wish that grants a wish. He thinks that honestly this was probably the only way to return to his land, and to confirm if the stone really existed, he would need to descend to the end of the labyrinth. However, catching his attention, an unknown person calls him by his name from behind. The said person was the same noble from last time, who, upon being greeted by Dallin, said the boy didn't need to be so formal. As Dallin approached, it was noticeable that our protagonist was much taller than the man, and Bulkma mentioned that they were companions and thus didn't need formality. Our protagonist assumed that the man wanted something, and the noble was surprised, saying Dallin had a keen perception, which was why he liked the boy. With all of his elegance, Bulkma said he had something to offer and asked if Dallin would be willing to join his emporium as his personal mercenary. Hearing this, Dallin was somewhat confused because he thought he had never seen such an event in that game before. Bulkma said his merchant instincts told him that although there were numerous superhumans who flew and crawled in this labyrinth city, he was sure that our protagonist would soon be on the same level as them. The boy asked if the noble was trying to hire him before that happened, and the dwarf confirmed. He emphasized that this would also be advantageous for our protagonist, asking once more if the boy would accept the offer. However, unexpectedly the boy refused, and then the dwarf began to pull something from his jacket, saying he knew this would happen. The man took out a bag of coins, saying it was the commission fee, 15 shillings. Dallin was confused, noting that his commission fee was 10 shillings, and he even thought he would receive less since he joined halfway, but Bulkma said the rest was an investment. Bulkma concluded by saying he wanted to solidify his relationship with a talented warrior, and our protagonist smiled, hearing the man. To finalize the negotiation, the dwarf asked the boy not to ignore him in the future, and he accepted, saying it sounded good. The boy extended his hand to greet and say goodbye, saying he would see Dallin later. Dallin extended his hand, returning the gesture to the noble and smiling at him, realizing that the man truly seemed like a good person, and the conversation ended with a handshake. Later that day, when it was about to get dark and the sun was setting, we see several people walking through the streets of the labyrinth city. Our protagonist was one of them, and the boy seemed confused, immersed in his thoughts, ignoring everyone around him. He recalled the offer the noble had made, thinking that during his gameplay he had never seen anything like it. The boy thought he had never seen such an event before, which meant that the game's events could change depending on his actions. Dallin concluded that it was a very tempting offer, but as soon as he arrived there, he already had something to do because it was all predetermined. The boy continued walking through various streets, alleys, and suburbs of the city. Our protagonist even passed through poorer areas and finally arrived at a place with a sign. The boy looked at the establishment and confidently said he had come to the right place, then walked to the door. Dallin opened it, and upon entering, we see it was a bar with many people talking and drinking. Some mercenaries were discussing their missions and laughing while celebrating. Others were stressed about something, taking out all their anger and hatred on the drink and alcohol, and some were already drunk sleeping. Looking at the whole situation, surprisingly, Dallin was happy, saying this was definitely the place he desired. Walking and looking around, he began to explain that a little after the start of the game, but something caught his attention, and looking to the side, the boy saw something shiny that surprised him. Our protagonist opened a malicious smile, showing some sharp teeth upon seeing what he had seen. Looking at the bright light, he saw it was a kind of ghostly corpse that was translucent. The system screen appeared, saying the boy had discovered the pathetic soldier's corpse, and we see that the person had been killed there by dagger attacks. The system informed that if the boy collected the body, he could inherit the abilities as well as the skills and items of the dead person. Smiling and staring at it, our protagonist began to think, wondering what the best weapon to deal with that ridiculously difficult game would be. He extended his hand, and all the green energy began to flow into his arm, and the boy collected the corpse, saying he would reach the end of this game no matter what. We see our protagonist using the computer, saying he liked challenging games. While adjusting his peripherals, the boy mentions he enjoyed the controllability commonly referred to as physics, and for that reason, he got bored with very easy games. However, this game was difficult even for him as he stared at his monitor and watched his character get shredded by a huge ogre. Looking at the game over screen, he adds that the main character was weak, and besides that, the monsters were extremely strong. The world inside the game was heading towards ruin. Every allied NPC was either seduced by demons or busy trying to stab him in the back. Drinking energy drinks to stay awake day after day, he says he died about 100 times but was determined to see the end of this game one way or another. Then a system notification appears asking if the player would like to buy the selected items, giving the option of yes or no. Seeing this, our protagonist gets annoyed but says he would spend that money while wondering what kind of cursed game charges to reach the end. Then moving his mouse to the yes button and clicking, he adds that he would have uninstalled it if not for the amount of time he had invested in the game. But in his current life, the boy bangs a mug of meat against the table while sighing, saying he should have just uninstalled that game. Looking to the side, the boy stares at the translucent corpse on the floor while other people continue drinking in the bar. Still staring at the figure, the boy says that luckily he was sure other people couldn't see it. That was called downloaded content or hair, a feature where a new character could inherit the abilities of the main character who died in the last round. And for players who died hundreds of times, this opened up the possibility of infinite growth. Leaving some coins on the counter to pay for the drink he had consumed, the boy gets up saying there was just one flaw in that system. It was that he had to personally go to the place where a body died and collect the corpse yourself. As he stands up and faces the corpse, still hesitant and somewhat incredulous about everything that was suddenly happening in his life, the boy extends his hand. He uses the ability to collect the corpse, and then all the green aura that was around begins to move towards Dallin. Dallin starts being surrounded by all the green aura while observing all that happening to him. Absorbing the aura that surrounded him, his strength, proficiency, and everything he was entitled to begin to increase. However, something he didn't expect appears, and the boy gets a little confused looking in one direction. The system notifies him that he had discovered a skill called Dehaemon's Armed Combat and then informs what that skill did. Looking at his hand that had a purple energy ball, the boy closes it using this skill and wonders how that character had this ability. But ignoring this fact, the boy smiles, saying it was all great while thinking about the possibilities that would give him. The man says his business there was over and so he would leave, but person sitting at one of the tables turns their attention to Dallin. Next to his henchman, the crime boss says he had never seen Dallin's face and that the boy seemed like a mercenary, so he asks what brought the boy there. The man asks Dallin if he knew the business ethics of that place, and the boy asks what he was talking about. Still a little drunk, the bandit says that the business ethics were a money fee that Dallin should transfer to him and Maroon, the manager of that inn. Maroon continues saying that as long as the man was there, he could eat and drink safely, and hearing that, Dallin interprets it as a threat. Our protagonist, hearing what the mercenary was saying, looks at a dagger in the same's pocket and recognizes it. Remembering the corpse he had just absorbed, the boy recalls that this was the bastard who had killed him before. However, to the bandit's misfortune, Dallin says that unfortunately he had no money to give, and the man gets irritated asking if the boy really had nothing. Maroon imposingly goes up close to our protagonist, staring at him with a murderous aura. His henchman next to him, a muscular bald man, tries to go after the man, but Maroon stops him saying that it was alright and he would let Dallin go. The bandit questions Dallin if the boy had paid for the alcohol, and the boy confirms. Trying to act the good guy, the boy says the boy should go his way, and he would make an exception and let the boy go. Dallin calmly turns to open the door, not noticing that behind him, Maroon has an extremely psychotic aura. The bandit begins to draw his dagger, and with a threatening aura, charges at our protagonist. The boy seemed unaware of what was coming, only looking ahead as he was about to open the door. However, turning with an even more frightening aura, Dallin says he already knew about it and counterattacks the man. Outside the bar, people are going about their lives normally as they walk the streets that night. When everyone least expects it, the bar door opens and Maroon comes flying out from our protagonist's strike, ripping the door off and being thrown far away. The bandit, upon being thrown, hits his head and back against the wall on the other side of the street, falling to the ground and becoming dazed. Dallin, while cracking his neck, says he wouldn't fall for that failed tactic twice and curses the bandit. Still somewhat dazed and irritated, Maroon orders all the bandits inside the establishment to attack, and thus several armed people surround Dallin. The bandits, seeing the size of our protagonist, question whether he was really a normal person and if he had come from somewhere up north. The boy feels somewhat embarrassed, just scratching his face and looking around at all his pursuers. However, showing a darker side, the boy smiles, thinking there was a new skill and that this was a great time to test it. Without any fear, the boy drops his sword and shield on the ground, cracking his knuckles and intending to fight with bare fists. In a haughty and mocking manner, he makes a signal indicating that all the bandits could attack him, provoking them. Seeing the man's attitude, everyone charges at the boy, stating he was arrogant, and then advances against him. One of the bandits wielding a small blade leaps at our protagonist, saying the boy should die. But Dallin was merely concentrating a purple aura in his hand, waiting for the bandit to come into the lion's den. Then, when the man was about to hit him, he opens his fist one last time, closing it immediately afterward and striking the bandit's stomach. With the strong impact, the man is instantly repelled, being thrown meters away, already unconscious and probably dead. Seeing that, the other bandits, even finding it frightening, immediately charge at Dallin, and two of them have two blades ready to kill the boy. A bald man tries to attack with a sword, but the boy quickly dodges and then counterattacks, throwing the man away. The other bandit manages to land his attack with a wooden club, but realizes the club broke without leaving a scratch on his opponent. The bandana-wearing man, seeing it had no effect, wonders how a human's body could be as hard as iron while becoming worried. Dallin takes advantage of this distraction and also strikes the man with the back of his fist in the belly, knocking him out immediately. Seeing the bandits charging at him, our protagonist does only one thing. He smiles wickedly because he knew he could win. Maroon, who was completely beaten on the other side of the street, gets irritated, saying he pays the bandits to obey, so they should finish that guy immediately. Even hesitating upon hearing their boss's order, a blonde man immediately attacks Dallin from behind, trying to stab the boy with a blade. However, before he could see it, Dallin immediately spins his body, hitting his opponent's chin squarely with his heel. And while his partner fell to the ground, another bandit charges to attack the boy with a dagger. However, this time Dallin manages to defend himself just in time, creating a dust cloud that makes it impossible to see anything for a few seconds. When the dust settles, we can see that Dallin managed to catch the man's dagger with his own hands, injuring his fist in the process. Immediately, while preventing his attacker's movement, the boy retorts with a full punch to the guy's face, who wondered how he had caught the dagger with his hand. Upon receiving the impact of the blow, the man also goes rolling backward, meters away, already unconscious. Dallin seems unhappy, complaining that it was crap, also wiping the dust off his chest. Looking at the bodies of the defeated bandits around him, he explains he was only trying to grab the man's wrist. That must have happened because the skill proficiency was low. Seeing his stats, Dallin realizes his skill Dehaemon's armed combat had only increased by 1% proficiency, saying the game was damn hard. Looking back, a bald person appears, asking the boy what he had done, catching his attention. The bartender accuses Dallin, stating that the boy was beating people up in broad daylight, and that even if he was a mercenary, it was not allowed. However, our protagonist had no patience for conversation, and thinking that the man was threatening him at this point, the boy draws an axe. The bartender continues complaining, saying that if the guards found out about this, you wouldn't get away unscathed, and before he could realize it, an axe flies in his direction. The bald man only manages to see the object hitting near his head, becoming completely terrified. Our protagonist then apologizes, saying that it had slipped from his hand by accident. He walks up to the bald man, removing the axe that had gotten stuck in the wood, and the boy remains nervous. With a murderous aura and the axe in his hands, he asks the bartender what the man was saying. At night, near a cabin, we see Dallin tossing a bag of gold into the air. The boy says that before threatening someone, you should know who your enemy is, and since the guy was the innkeeper, he had made a lot of money. As he walks through the city streets, he adds that with this he could stay in a good place without worrying about anything. Already in a few meters away, the receptionist welcomes our protagonist, saying that this was the Sword and Shield Inn. The man asks the boy how long he plans to stay because this inn even offers discounts depending on his mercenary rank. Dallin then says he would stay for a week and pulls out his silver necklace from his pocket, informing that he was a silver rank mercenary. The receptionist explains that since he was silver rank, breakfast and lunch would be completely free, but dinner would be extra, and the price of the bowl was 7 shillings. Looking at the bag of coins, the boy feels somewhat disappointed, thinking that it was still expensive. However, with few options, he leaves the coins on the counter and then heads to his room, number 412. Upon arriving there, the boy removes all of his armor and weapons, placing them on his bed. The boy goes to the window to look at the moon in the sky and says that this was the true beginning because the most important thing before completing the game was survival. Dallin continues immersed in his thoughts, thinking that to prevent this world from collapsing, he would have to become stronger, and for that, he would need money and experience. But unfortunately, with his current equipment and skills, that would be practically impossible. He needed money to buy good equipment and had to level up to use the hair skill. Thanks to his countless rounds, the corpses of his characters are scattered throughout the entire continent, and this would allow him to evolve exponentially. Clenching his fists, determined with his desire, the boy concludes that if he collected all the corpses, he could become extremely stronger than before. While imagining the creatures in that world, he notes that time was short, and he would have to prepare as quickly as possible. Thinking more deeply, the boy tries to find a special mission where he can earn money and collect corpses, simultaneously exploring the country. The boy finishes by saying that for this, he would have to meet the owner of the nest the next day. In another place, you can see the establishment with a logo of a raven. Inside this place, everything is illuminated by a purple light, while on a table there are various equipment, books, and magical potions. A beautiful girl rests part of her face on her hand while she says the name Dallin. Reading some papers, we see that the girl was sitting in a chair near a table, reading a specific paper with information about our protagonist. The next day, the sun finally rises, shining on the whole hotel and other apartments in the labyrinth city. The man in charge of the hotel reception wishes our protagonist a safe journey, and the boy quickly leaves the place. Looking around and still a bit confused, the boy asks himself if he should go now or wait for a more appropriate moment. He starts walking through the streets and suburbs of the city, heading to the location he wanted to visit. After some walking, he finally sees the Raven logo and says it looks like he has arrived. Looking at the establishment, everything was completely run down, even overtaken by vines that were growing, and Dallin remarks that it was very neglected. Entering without asking anyone, the boy asks if there was anyone there, and it's possible to see that it looked like a bar illuminated by a purple magic crystal. Searching the establishment, Dallin notes that the door was open, but the owner of the nest didn't seem to be there. Something catches his attention, and he diverts his gaze to a door, saying it might be an uninvited guest. Behind the door, the same girl from the previous day was hiding the crossbow, and when the boy notices this, he says he has to clear up the misunderstanding. The boy goes to the door he entered and knocks with a secret code that only he and a few specific people knew. Hearing this, the girl remains silent for a while, then sighs and realizes what it is. Before opening the door, she asks how many times she has to say it, and as she opens the door, she says that outside business hours, one should only come if it's urgent. Upon seeing our protagonist, she notices that the boy is much taller than her and comments that she has never seen him before. Sighing, the boy says that the girl needs to expand her customer base to do well in business, as this place should be thriving, and the girl remains silent. Smiling the hint of mockery, she explains that she is quite capable and that the boy talks a lot for a customer from the north. She rephrases and asks how a savage dares to hint at someone like her, then asks if the boy understands, and Dallin confirms. The boy says it wouldn't be good if he were just a savage who migrated at the age of 2, and the girl is a bit confused by the phrase. He explains that he was civilized from an early age, and unlike an informant, she wasn't very good at foreign languages. Hearing this, the girl laughs despite trying to hold it back, saying the boy is a disappointment. The girl apologizes, commenting that she didn't expect to be fooled in such a gentlemanly manner. She turns around, smiling, and walks back to where she was, saying that since our protagonist is a customer, he will be served tea. As she turns, our protagonist notices the girl holding a crossbow and feels a bit nervous, sweating. He thinks that his chest was almost pierced, and with a knowing smile, the girl simply ignores him. Inside, the girl serves tea to Dallin, saying that even if he has heard about her, they should introduce themselves. She introduces herself as Sienna, stating that she works as a simple informant for the Raven's Nest, but is actually the owner of the place. The boy introduces himself as Dallin, saying he heard that he could accept various types of missions there. As she sits across from him, the girl confirms that he can take missions if he wants, but asks how the boy discovered that place. The boy replies that it was Bulkma who told him, and he also said that if she offers alcohol, he could drink, but if she offers tea, not to drink it. Irritated, the girl says that the man's tongue is too loose and asks if our protagonist saved his life, to which the boy says it was something like that. She explains that the code the boy used to knock on the door is something only truly close people know, so she tried to take precautions. The boy says that collateral damage is too great for a simple concern, but changing the subject, the girl asks if he wants a mission. She explains that even with everything, she still doesn't know the boy, whether close to Bulkma or not, so this is the first time they're meeting. And for now, the only thing the girl can do is give trivial missions, things that wouldn't have much impact on her business even if the boy fails. Smiling, the boy says it's okay since this is their first meeting, and the girl also smiles. Smiling, the girl says she should witness the abilities of the almighty warrior who tore apart a goblin with his bare hands. In another place, in a more remote part of the city resembling a slum, Dallin is seen reading some information on a flyer he received. He says that the girl is like a fox and that "I don't know you yet" talk was all lies. From the moment he arrived in the city, the girl already had information on who he was before he even thought of going there. After some walking, the boy steps into a part of the city's sewer and notices something. That was the lower street in the Bronze Territory's outskirts, and realizing he was in the right place, the boy starts to analyze. It seems there was an incident of missing people on that street, and that's why he received the mission to go there. Apparently, several disappearance cases have been occurring over an entire month in the same place, the entrance to Low Street. The boy begins to enter and search the area, while it is also explained that these incidents happen every 3 to 5 days. Recently, however, a young man disappeared, so the criminal seems to be getting bolder. Our protagonist then enters the sewer. Looking around, Dallin comments that it was written that the last disappearance happened there, and so the boy begins to investigate. Something catches his attention, and looking ahead, he sees the shadow of a monster talking about its stomach. The creature resembled a human but was walking on all fours and acting like an animal. Dallin then draws his shield and sword, preparing for combat, but something catches his attention when he sees the monster. He realizes that this humanoid creature, which resembled a rat, was the bastard that had devoured one of his bodies. The system notifies that Dallin had discovered the body of the hunter who was devoured as a form of test. The system also hints that our protagonist could inherit the bodies that were eaten or absorbed by someone by defeating the target that consumed it. Dallin faces the beast and notices that the monster has various veins on its back and a monstrous appearance. Seeing this, the boy smiles, saying he wouldn't have imagined finding his target so quickly. The boy assumes he's lucky, and the notification explains that if he defeats the target and absorbs it, he will acquire the powers of the corpse the monster ate. Raising his shield to defend himself, the boy comments that the monster is either a low-level half-monster or a low-level boss. Recalling his first battle against the beast, he notes that the rat originally had the size of an ogre and could easily destroy buildings. The creature, in a frightening and terrifying manner, says it didn't have much to eat today and was hungry since the small meals no longer affected its stomach. Taking a battle stance, Dallin comments that since it's the beginning of the game, it seems this creature is still developing and unfinished. Realizing this, our protagonist says it's better this way since he wouldn't face the monster at its full strength, making things easier. With a wicked smile, Dallin says he can cut the monster down before it reaches its strongest level. Irritated and already without human consciousness, the beast, with furious eyes and teeth, charges our protagonist and his life. It runs towards Dallin with its sharp and gigantic claws, ready to tear him apart, trying to attack the boy. However, Dallin is already prepared and easily dodges the attack by stepping back. He takes advantage of the stop to quickly strike his opponent with a kick to the stomach. The beast is thrown meters away by the attack, causing extreme damage to its belly. The monster hits its head against a sewer wall, becoming extremely injured and dazed. The creature turns to look at Dallin, and we see that the wound had crushed part of the beast's skull. However, a disgusting pink slime begins to form on the wound, regenerating it immediately. Seeing that his enemy had regenerated, the boy becomes extremely irritated, realizing the monster was still very strong. Quickly and without hesitation, the monster turns, ready to attack again, charging at our protagonist to kill him. However, without mercy, the boy uses his sword to try to cut the monster in half, but only manages to leave a wound in its stomach. The furious beast screams in pain while our protagonist realizes his attack hadn't been deep enough. Still groaning in pain, the half-human monster contorts, trying to hold the blood pouring from its stomach. Seeing his enemy kneeling before him, the boy raises his sword to finish him off and end the fight. Unexpectedly, with tears in its eyes, the monster begs our protagonist to stop because it was a person. Hearing this, the boy is completely confused, asking if the monster is okay now, and the person responds affirmatively. Crying, the beast says it didn't do it because it wanted to, while sobbing with tears streaming from its eye. He continues crying in despair, saying he didn't want to eat people and that a certain type of people put this beast inside him. Our protagonist asks who these people are. The monster responds that he doesn't know either and that they wore black robes and masks. The monster adds that these people used some strange potions and spells to transform him into this, and Dallin asks what the masks look like. Still crying over everything that happened, the beast explains that they were made of gold with a smooth surface and a large painted mouth. Hearing this, Dallin remembers something and says that as time passes, these people will give him more headaches. That's why he better be prepared to face them, and suddenly the monster starts to despair, asking how he could do this to people. The boy responds that it wasn't his fault, leaving the monster surprised and somewhat distressed. He adds that the people who turned the boy into that are the main culprits, so he doesn't need to worry. Dallin further states that he will make them all disappear, and for some reason, the monster starts to writhe. As he stands up, our protagonist thanks and sheaths his sword, thanking the monster once more. Still in tears and crying, the man says that those people fed him the flesh of his own daughter. And as the boy walks away, the monster continues talking about how they forced him to eat open-mouthed, consuming flesh, muscles, and intestines. But something changes in him, and his aura reverts to what it was, making him extremely aggressive and frightening, saying he is hungry. The beast lapses back into madness, and then tries to attack Dallin again, charging at the boy while his back is turned. Realizing what had happened, the boy bites his lips, becoming extremely irritated, and draws his sword. Before the monster could reach him, as an act of saving it from this suffering, the boy turns and uses his sword to finish it off. The beast's head instantly flies meters away while the half-human body falls into the sewer water. The system notifies that the boy had eliminated the monster that had swallowed his corpse, and thus he had discovered a new body. Dallin observes his former corpse and the monster's body lying in the water, cursing the world while the system asks if he wants to absorb it. We return to the raven's nest when it was already late afternoon and the sun was starting to set. Inside, we see the beautiful girl asking our protagonist if he had returned to the inn. The boy enters the place with an irritated and downcast expression, so the girl asks if he wants a drink. Without much conversation, Dallin throws a bag that was in his hands on the table, stating that he had captured the man they were looking for. The woman opens the bag and, seeing what was inside, has a disgusted look but says nothing. Seeing this, she realizes that tearing a goblin apart wasn't a lie and says she now has no doubt that Bulkwa's words were serious after all. Sienna takes a bag of coins from behind the counter and says that anyway, he did a good job and thus pays the 15 shillings. With a somewhat embarrassed face, the girl says the boy completed the job faster than she expected, but that doesn't mean he'll get more. Still saddened by the situation he saw, the boy says that amount was more than enough for a single trip. He also pulls out another bag from his pockets and places it on the counter, leaving Sienna intrigued and questioning what it was. With a cold expression, he explains that what's in the bag are the belongings of the murdered victims, leaving the girl confused and somewhat scared. Looking at it, the girl questions what she should do since he was handing it to her, and Dallin explains that he wanted her to give it to their families. Dallin offers to pay, but the girl says she is not an informant who extorts money using some excuse, and the boy could keep the money she would make. Smiling more relieved as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders for the girl's kind act, Dallin thanks Sienna. He turns and begins to leave, saying he will see her tomorrow, and the girl, irritated, responds that for the 10th time, he should come during business hours. Dallin retorts that he would think about it if she offered him a drink instead of tea to try to kill him. Proud and somewhat happy, she sighs while watching the boy leave, realizing he had a good heart. Watching all this, she asks if it was really serious since this wasn't the action of a typical mercenary who only cares about himself. Sienna also says that he doesn't seem like a man who would simply be driven by a sense of justice and be stupid, getting a bit interested while looking at the bag. The girl sighs once more, saying that he's a very interesting mercenary. She says she is sure Dallin is capable of everything she commands, and already at night, we return to the inn where our protagonist was. At the inn, the boy is writing something again in his notebook. We discover that it was Dallin's diary, and he was reporting that he eliminated a demi-demon that would later become a disaster and even recover a corpse. He activates his stats window, beginning to analyze it, seeing that he had already gained a new skill called night vision. Noticing that his stats had increased exponentially, the boy says that, as he thought, he should recover as many corpses as possible as quickly as possible. This is the cost if he wants to repair the future world scenario that is approaching. There are various situations that will happen soon, such as a coven of witches who will burn a city and kill many citizens. There's also the mystery of the cultists who are trying to do something and are hiding while conducting experiments and manipulating people. An army of vampires is invading the empire, wanting to bring it to ruin and destroy it completely. And finally, the evil god, the worst being that exists, and the enemy of everything in that world. He remembers the monster talking about the masks of the people who did that to him. Dallin closes his diary with a bang, extremely irritated with the situation, standing up and saying he will do what he can for now. The secret cult society of Palacin, if left alone, will eventually become a presence that cannot be ignored. But before that happens, he opens a wicked smile and adds that he will dismantle them member by member and defeat them. The next morning, we see the Raven's Tavern, where our protagonist picks up his missions. Inside, a bartender is cleaning some glass cups when something behind him catches his attention. Dallin arrives and sits on a small chair in front of the counter, asking the bartender for a glass of whiskey. The man quickly nods and rings a bell near him, then hands our protagonist the drink, which he quickly consumes. However, surprising the boy, Sienna appears, asking how long he will ignore the instructions to come only during business hours. Dallin responds that if there's a customer and a bartender, it's business hours, and the girl says the boy is talking too much. Our protagonist asks the woman who he has to kill that day, but she replies that the boy isn't going to kill anyone. Sienna points to her office and says he needs to go in now because they need to talk about something. The boy is a bit hesitant, not understanding what the woman meant by talk. She turns and starts entering her office, saying that a specific job has come for a certain person. The girl calls him the low-path hunter and then enters her office, laughing. Inside the office, Dalen asks who this low-path hunter is and what the girl wanted to say about it. Sienna, while serving tea, asks if the boy didn't know that was his new nickname. Because he was running through the low paths and alleys, catching wanted people, that nickname was given to him. Sienna adds that it's no wonder he earned that nickname, while Dalen remembers the missions he's been doing these days. The woman also says that he spent almost every day of the last week doing the work that others avoid because it's dirty and dangerous. Dalen retorts, saying that there must be many other bounty hunters there besides him, but the girl replies that he was standing out. Changing the subject, the man asks about the job he received, and the woman turns, going to the wall and picking up some papers. With papers in her hands, she shakes them, smiling, saying that it's his present. Reading, he looks somewhat surprised and says the phrase magic tower, confused by what he's reading. Sienna confirms his suspicions, stating that the magic tower of Elgaia's in the fine silver zone had hired him. The woman clarifies that she's not speaking for all of Elgaia's but for a specific, highly important mage. Dalen becomes even more confused, saying he's only been active for a week. So how did the magic tower know his name? The girl replies that one of her clients with high connections must have recommended him. Sienna says that to get the attention of the magic tower's scouts, Dalen must have had an encounter with someone of high rank, asking if the boy met someone of high rank. However, Sienna snaps her fingers, saying that someone comes to mind when she thinks of that. A silent commander of the Bronze Guards company, and hearing that, Dalen agrees, saying that's a good guess. Sienna adds that this man has connections with the magic tower, and he is someone she would also want as an ally if she could. Dalen takes the tea to drink as well, asking for the details of the job. Already in the evening, Dalen is looking at something while being illuminated by the moonlight. The request was related to the missing disciple of the elderly mage, the only disciple of that ancient mage from the magic tower of Elgaia's, who disappeared in the city's sewers. As he walks through the city's streets, he says the reward would be a florin if he found any trace of him, and double that if he brought the boy back. Smiling, he adds that mages treat their direct disciples like their own children, and if everything went well, the magic tower might owe him a favor. And so he was sure the tower would pay when the time came, and as he walks, the boy mentions that Sienna had promised a qualified guide to assist him. Then a figure surprises our protagonist, asking if he was Dalen, the low-path hunter. We see that the guide is a girl, and with a smile on her face, she says hello, stating that she would guide the boy through the sewers for this job, and her name was Penny the sewer cleaner. Upon seeing the guide, our protagonist is completely incredulous, noting that the person looked like a child. Down in the sewers, lighting the place with a torch, Dalen asks if the sewers are the foundations of this great city, and the girl responds that they are and that she takes care of everything. Our protagonist notes that the girl seemed very attached to her job, and proudly, Penny confirms that she is. Dalen tells Penny that she might encounter demons or criminals and asks if she doesn't find it dangerous, to which the girl responds that she does, but it's worth it. Sweating, impressed with the young girl's personality, our protagonist notes that she is very positive and high-spirited. Dalen also asks how long the girl has been working there, and Penny replies that it has been about 3 years. As they walk, Dalen is impressed, noting that most people don't last more than a year in that job, so the girl is a veteran. For a moment, the girl stops and says they are close to the spot marked on the map. Hearing this, Dalen diverts his attention and, looking to his side, asks if the young mage disappeared there, and the girl confirms. Then it's possible to see a vast area in the sewers filled with sculptures and unknown corners. As our protagonist explores, he notes that the missing disciple is from the magic tower of Elgaia's, who are earth mages, so the underground sewers are advantageous for them in a fight. If he was a direct disciple of the ancient mage, the boy must be highly skilled, and for someone of his caliber to be kidnapped. Then the person responsible must be that guy, as the boy looks idly in a direction, thinking and imagining someone we don't know. This person was one of the biggest nuisances among the cultists, and when he fully develops, he will be called a one-man army. However, this person is still far from the completion of his powers, and for the sake of the future, Dalen should kill him now. As he walks through the sewers, looking at the water under his feet, the boy sees a shining object and notices something. Picking it up, he realizes it's a necklace, and Penny, seeing it, responds that it's a single-use defense spell necklace given to tower disciples, and Dalen already knew that. Observing more closely, he notes that the crystal is no longer lit, meaning the spells stored inside are exhausted. In other words, this was the mage's final destination as they observe the nearby structure. Looking at a certain object, the boy becomes somewhat reflective and hesitant, thinking about what to do next. Stating an entrance, he calls Penny, and when the girl responds, he asks if she is good at fighting. Dalen stares at a specific place, stands up, and draws his sword. Penny replies that she is good enough to defend herself, and Dalen responds that's sufficient. Our protagonist prepares for a bloody battle about to begin, wielding his shield and sword. In the same hand holding his shield, the boy also holds a torch and positions himself in front of Penny. He asks the girl to stay behind him for a moment, then some beings begin to emerge from the entrance our protagonist was watching. Several monsters resembling humanoid frogs walking on two legs appear with their grotesque appearance. With their tongues out, the monsters drool as if eyeing two prey, ready to devour them. Seeing this, Dalen calls the creatures frogmen, noting that even though they are lower-level monsters, they have high intelligence, making them difficult to combat. Looking back, Dalen sees Penny wielding a knife in a combat stance and nodding, realizes he has nothing to worry about. However, immediately some frogs charge at our protagonist, aiming to kill him once and for all and accomplish their goal. In reaction right after seeing this, Dalen positions his sword for an attack. As soon as one of the monsters gets close to him and is about to attack, the boy swiftly cuts it in two before the monster can react. The other two creatures, which were behind the fallen beast, also move to attack, intending to use the moment when Dalen is distracted. However, with extreme ease and coldness in his eyes, the boy also cuts the two creatures in half, killing them instantly. Penny, however, is startled, making a face and staring at something in front of her, asking Dalen to look immediately. As Dalen pays attention ahead, he notices that one of the creatures is starting to come with a certain tool to attack. Not only that, but an army of frogmen is coming from the entrance, ready to kill Dalen and end his life. While wiping his face from the blood of one of the beasts, the boy starts to laugh, saying that maybe it's not an army, but a company there. Smiling wickedly, ready for battle, our protagonist adds that none of that matters. Preparing for battle again, this time he charges at the monsters, saying that nothing will matter after he kills all the beasts. After a while of a bloody battle, we see Penny holding her blood-stained knife, surprised by something. The girl can't even speak what she saw, and when we look around, a pile of frogmen corpses is scattered throughout the sewer. Dalen, his body completely stained with blood, asks if Penny is okay, and the girl replies that she is, thanks to our protagonist. As she approaches Dalen, the girl says she has been part of the cleaning crew for 3 years, so she can handle 2 frogmen. Suddenly, the boy asks the girl not to come closer, leaving her confused while he positions himself in front of her. Suddenly, a sword comes toward our protagonist, who barely manages to defend himself. He then throws his tool aside to draw his axe, intending to throw it. In a dark passage where nothing can be seen, the boy throws his axe, which spins towards something. It seems to hit one of the frogmen, making a monstrous noise suddenly. Penny, scared, asks how our protagonist knew there was a beast there, and he explains that monsters become more ferocious when hunting humans. Actually, the man was using his night vision ability, allowing him to see in the dark, and he notices that only 2 remain, with the last one fleeing. Penny asks what they should do, and Dalen explains that they will chase the monster since its lair is probably not far away. The woman, staring at our protagonist, feels somewhat embarrassed, saying he is extremely incredible. Dalen, noticing the girl had stopped walking, nudges her, asking what she's doing since they should go immediately, and the girl agrees. After a long walk, they reach a hidden room with a throne. Penny, still a bit scared by the situation, leans a little on Dalen and nudges the boy, pointing out that someone is sitting on the throne they are seeing. On the throne sits a mage holding a staff imposingly, and Dalen notes that it's the first time he's seen the boy in person. The pagan mage expelled from the magic tower, Derek, sitting on his throne, asks who our protagonist is and if he is the one who touched his experimental sample. Dalen thinks that the pagan mage was one of the bosses who gave him an unforgettable death, and the boy confirms to Derek that he was the one who killed the rat man because he was taking a stroll. The mage responds that the boy is lying because it's strange since normal people don't take deep strolls in the sewers as he was doing. The mage strikes his staff on the ground, making a loud noise while saying that our protagonist should not have pursued the frogs that fled to his lair. Then, from the surrounding waters, several frogmen begin to emerge. Penny, seeing this, starts trembling all over, holding her knife and looking ahead with a terrified expression. Looking around, she sees an army of various frogmen ready to tear apart and attack anyone. As she steps back, the girl says that if this is released into the city, it will cause a catastrophe, continuing with a terrified expression. However, Dalen touches her back, preventing her from moving further back, catching her attention and making her blush. Looking at Dalen, the man maintains a firm and confident expression as if wanting to reassure the girl. Seeing the protagonist, she understands that the boy can defeat as many frogmen as there are, so she doesn't need to despair. With a look of extreme psychopathy, Derek orders his frogmen to tear them both to pieces. Then, revealing they even had enormous teeth, the frogs charge ferociously to defeat Dalen and Penny. Dalen remains motionless before an army of frogs rushing towards him, ready to kill him. Holding a blood-stained sword, the boy asks Penny to stay behind him while he fights. The boy starts walking towards his opponents, reassuring Penny that he will finish this quickly. With a cold expression, Dalen states that if the conjurer dies, all the frogmen will die as well. Observing hundreds of these creatures coming at him with only a shield and a sword in his hands, he says there is only one answer. Swinging his sword with fluid and rapid movements in one direction and another, the only thing visible is the splatter of the creature's blood. One of the frogmen, about to attack Dalen, only sees his arm being cut off, groaning in pain before he can react. Still with a cold and frightening expression, our protagonist begins to shred several frogs while saying he would kill everyone in the way to get to the summoner. With just one step for momentum, the boy leaps forward, passing and eliminating several frogs without giving them a chance to react. After dashing forward, one of the frogs comes at him, opening its mouth and revealing immense sharp, pointed teeth, ready to devour our protagonist. However, quickly, with a look of disgust at the sight, the boy splits the frog's jaw in two, preventing it from attacking him. As he lands on the ground, several frogs surround the boy from all directions, not allowing him to escape. With just one hand, he prepares himself, clenching his fists, and quickly punches two of the frogs, eliminating them. He notices one of the frogs trying to attack him from behind and swiftly reacts, cutting it in two before the frog can see. The battle continues with several creatures attempting to attack our protagonist from all directions to compensate for their lack of strength and skill. But with all of Dalen's swordsmanship skills, he can easily kill most of them, but his sword breaks in the process. Due to the number of frogs attacking, even his shield falls apart, leaving the boy with bare hands. And then all the frogmen seize this opportunity to attack our protagonist, who intends to fight with his bare hands and kill all those beasts. He uses his Dahaman ability to fight with his hands, furiously stating that he would finish off all those damn frogs. Several beasts continue trying to hit our protagonist, who with only his fists crushes their skulls and stomachs. Throughout the fight, the boy maintains a cold expression, only clenching his fists and staining them with the blood of his victims, showing no mercy. With a single blow to the stomach of one of the frogmen, he can throw it against the other creatures, sending them flying. Derek the wizard, upon seeing this, is terrified, seeing that the boy was very powerful and seems psychopathic. Seeing his summons being torn apart by a man with bare hands, he wonders where such a monster had come from. Looking ahead, the pagan wizard does not notice Dalen advancing towards him with an axe in his hands, ready to finish him off. When he realizes it is too late and even trying to defend himself with his staff, he fails. A purple trail of energy can be seen moving from top to bottom, following Dalen's motion with the axe. After the dust settles, we see that our protagonist has landed a full blow to the pagan wizard's skull, who still utters his last words. Seeing that he had accomplished his goal, Dalen sighs in relief, realizing that everything was over. A notification appears with the wizard's death, indicating that he had discovered the body of a mercenary who had become a pagan wizard. Our protagonist remembers the moment he fought and was absorbed by Derek, who had dragon blood in his body and was used for experiments. Dalen adds, saying that thinking about it now, that scene was extremely horrific, cursing the corpse lying before him. Then the system asks if he wanted to absorb the body to acquire its skills and stats. Our protagonist then stretches out his hand, opening his fist, and uses corpse gathering to increase his stats. With green energy flowing through his body, all of his stats begin to increase, especially sense energy and mana. He also gains an ability called Dragon Blood Regeneration, which he had obtained in his former body, and he is already at 6% proficiency. Bulge on our protagonist, and the boy starts to feel something flowing through him, causing extreme pain. A golden aura starts to spread across Dalen's body, making him appear covered in a gold-like energy. Everyone in the room, including Penny and the frogmen, are incredulous, not understanding what is happening. For a moment, the boy remains still, feeling all this energy flowing through his body, making him extremely powerful. With confidence, the boy turns, drawing the attention of the frogmen and asking if they are ready for what is about to happen. After showing his new strength, all the frogs stare at our protagonist, trembling with fear. Fearing what would happen, they immediately flee before they can be killed. Seeing this, Dalen sighs a bit, closing his eyes and thinking about something. However, his thought is interrupted by Penny calling his name, and the boy opens his eyes to see the girl. The boy walks up to Penny, saying he told her to stay away, and she runs, asking if Dalen is okay. A bit frightened by everything that happened before her eyes, Penny asks if the boy is really human, and the boy asks what she means. Penny starts to say that even though the boy is human, not everyone is like Dalen, as he killed dozens of frogs with just his hands. Dalen asks what she thinks about something, and the girl doesn't understand the question, asking back why he suddenly asked that. Our protagonist responds that he only asked because he had nothing else to say, and the girl agrees but says she wanted to say something. Embarrassed, touching the tips of her fingers, she says that even though it's the first time they've met, he is different from all the other people she has known. Extremely shy, the girl says that being near him makes her feel he could do anything. She says she doesn't care if Dalen is human or not, as what matters is that the boy is himself, but Dalen interrupts, asking her to wait. With a slightly embarrassed expression, the boy says he wasn't talking about her thoughts. He wanted to know what she thought about where the pagan mage hid the hostages, leaving the girl completely red like a tomato. The girl gets irritated, saying that if he doesn't explain what he's asking, she won't understand. Elsewhere, in a church with an upside-down cross sculpture, we see some people talking. Four hooded figures are conversing, and one of them says the reason for urgently calling this apostles' meeting is because Derek has died. All the others are shocked, and one of them asks how a powerful pagan mage like him could have been killed. The mage conducting the meeting says that even though he was the last to be admitted, he wasn't the type of person who could be easily killed. One of the masked figures asks what happened to him and the army of 500 frogmen. Unexpectedly, leaving everyone in the room incredulous, the man responds that half the army was killed. He also explains that the rest fled in fear, and that's how Derek died. One of them asks if it was the guards who did this. Other masked figures also ask if it could have been someone linked to the Silent Company, but they also receive a no as an answer. The mage conducting the meeting says it was done by a single person, leaving one of the masked figures in shock. They continue talking, wondering why the bastard Derek kidnapped a direct apprentice of the elder mage, but an apostle enters the room. All the other masked figures their bow, greeting the great apostle responsible for everything. The man wears a mask like all the others with a smile, but unlike the rest, he walks with an elegant and imposing posture, showing his power. He walks to the center, sits on his throne, and says that the reason he called them there was to say not to fear, just a mercenary. The masked woman who was previously worried asks if it was really a mercenary who single-handedly killed an army of monsters. However, the chief apostle tells her to shut up immediately, making the woman scared. The great apostle explains that he has moved up the date of the grand plan because Derek's death doesn't mean their plans will change. One of the apostles, hearing that the grand plan will be put into action, realizes that this means something significant. Then the chief of all says to release the funds to buy ingredients for the secret drug and bring those who can wield weapons. Irritated, he adds that if things don't go well, they should pressure everyone with the power of the economy since that is the reason they're increasing their power. The man says that nothing has changed and that the order of evil will begin with them, and the day when the 7 walls collapse is not far off. He orders everyone to prepare for the day the 7 walls will fall while all the other apostles continue listening, bowed before their master. Elsewhere, after a long time, we see a magic tower in Algaias at a bronze branch. Looking at an extremely fancy clock, watching the hours pass, we see Dallin sitting in a comfortable armchair. The boy remembers Sienna saying that the person who had given the mission wanted to see him personally to give him extra compensation. Happy, Galen continues looking around, saying there's nothing wrong with him receiving an additional reward, and that's why he's there. Bored and with no one calling him yet, the boy opens his status window, making it appear immediately. He begins to read about the skill he had acquired, Dragon Blood Regeneration. Regeneration, one of the many characteristics that come from Dragon Blood, was applied to humans but consumes a lot of stamina to use. In the sewer, he slept for a day as soon as he returned from the mission, and it seems he doesn't have full Dragon Blood in his body, only partially. The boy calculates that it would be impossible to use that skill continuously in a fight without exhausting himself completely. Suddenly, a man with red hair and a large beard enters the room, saying he had kept the guest waiting unintentionally. This person was Felver Valentino, the ancient mage of the Magic Tower of Algaias. He apologizes as it has been a while since he was last at the Magic Tower, so he had to catch up. Felver says he will ask for a cup of tea and asks if Dallin would like some, to which the boy replies yes. The ancient mage says something, but our protagonist immediately ignores it, starting to smell something he hadn't smelled in years. He smells coffee, and upon looking at the cup, he realizes it's really what he was hoping for, becoming completely happy to see it. The boy starts drinking it immediately, loving it, and then the noble elder says that based on the boy's appearance, he didn't expect him to like tea. While drinking, Felver, the elder, comments that if it's okay with the mercenary, he will send a bag of beans to the raven's nest, and the boy agrees, thanking him. The man apologizes for the inconvenience and introduces himself as an elder mage of the Magic Tower of Algaias, as well as a grandmaster of the arts. He's also Tommy's teacher, the person Dallin saved, so the boy recalls the moment he saved the boy, asking Felver if he is well. Felver thanks Dallin and mentions that Tommy is only well because of him. Our protagonist asks if he knew why the pagan mage went down there. The ancient mage explains that the villain coincidentally found his apprentice and followed his tracks. Looking at his reflection, Felver says that his apprentice didn't know that Derek's strategy was to reach him. Again, the great elder thanks him for defeating the army of frogmen alone and says he couldn't believe Dallin was just a silver-rank mercenary. Dallin replies that he shouldn't judge people just by an identification plate, and the mage agrees as everyone has their own story. The man throws a bag full of coins on the table, saying that is the reward, and it contains 100 silver coins equivalent to 1 gold coin. With a confident face, the mage adds that he will also reward him with something extra, picking something up. He places a beautifully crafted bag on the table, saying that is the present. The mage explains that inside it is a regeneration potion, and he thought that since our protagonist is a sword-wielding warrior, it would be useful. But the mage adds that he thinks Dallin won't need it anymore since he has dragon blood inside him, making our protagonist startled. Seeing Dallin's reaction, the mage quickly asks the boy to calm down as he's not there to threaten him, but to make an offer. Irritated and almost ready to attack, the boy tries to calm down, asking what the mage's offer is. Felver, with a completely different face and posture, offers our protagonist the chance to choose a different reward. At sunset, after a long conversation, we see Dallin leaving the place. He remembers Felver saying that the boy chose the right thing, so Dallin says that it's probably better than the potion. As he leaves, our protagonist remarks that he never imagined that the mage was so skilled that he could even recognize dragon blood in his body. Our protagonist also recalls the moment he finished fighting the mage and saw his axe shattered. Dallin feels somewhat sad as it was his last tool since his sword and shield were also destroyed. Penny notes that he can't do anything more with those and says Dallin needs to buy new ones, catching the girl's attention. A bit embarrassed, the girl says her uncle is a blacksmith and asks if Dallin wants to visit him because since the boy is special, she will ask her uncle to give him a good discount. In the present moment, the boy sighs, saying that if he's going to get a good discount, he should go there since he has no other option. Far away, we see the Forge Street in the Bronze territory, with many people walking around. As he walks and looks around, Alan says he thinks the girl gave him that location, but he isn't sure. However, he hears someone shouting for help, and when he looks in that direction, he is confronted with an unbelievable sight. He sees someone being thrown out of the forge Penny had told him about, hands tied behind their back. Inside the forge, a blonde man had thrown the person out after kicking him, saying the old man was screwing everything up. The blacksmith begs them to leave his niece Penny alone and curses the bastards. Seeing the situation, Dallin realizes what's happening and notices that the man is the girl's uncle. The man who was assaulting the blacksmith leaves the forge, saying that the man should have repaid the interest on time. The blonde thug says that if the blacksmith doesn't have money, he could use his niece to pay the debt, causing Penny to despair. Trying to get up, a bit hurt from the fall, the blacksmith tells the thug that if he continues saying those things, he will make him pay with his mouth. Our protagonist watches the fight from afar, observing the entire situation and realizing something. The blacksmith Penny mentioned is named Leveron Araquin, a well-known mithril refiner. Our protagonist explains that by the second half of the game, this blacksmith develops exponentially and creates the greatest weapons for humanity. He is a very important NPC blacksmith, necessary for the strategy in the second half of the game. Returning to the present moment, the blonde man draws a sharp knife and says the man could pay with one of his hands. However, someone firmly grasps his wrist and the man gets irritated, asking who is doing that. Our protagonist snatches the sword from the thug's hand, saying that if an old man's hand costs a gold coin, how much would a young man's hand cost? The last thing we hear is the thug's scream echoing through the city, and some time passes. We see a mug of beer on a table, and the blacksmith thanks our protagonist for saving him and his niece. The man says he had heard about the boy because his niece had mentioned him and asked our protagonist, who is drinking, if he needs a new weapon. Unfortunately, the blacksmith explains that he cannot make a suitable weapon for the boy now because, as he saw earlier, he has a debt with the shop. Wiping the drink from the corner of his mouth, the boy asks what the man's debt has to do with making weapons. The blacksmith gets irritated, slamming his hands on the table, saying that people confiscated all of his tools as interest. And with this debt, a shop told him that if he worked for them for 5 years, the debt would be paid off. However, for a neighborhood blacksmith like him, the moment he closed the shop, it would end, and when the debt was paid off, the only future left for him would be to work in someone else's forge. Our protagonist assumes the man tried to maintain his position, and in the end, the thugs came to threaten him. The blacksmith ignores what our protagonist says, only mentioning that he hates those bastards from Telia, which catches the boy's attention. The blacksmith then, with his hand on his face, says that if Dallin came with that purpose, he could forget it. But unexpectedly, he is interrupted, and our protagonist asks how much the man owes, making him incredulous. Confident, Dallin says he will pay the debt for him while smiling happily. The boy begins to leave the place, but the blacksmith tries to stop him, saying the amount is too high for one person to pay alone. As he leaves, Dallin just waves goodbye, saying there is a way for everything in this world, and he doesn't need to worry, but in return, he wants the blacksmith to make some weapons. As he leaves, our protagonist picks up an axe from the forge to complete his mission. Looking back confidently, believing in his abilities, he tells the blacksmith to consider it a deposit. Finally, before leaving, the boy thanks him for the beer, and the only thing the dwarf does is watch the man leave. The blacksmith turns to his niece, asking who that man was, and the girl remains silent. Embarrassed, she says they first need to consider whether he was human or not, but in short, he was an incredible person. At night, elsewhere, we see several carriages with various supplies of food and drinks arriving. Someone speaks to Bulkma, who is carrying a log, asking the boy what he is trying to say. Our protagonist asks Bulkma if he could lend him some money, around a handful of gold coins. The man doesn't even know what to say, only observing the boy in front of him. After a while in a house, we see someone with a bag of coins in their hand, and Dallin says it was a commission. We recall the moment when Dallin was negotiating with Bulkma, explaining that a family member has a debt, and the noble asks what it's about. While eating some grapes in the noble's house, our protagonist explains that it's a business fund debt that kept accumulating until it became several dozen times what it was originally. Again, Dallin asks if the man could lend him the gold or not, and Bulkma is a bit hesitant, questioning whether he should. While smoking, Bulkma asks with whom this person created the debt. Dallin responds that it was with the Tilia shop, and upon hearing this, the dwarf makes an irritated face, clearly displeased. The noble then says he will lend the money, and Dallin, eating an apple, says it seems the man also has connections with Telia. Our protagonist asks what he should do in return, and the noble says he thinks quickly. While extinguishing his cigar, he says that the Telia shop is an organization with dirty funds, so he arranges to meet Dallin tomorrow at the same time. Dallin starts to explain about the Telia shop, an organization illegally created by the Apostles of Retrograde, a group of cultists. They control most of the commercial power in the Bronze Territory, a place that is essentially the life of the cultists. Dallin didn't plan to meet them so soon, but since they got involved, he will have to crush them. Our protagonist says he would confront them now. They are still a legal merchant association, meaning fighting them openly is very risky. First, he needed to get Leveron out of their clutches, and something comes to mind, making the boy a bit shocked. The boy, looking ahead, notices something he doesn't want to see as he looks at Leveron and Penny's forge. Irritated, the boy realizes it's in front of the blacksmith's shop, meaning the Telia bastards have started moving. Quickly, to protect his allies, the boy begins to run towards the forge without stopping. He sees a group of people armed with knives and clubs in front of the forge, ready to kill Penny and her uncle. One of the men tells the old man to follow them obediently, as they're not doing this, just need a few coins. With a hammer in his hand, he says he won't go, cursing all the henchmen and saying he will kill them. The man starts mocking the blacksmith, saying he's very afraid of a hammer, but the truth is he's just taunting him. With an army behind him, the leader of the group of thugs says that even if the old man can defend himself for a moment, he wouldn't be able to fight them all. The old man, no longer in his prime physical condition, starts trembling in fear, knowing he can't face them all. The thug leader then finally gives the order everyone was waiting for to attack the old man and Penny, calling her a bitch in the process. However, before he can react, an axe comes flying towards him. Immediately, the axe goes straight through, cutting off the thug leader's hand, causing him to lift his bleeding fist and scream in pain. Another thug was about to warn that they were under attack, but immediately Dallin appears behind him, grabbing him by the neck and breaking it. The thugs look at the boy attacking, and Dallin says he has finally made up his mind. With one foot on the lifeless body, he says he will consider each hand of everyone there as a silver coin. Since the price for the hands had been set, he proceeded to get a few more. His armed combat skill had been activated. The first face struck by his fist was crushed like a stomped soda can. The next in line received a punch to the stomach to reflect on his conduct. The third one, even armed with a sword, couldn't defend himself. There was nothing those fools could do. Even so, those who hadn't been beaten yet tried to react somehow. But they had no success. Since they were numerous, one of them said not to be afraid because their attacker was unarmed. He heard this with a smile on his face because he didn't need to be armed to handle them. As soon as they arrived at the place, they were shocked by the scene. The street now had a grim decoration with unconscious bodies lying on the ground. A bystander crawled away in fear, saying they had been attacked by a monster. His neck was stepped on, preventing him from crawling further. With his foot so close to the man's head, he finished the job. The two who had arrived wanted to know who had taken down the fools. Without answering the question, he tossed them a sack containing 26 coins. But the man couldn't believe this young man had done all this for him. In response, he said there was nothing to lose by being friends with a blacksmith as long as he made him some weapons as requested. Looking at the ground, he noticed something different about one of the bodies. So he took it in his hands because he knew the young man was pretending to be dead. He knew they hadn't done this just for a few coins and wanted to know what his superiors intended with all this. Even at a disadvantage, the young man said he wouldn't say anything to him. Since he gave the wrong answer, he got slapped back to reality. Without much patience, he told him this was his last chance, and he had better say what the fools said in the shop. He said to take all of them, so his inquisitor wanted to know who. Artisans, merchants, anyone related to the business. Take them or kill them. Now all that remained was to know who gave the order. Before he could answer, the boy's hand twisted in a bizarre way. He was transforming, but he said the order came from the owner of Tilia's shop. His face gave way to a lycanthropic smile. This made him more alert to what would happen next. Before the transformation was complete, he threw the boy to the ground. The longer time passed, the closer he was to fully transforming. Seeing an axe nearby on the ground, he grabbed it. Now that creature was just a body without a head. The blacksmith didn't know what it was, but he heard from the man that it was a half-monster. Apparently, they could now use semi-monster transformations in real life, a faster development than he had expected. As he was leaving, he told them to go inside, lock the doors, and stay there for a few days, but the blacksmith wanted to know where he was going. In his memories, he knew Tilia's shop hid repugnant things. He was headed to Gallius Emporium because he thought they were targeting one of his wealthy clients. Once he was done there, he would return to get his armor and weapons. In a room, a large chandelier lit the space. He thought it must be a coincidence that even Dallin had gone to speak at Telia's shop. They had always been suspicious, but he had learned that lately, they were buying a lot of goods. It seemed they were preparing for something big, more than just business. That's when he remembered the man asking what he'd like him to do in this situation. But he would leave the details for when he showed up again. Having coffee as the first activity of the morning was certainly wonderful. It didn't take long for him to be startled by someone suddenly entering through the window. It was Dallin, who had arrived in an extravagant manner. He didn't know why Dallin had arrived so suddenly, but he had already ordered the man to duck. Through the window, arrows began flying in, breaking the few remaining intact. Startled, he wanted to know what this meant. Dallin sighed in relief, saying that if he had been a little later, it would have been much worse. He would explain soon, but for now, the man had to hide under his bed. Reacting quickly, he threw the axe he was holding out the window. There was an archer hidden on one of the nearby rooftops. His face now became a place to hold an axe. As he left the room, he ordered the man not to leave until he returned. Dallin was quite happy because he would gain some experience now. The man heard what he said but understood absolutely nothing. He jumped out the window toward the nearest roof. Beside him was the small body of the archer who had tried to hide. In the axe holder was a white mask. He looked around to get a sense of his surroundings. There were several of these men with masks on their faces. They began to appear in numbers on the rooftops. This was their main military force, white and gold masks in motion. This indicated they wouldn't just stand by and do nothing. Preparing for what was to come, he gripped the axe in one hand. There wasn't much time left before their grand plan would be put into action. A projectile flew in his direction. With skill, he used the axe to defend himself. Standing still wouldn't help, so he started to move. Before him were already a few of the fools who looked surprised. They tried to attack him in vain, but what they threw at him only hit the image he left behind. The first axe strike landed perfectly. It didn't take long for him to be close to the next one. This time, the axe brought about a separation of head and body. Now only 3 were left, and another projectile came his way. Once again, the axe was useful as a tool of defense. Someone said he must be the soldier who killed Derek. This man calmly approached him. They stood face to face, but on different rooftops. As soon as the masked man realized it was him, he expressed his desire to taste some of his blood. For the blood of valiant warriors is always a delight. This was a silver mask. He hadn't expected an executive member to be there. This was Stray Leader Hafen, a low-class assassin vampire who used poison and memorization. In the game, it was difficult even to react to his attacks. Still, he was excited to see how things would go now. There was no other option but to face him alone. Confident, he hoped to resolve everything in just a single strike. The vampire waited, smiling for him to approach. Dallin noticed something was wrong. He was now in the middle of a trap. He did his best to defend against the stakes. Now he felt he had been too reckless and should have been a little more patient. Because of his character's body that this guy had consumed, a notification appeared. He had discovered the killer who dismembered bodies under the night sky. Not to mention the recent attack wasn't made by him alone. The vampire had help from the other fools Dallin hadn't dealt with yet. If that was the case, he needed to take care of those guys first. Attacking, the vampire said he was growing impatient because he already wanted Dallin's blood. The henchmen attacked in unison, just like the crossbowmen on the other side. Dallin found himself surrounded on all sides. With exceptional mastery, he disappeared and was already upon some of them. His axe found the first of many targets. There was no time to waste in this situation, and his attack continued. His strikes were precise and lethal. The long-range shooters were no longer breathing, leaving only the others. He then prepared to throw his axe toward them. Without time to react to the speed of the attack, one had already been hit. Preparing to finish them off, he used his combatability. As quickly as his axe advanced toward them, it had no trouble taking them down. The survivor of this strike called him a monster. Dallin was relieved that only one of them remained now. Without patience, he let his axe sing. However, he noticed an attack coming from behind. He had to defend immediately, using the axe to stop the projectiles. But what he didn't expect was for poison to come out of them. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he tried to move away from the smoke immediately. But he was already poisoned. The vampire said that a simple human couldn't resist a deadly poison. He hadn't used it earlier because of his companions, but now with only one of them alive, it was a reasonable loss. Even so, the vampire was relieved not to face him head-on as he had taken down all the others without difficulty. Knowing this, he needed to make sure to get rid of him completely. Being a vampire, the poison didn't affect him, but he hoped the human wouldn't be able to resist. Amidst the smoke, he approached what he thought was the body of his victim. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't him. That body wore a golden mask. Dallin is already behind him, ready to let the blade of the axe sing. The vampire didn't expect this attack, much less that the human was still alive. Though he was caught by surprise, the first attack didn't hit him. What occupies his thoughts now is how the human resisted the poison. The only possible explanation is that he must not be human. That is certainly a terrifying monster. Before him, the man says his eyes are burning. It reminded him of tear gas when he was a soldier, but the vampire has no idea what that is. Not understanding what he's saying, he began to attack frantically. All he desires now is for this person to die quickly. Dallin sighed, unconcerned about the attack. He didn't care because their attack patterns were always the same, while the dragon's blood regenerated him. Dallin's foot sank into the roof. The vampire couldn't believe that the man was already before him. Worse than that, his throat was now in the palm of that monster's hand. With him immobilized, Dallin asked if the vampire would like to say his last words. He finally asked him how he survived the poison, which is lethal to humans. The vampire shouted loudly that it was impossible. Dallin told him he was talking too loud and crushed his throat. Luckily, it was a low-class vampire. If it had been higher, he would have turned into a bat or shadow and escaped. With that, he found a body that had perished trying to take down the vampire. The system wanted to know if he wanted to collect the body, so the body was collected by him. With that, he inherited the vampire's abilities, plus 3 in strength and jumping skill. Still in the house, the man was terrified because he never imagined he would be the target of an assassination. Even worse, in broad daylight, he remained in the room, holding a sword. Looking out the window, he tried to calm down because his head was still attached to his body. Contemplating the scenery, he wondered if it was all just a dream. Whether it was or not, it was wise to call his guards just in case. Preparing to open the door, he hoped Dallin was still alive. A loud noise erupted behind him. He turned, ready to defend himself. However, he felt ill and collapsed. Downstairs, Dallin said he needed to better control his strength now. Returning, he told the owner of the Emporium that he had completed his task, but found him unconscious. He thought he might have been poisoned, but even the man didn't know why his mouth was foaming. In the room, someone entered, wondering what all the noise was about. The person who entered was Sienna, and to her, it made sense that the noise was caused by Dallin. Even so, he wanted to know what she was doing there. She brought the information he had asked for. The 3 of them sat in the room drinking tea while they talked. The man wanted to know if she was the informant from the Raven's Nest. She confirmed that she was. He couldn't believe she had an infiltrator in the Emporium, but if that weren't the case, she wouldn't have known where Dallin was. Looking at him, she spoke again, saying she had the information he requested. She discovered which organization those silver masks belonged to. Since she had obtained it from the sewer incident, he hadn't thought she'd have enough time, but the girl had proven more capable than he expected. The question was whether she had done it right, so he asked who they were. They were heretics serving an evil god and called themselves Apostles of Regression. Additionally, there was one more thing. That book was the ledger from Telia's shop. Upon inspecting the book, he discovered a few more things. The owner of Telia's shop was one of the executives of the Apostles of Regression. In recent days, they had been buying large quantities of medicines, metals, and weapons. All these goods were stored in a warehouse they had purchased a long time ago and had neglected. Dallin knew the place and hadn't expected them to have been there all this time. There were signs of the masked men there, as well as the people they had kidnapped, along with their henchmen. It seemed they intended to turn the hired thugs into semi-monsters and use the artisans to make weapons. This was the prelude to a war that would soon take place. He wanted to know if there were any updates on the Bronze Guards, since she was close to the commander of the Silent Company. She had spoken with him, and it seemed he would cooperate, but it would be difficult to attack the place without concrete evidence, and it was also outside his jurisdiction. However, for Dallin, that wasn't a problem. They just needed to create a justification for the guards to intervene. After the conversation ended, night fell over the city. A man complained about the cold, saying the winter was harsh. They could have sent the henchmen for that task, not the faithful followers of the cult. Even so, they were there standing guard at that building. His companion told him to stay quiet because if a golden mask heard that, he would be killed. The apostles have been working hard, and the grand plan will soon be put into action. Without warning, his companion fell to the ground. He had no idea what was going wrong, and Dallin was already behind him, much to his misfortune. Standing before the young man, Dallin wanted to know more about those white and gold masks. After all, he had killed them all. Hearing this, the young man was incredulous. Without waiting for his reaction, Dallin struck him. Thus, there would be no resistance from those 2. Besides them, there were a total of 30 people there. Many were on the rooftops and in the alleys of that place, but most of them were already unconscious, so there was no one left to stop his attack now. He jumped from the roof and headed for the ground. His descent was perfect and silent. There were no addicts or beggars on the street at this hour of the night. It's possible they had been captured and monstrified. Since they accelerated the plan, they no longer feared staying in the shadows. In the morning, he received confirmation that the Bronze Guards would assist them in this matter. The plan was simple: invade the building, deal with the enemies, and start a fire. Once the fire began, the guards, who would coincidentally be nearby, would help extinguish it. With that, they would gain access to heretical evidence. In theory, it was a perfect plan. Only one thing bothered him at the moment. The building had 5 floors in total, and the owner of the tile shop must be inside. If an invasion occurred, he didn't know if that person would flee or stay in the place. Regardless of what happened, Dallin was prepared for what might come. After all, whenever possible, he had to step on them. He took a moment to catch his breath. The worst outcome of the plan would be losing the shop's intel. To avoid that, he would choose another method. With that, he began to move. Dallin ran with the speed of an Olympic sprinter who never took a doping test. His steps were powerful and firm. He prepared to jump using his newly acquired ability. Without apparent difficulty, he was almost at the top floor. In midair, he chose a spot to gain access to the building. His hand prepared a punch to make an entrance. The window shattered, and he was inside the building now. It had been some time since the last time. There were cells in the place, but no one was guarding them. This prison held captive the half-monsters. They tried to break free through the bars of their cells, but without success. Seeing all of this brought back unpleasant memories. A man said Dallin was making too much noise and that he and his apostles had witnessed the presence of God. However, it was the first time he doubted what his eyes were seeing. He wanted to know if Dallin had cast a spell. This was Achilles, the owner of the shop. Dallin said he didn't know much about spells, but as a rich man, Achilles could go to the doctor to get his eyes checked. The battle between the 2 began. At first, they both seemed evenly matched in skill level. Though Dallin was good, Achilles countered in equal measure. Their blades clashed and sparks flew from the impact. He knew Dallin was stronger than an ordinary man. It wasn't for nothing that the other apostles had perished in his hands. If someone told him Dallin was a giant, he would believe it. Dallin didn't seem pressured now and pushed him back with a single blow. Achilles caught his breath and remembered that the Grand Apostle had a reason to hasten his plan. Faced with this, he needed to get rid of the obstacle in front of him. So he began to chant a dark incantation. Dallin seemed to recognize the spell. A red aura formed, and it looked like he was awakening the half-monsters in the place. In the cells, the monsters were growing stronger, as if they were drinking some juice. It would take some time for the spell to take full effect. It was time for Dallin to act before things got worse. He threw his axe toward the masked man to distract him, but Achilles positioned his sword ready to defend himself. With one strike, he deflected the axe, sending it back into Dallin's hands. Without wasting time, Dallin leaped to attack him. Despite the strength of the blow, he was once again stopped by the sword. However, Achilles once again felt the disproportionate strength of this man. From below, Ani was on a collision course with the mask on his face. Achilles takes the first blow. He couldn't block it. The force was enough to shatter his mask. Despite that, he wasn't disoriented and managed to use his sword to strike back. They exchanged cold, intense glances during the duel. Dallin wielded his axe with mastery. Achilles, anxious, prepared to do whatever he could to stay alive. The two charged at each other once again. A succession of clashes followed as both were incredibly fast. Dallin, using his axe, managed to pressure him. Since he only used one hand, he was able to prepare the other for a punch. Achilles was struck squarely again. He writhed in agony, nearly coughing up his guts. Dallin simply watched the trajectory of his opponent's body. Fallen, Achilles coughed, trying to recover from the damage. That should have been more than enough time. Then he said, "Anaxitarian," and bluish flames appeared behind him. The half-monsters in the area seemed more and more out of control. But as the flames rose, they appeared to fall under control. For a brief moment, calm reigned until the monsters began to go berserk again. They broke out of their cells. Dallin waited for them to get a little closer to him. The system notified him that he had discovered a mage who used a body's sword. It was a great opportunity since experience and bodies were coming his way. The monsters swarmed him. They did everything they could to keep him in the middle of them. But what emerged from the swarm were countless cuts. Achilles watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend that Dallin wasn't even tired. His armor, hidden beneath the tunic, had been destroyed by that man's fists. Looking at him, Achilles thought about what else could be done. Holding his sword, he knew there was only one way to take down such a monster. He needed to set an ambush while Dallin was distracted, fighting the monsters. He would use a skill he learned in the Order of Knights, where he put everything from his past into it. In his current state, there would only be one opportunity. He waited for the right moment. Finding an opening, he advanced through the monsters to strike Dallin. In a few moments, he would pierce that bastard, or so he hoped. Dallin had his back turned, apparently unaware of what was happening. The blade drew nearer, and Achilles believed he had succeeded. But just as he got close enough, the tip of his sword was sliced by the axe. That outcome wasn't something within the realm of possibility. The force of the blow also destroyed the handle of the axe. Dallin didn't know why the instant-death strike had happened so suddenly, but Achilles didn't understand these words. With that, Achilles began to fall to the ground wounded. Dallin was frustrated because he could no longer use that axe. However, he began to cough as he had injured himself. Blood poured from his mouth like a spring. The dragon's regeneration kicked in, and Dallin wanted to see his status window. He was still at level 6 with good stats. His body was suffering from side effects, perhaps because he had increased his strength just enough to stay balanced. He needed to be cautious. There was still one more thing. The system said he had defeated the target. He had discovered a mage who used a body's sword. The system wanted to know if he would collect the body. While collecting the body, he imagined that he could have seen the end if he used both magic and swords, but the result had failed. Finally, the body collection was complete. He inherited the body's abilities, gaining 2 points of mana and 1 point of stamina. As a skill, he could now use the fire arrow. A notification appeared saying that the knowledge of the spell had now transferred to his mind. The sensation was different, and he wondered if this was the power of using mana. Saying Ignal Lot fire appeared in the palm of his hand. It was certainly an interesting skill. With that ability in hand, it was time to play with fire. The building was already engulfed in flames. Outside, the guards ensured no one inside escaped. The half-monsters were being taken down mercilessly. Likewise, the masked ones had their escape routes blocked. In the midst of the fierce battle, the guards continued to press forward. They did what they could and managed to gain the advantage. One of them, enraged, threatened his enemies, but he was caught off guard by a golden mask that was there. His lowered guard allowed the enemy to knock him to the ground. If things continued this way, he would meet a bad end. Discreetly, he tried to reach for a weapon near his hand, but the masked man saw this and stomped on it. With little he could do, he imagined this was the end for him. Before his eyes, he witnessed what he thought would be his last moment, and he didn't want to die like this. At the last instant, something unexpected saved him. He still didn't know what had happened and wanted to understand what it was. From the top of the building stood the person who had saved him. It was Dallin, who, seeing the situation, did what he could to prevent further casualties. He still had many arrows left. He knew he needed to do something, as it wasn't over yet. Holding them as if they were spears, he prepared to throw them. His feet braced themselves. His concentration was intense because he couldn't afford to falter. With all the strength he had, he threw the 3 arrows at the same time. They soared through the sky, heading for the ground. Upon hitting their targets, they produced a large impact zone. The guards who witnessed this were frozen in place for a brief moment. It had been unbelievable to see. However, it wasn't over yet, and another order was given to finish off their enemies. From above, Dallin saw that the situation was now favorable for them, and for now, it would be enough. Holding his axe, he was prepared, because he needed to join the battle happening on the ground. Focusing, he would use his jumping ability to descend all at once. With great agility, he headed toward the ground, aiming for an enemy nearby. When the battle ended, bodies decorated the street along with the injured survivors. The current effort was to rescue those who still had a chance at life, even if severely injured. Seeing how necessary potions were, he thought about it. He should have taken some from the old mage he had met. If he had them, he could save a few more people now. But the offer he accepted instead would allow him to save even more people in the future. Nearby, someone called his name. He was finally meeting the famous mercenary Dallin. It was Gawain, the leader of the Silent Guard squad. Thanks to Dallin's information, they had been able to pull this off, and he expressed his gratitude on behalf of the battalion. This leader was more talented than Dallin had expected. He should befriend him. Greeting him, Dallin mentioned that he had heard Gawain was the one who spoke to El Gaia about him. He had a good impression of him, considering what he had done for Sienna. And after today, he believed Gawain's talents had revealed themselves once again. He wished him luck in future endeavors. As soon as they finished speaking, Dallin felt a bit unwell. It was possible he had pushed himself too hard and should consider resting now. With that in mind, he said he would take his leave. Gawain mentioned that even though Dallin was strong, he should wear armor because you never know what might happen. In response, Dallin said he would get some very soon. By the dawn of the next day, he was walking through the city streets. He had spoken with the owner of the Emporium, but was supposed to be around here. Looking up, it seemed he had found it. The forge that had been prepared for the blacksmith's new beginning. Entering the building, he asked how the work was going. The woman greeted him happily, as she hadn't expected his visit. She then called for her uncle, informing him that Dallin had finally arrived. The timing of his arrival was perfect. The blacksmith had just finished what Dallin had requested. Looking at the chest, Dallin thanked the blacksmith, who hoped he would like what he received. Dallin prepared to open the chest. His eyes finally met the armor. Once dressed in it, he expressed how much he liked it. It had been a great decision to ask the blacksmith to make it. This made the blacksmith happy, and he said Dallin could also choose some weapons. Since his axe had just broken, Dallin was grateful. While he was there, someone entered the forge. Dallin bid farewell, apologizing for not being able to pay the full amount, but the blacksmith said he was only in this new forge because of him. That equipment was wonderful and would be of great help. Dallin hoped the blacksmith would continue making pieces like that. Hearing this, the blacksmith expressed his gratitude. Outside, someone said Dallin had come faster than expected and that the situation must be serious because of it. He apologized for interrupting the conversation, but indeed, the situation was dire. At that moment, he truly needed Dallin's help. The remaining forces of the heretics had gathered. The 8th territory was entirely under their control at this moment. Mounted on their horses, they left the city. Dallin wanted to know how the 8th territory had fallen. There had been evidence of at the tile shop, and they had discovered where their fortress was located. When they joined forces to enter, the heretics had already fled. In the 8th region, they had a hidden refuge. No one had expected the attack, and that's how they managed it. They almost did manage to establish a defense perimeter in the region. All the forces gathered in one place. Events different from those in the game were unfolding constantly. Something like this happening just 2 days after the attack on the shop. But this wasn't entirely bad. If things were changing, it meant they were moving further away from ruin. He definitely couldn't miss this opportunity. At the Bronze Guard's fortress, they were gathered. A hand slammed on the table, furious. The chief guard of the 7th territory said that if they entered there, they would be annihilated, and he wanted to know who would take responsibility for it. But they couldn't just abandon those people. That's not what the chief was saying. What they had to do was establish a defense until reinforcements arrived. But if that was the plan, the chief of the 8th region said the people there would remain in constant danger. The situation was truly delicate. One of the guards said it was his mission to prevent something like this from happening. However, the chief smiled, appearing corrupt as if things were going according to plan. His suggestion was to block trade routes to prevent supplies from entering the city. Dallin said that's not what would happen. The chief turned his attention to the stranger. The chief of the 8th region did the same. If they did nothing, the heretics would grow in numbers and attack, which would be their negligence in the situation. Hearing this, the chief of the 7th region became furious. He didn't want to listen to a mere mercenary who didn't belong to the Order of the Bronze Knights, but the one accompanying him told the man to watch his words, because that mercenary had been instrumental in the capture of Tilia's shop. Knowing this, the old man was significantly surprised. The one before them was the one who defeated the owner of Tilia's shop. Realizing that rumors spread quickly, the situation now favored him. Continuing, Dallin said there was only one thing to do now, a surprise and preemptive attack, because that's what he had learned that day. The moment you step away from your fears, all you lose are material things. It's a hard lesson to learn. Gawain said that what the mercenary said was correct. Anyone who had participated in the attack knew they had half-monsters who were beggars and addicts that wandered the streets. In this way, it was only a matter of time before all the inhabitants of the 8th district met the same fate. With this information, they became pensive. There was nothing the corrupt old man could do now. They said they were there to help. But because the initial blow was so hard, they almost did manage to establish a defense perimeter. It would be good to have reinforcements, but even though they had requested them, nothing had arrived yet. If they were waiting for reinforcements from the Silver Territory, they would arrive soon. The man wanted to know how Dallin knew that. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. They didn't know if it was an earthquake or an attack. Outside, several people gathered. One of the guards wanted to know who they were. Apparently, they had arrived without any warning. The man at the front said it seemed there had been a misunderstanding, and that they were from the Silver Territory. They were from the magical tower of the Silver Territory. The timing was perfect, and it had been a long time since they had seen each other, calling Dallin an old man. Smiling, the mage said it was good to have lived so long because he had been called old by a mercenary. That's why he liked him. He was Felver Valentino, an ancient mage from the magical tower of El Gaia. In conversation, Felver said he wanted to offer Dallin another reward. If the city was ever in danger and Dallin called for help, he would do his best to assist. Now was time to fulfill that promise. The help of mages was always welcome, and Dallin thanked him for keeping his promise. In the dead of night, horses galloped swiftly. Their rider was in quite a hurry. He needed to ensure that everyone knew his message as soon as possible. A torch lit their path. They continued through the darkness. Looking at his companions, Dallin remembered what they had discussed earlier. After sharing the plan with them, he asked them to raise their hands. Not all of them agreed with this approach. Attacking first was risky, and he hoped to do it alongside people he could trust. The chief of the 8th Territory was to oversee the area. Only the elite would enter the mines. With that, all preparations had been completed. The Bronze Guards were being led by the leader of the Silent Division. The mages were also with them. It would be just them attacking the cult of regression. Their steps continued advancing through the darkness. Not far from them was the entrance to the mine. At the entrance, the mage said he could feel a sinister magic coming from within. Inside, a dreadful scream echoed down the corridor. It might be a half-monster. As they waited, a human figure came running towards them. His face was disfigured and terrified. He begged them to save him. To their surprise, it was the chief of the 7th Territory. The disfigured man recognized the voice and knew it was the leader of the Silent Squad. He pleaded for help, claiming he had been betrayed. This revealed why he hadn't provided support. He had been in collusion with the cultists. Before they could converse further, something caught Dallin's attention. A man had killed him, saying it was disgusting for a traitor to speak of betrayal. Looking at those who had just arrived, the man was pleased. They had arrived at the right time because they needed more sacrifices. This was going to be complicated. They had to put an end to it as soon as possible. Gawain asked Dallin to leave it to him. He wanted to take care of this guy, and Dallin was confident enough to entrust him with the task. The masked man wanted to know who Gawain was as he looked familiar. It didn't take long before he remembered. Then he threw the disfigured man's body aside. He recalled Gawain as the son of that beggar. The taste of his blood had been so potent that he still remembered it. Hearing these words, Gawain was consumed with rage. However, the mage urged him to calm down for a moment longer, because that wasn't the only enemy he would need to face. Gawain didn't understand this statement, but the mage continued walking. Chanting an incantation, a small flame appeared in his hand. As he finished conjuring it, the ground beneath them gave way as if an earthquake had struck. He made another gesture, and the stones gathered to bury the masked man. One of the soldiers watched, impressed by it all. There were many more cultists in that place. Dallin realized they had been hiding in the mist, and it was possible that a mage had created it. One of the legs of the platform they were on broke. To avoid falling with it, some began jumping from the height. One of them recognized the mage and wasn't pleased to have encountered him there. The lizard man's foot hit the ground, steadying himself to avoid falling. They had all been spotted, and none of them expected the mage to cause an earthquake so soon. Since the fight was about to begin, they would respond accordingly. Some of the Bronze Guards were anxious about the situation. Gawain prepared himself for what might come. Dallin observed the cultists' next movements attentively. Someone behind them placed their hand on the ground. The half-monsters were approaching. Their misshapen bodies reflected the suffering of those who had formed them. One of the soldiers thought these were creatures from hell. Even the mages struggled to maintain their composure. On the other hand, Dallin was quite pleased with what he saw. The cultists must have been having a great time if they had brought even the monsters. They would do anything for the grand plan, and he couldn't wait to turn them into sacrifices. The mage would handle the enemy mages, Gawain would take care of the lizard man and the monsters, and Dallin would have the pleasure of dealing with them. The battle had finally begun. Each engaged with their respective enemies. Dallin moved across the field, approaching the monster. As he got closer, the monstrous creature tried to strike him. The powerful blow hit the ground, but Dallin had already moved away. Leaping from above, he decided to attack from above. His axe descended toward the creature. A precise strike hit the disfigured body of the beast. Seeing the creature in pain brought him great joy. It was time to find out how much experience this creature would give him. The axe struck the monster's head, but nothing happened. Even though it had sunk halfway into its face, the creature remained alive. Dallin tried to pull his weapon out while the creature raged in agony. Its screams were so loud that he worried about the integrity of his eardrums. This was a monster created with mana from hell. If that was the case, it must have a mana core in its body, and indeed that was true. The axe finally dislodged from the creature's skull. With the axe free, the wound began to bleed profusely. This was an incredibly resilient creature, and Dallin knew he had to approach it cautiously. With that in mind, he attacked the monster again, this time with care to avoid his weapon getting stuck once more. This time, the creature reacted in time to block the attack, but its effort was futile and Dallin dodged it. He found leverage on one of its arms. His position now gave him the advantage as he was once again on top of the creature. Due to its misshapen body, the creature couldn't look up. Dallin's strike was devastating. There was no longer a head on that body, and its excessive size made it lack agility. He had to take advantage of this lack of mobility and aim his next attack at the chest. However, something made him stay alert. A mass of arms and hands advanced toward him. That would be a hindrance, and he did his best to defend against the attacks. Even so, the hands were too many, and they kept closing in on him. The attack pattern was as ugly as the creature's face. Despite being at a disadvantage, Dallin didn't want to remain in this situation. Using the strength of one of his arms, he managed to attack the monster at close range. Now he was using his combat ability for this. It was time to strike that hideous face once again with an elbow. His forearm connected with all the force he could muster. The monster's face sank further into its body. Dallin was now back on the ground, and the creature's body had sustained a lot of damage. But it wasn't time to stop yet, and once again he charged for an attack. What followed was a barrage of blows to the monster's flabby belly. After all those impacts, its mana core was exposed. Dallin had found what he was looking for. Using his fire-producing ability, he prepared to incinerate everything in his path. A fire arrow formed in his hands. He prepared to launch it toward the mana core. The arrow flew, leaving a circular trail as it passed and shattered the core, piercing it completely. With that strike, the remaining heads of the monster began to scream even louder. The noise was deafening and Dallin's ears started to ache. Inside the mine, numerous half-monsters began to emerge. They poured out in a frenzy. The situation was growing more frustrating, and even at the end, Dallin was becoming more irritated. In the face of all this, they needed to find the Grand Apostle as soon as possible. A soldier called out for support for the mercenary, noting that the heretics weren't the only threat present. Dallin turned, intrigued by what he had just heard. The knights knew they had to eliminate all the monsters present. A mage prepared his incandescent bow. A barrage of magical arrows was fired by them. The monsters were pierced as if they were made of paper. With cover from the magical arrows, the soldiers advanced on the front lines. Dallin hadn't expected any less from the squad leader and the old mage's men. Leaping over the head of a monster, it was time to leave that area. But he needed that shield for a moment. He left the place, leaving the soldier without his shield and confused about what had happened. With the shield in hand, Dallin leaped along the walls of the mine's corridor, avoiding the monsters emerging from it. The lizard-like masked man didn't want the mercenary to get ahead of him. Seeing him distracted, Gawain seized the window of opportunity to strike. The lizard man's head was nearly severed, and the squad leader continued to press his opponent. The masked man taunted him, saying that no one would have imagined the son of a beggar would become someone like Gawain. To provoke him further, he said he would show Gawain how much he enjoyed the day he devoured his mother. He pulled out 2 large axes from his back. His mask had fallen to the ground. The crocodile man wanted to discover the taste of the beggar's son. He'd hoped that at least Gawain's taste would be similar to his mother's. Gawain didn't respond to the provocations and declared that before that happened, he would cut out the lizard man's mouth. Without hesitation, he leaped toward the crocodile man. Their battle was becoming increasingly fierce. The mage commented that he wouldn't assist the squad leader because Gawain wanted to handle it on his own and would merely observe for now. Besides, it seemed they were winning on all fronts. He then asked if the masked enemy before him didn't agree. The masked man replied that even if they lost, it would be impossible to stop the Grand Apostle. The grand plan would inevitably be fulfilled in a way no one expected. This left the mage intrigued about their methods, but the masked man said nothing more, only smiling cynically, a way no one would imagine. That could mean many things. Dallin told the Grand Apostle to lift the state he was in, because he had surrendered his body to demons. But thanks to Dallin, they didn't have enough sacrifices. Even so, the Apostle didn't regret his pact as it had made his body complete. He began to thank the mercenary for being there, the warrior observed by the gods, the hero who wanted to prevent the end. Before the Apostle could finish his monologue, an axe was already buried in his face. The Apostle briefly smiled at what had happened. He knew he could no longer be killed by an attack like that. As the Grand Apostle, it would take much more than a single strike to defeat him. Dallin stopped speaking because he had noticed something. On the ground were several marks. He hadn't expected this. He had just found the body of the 6th Apostle and that of the Great Warrior. After playing this game many times, Dallin had committed himself to completing it, saying it was just for fun. At times, he even led the downfall. And once he had been an Apostle, his first deviation. The end of that story had been a long succession of deaths. Not even his subordinates had been spared. He had shown no mercy to any of them. At a single opportunity, Dallin had found 2 bodies. The apostle remained focused, intent on attacking him. His goal was to make Dallin another sacrifice. The tentacles made it difficult for Dallin to find an opening to strike. The apostle had formed a contract with a low-class demon, Araction. Even though it was a low-ranked demon, it had incredible regenerative abilities. The apostle commented on how skilled Dallin was at dodging his attacks. However, he knew Dallin wouldn't be an easy opponent to defeat. Suddenly, the apostle's image began to blur. Dallin realized he was disappearing. Before he could fully process his thoughts, a small cut appeared on his cheek. Now the apostle was moving incredibly fast, and there were no openings in his movements. Dallin tried to defend himself, but his enemy was already at his side. Facing imminent danger, Dallin did his best to react in time. But, unfortunately, he was already trapped by one of the tentacles. This situation was not looking good for him. Struggling to free himself, Dallin attempted an attack, but the apostle had disappeared once more. Feeling more exhausted than usual, Dallin suspected he might have been poisoned. However, the dragon's blood within him began to regenerate his body. Even so, it was taking longer than usual. Keeping up with the apostle's speed in this state would be no easy task. Still, Dallin had no other choice but to take the risk. The apostle leaped along the walls of the place with immense speed. His movements were meant to distract Dallin once again, as he positioned himself behind the mercenary. But this time, Dallin had anticipated it and was already prepared for the attack. The apostle's tentacles reacted just as quickly. Face to face with the apostle once more, Dallin was about to land another powerful blow. With his shield, he struck the ground, and though the apostle had managed to dodge, some of his tentacles were now trapped. The apostle was the one surprised this time. Unable to move, the mercenary attacked again. This time, the top of the apostle's head was sliced off. The body collapsed from the force of the blow, and Dallin planned to keep attacking. But it didn't take long for him to be surprised again. More tentacles emerged from the apostle's head, and the apostle remarked that the warrior had many tricks. Muttering an incantation, the apostle's face transformed, revealing large fangs. His appearance had completely changed. With the transformation, a spell was cast, and Dallin was engulfed in its power. The force of the magic hurled him through the air. The attack was strong enough for Dallin's dragon blood ability to kick in once again. It was much like the last time he had tried. The second body to fall to the Grand Apostle, the great warrior who had been captured. It wasn't that Dallin lacked strength in this situation. What he lacked was the endurance to keep up with the Apostle's regenerative abilities. It had been a short but extremely dangerous encounter. The power of a demon was truly incredible. The Apostle's tentacles now took the form of spider legs. No matter how many tricks the mercenary still had, they were all useless now. The Apostle awaited Dallin's next move, knowing the mercenary was thinking of how to overcome his regeneration. The answer was clear. A single decisive blow was needed to end it. All Dallin required to defeat him was one attack, nothing more. With heightened senses, the Apostle could hear the beating of a heart. The mercenary's presence in the room had changed dramatically. It was as if he had become a boulder deeply rooted in the earth. Faced with this shift, the Apostle knew he had to eliminate this growing threat immediately. His tentacles rushed toward Dallin with the intent to kill. They were just inches away from striking his face fatally. But with a single punch, Dallin stopped them in their tracks and called out to the Apostle, telling him to listen. With his combat ability activated, Dallin wanted to know if the Apostle had ever been punched before. Planting his feet firmly on the ground, he used his jumping ability. With incredible speed and force, he closed in on the creature. The Apostle covered himself with his tentacles, hoping to protect himself from the attack. But seeing this attempt, the mercenary smiled. His punch was powerful enough to pierce through the Apostle's body. The Apostle recognized Dallin's skill, acknowledging that it had forced him to retreat. But this, according to the Apostle, was the end of Dallin's journey. However, Dallin responded with a laugh, saying it wasn't his time yet. Hearing this, the Apostle paused, contemplating his next move. The mercenary had begun to invoke a spell while still gripping the creature's body. A great incandescent light filled the room. The Apostle never had a name before. The best way to describe it was that his name had vanished, until the day he offered himself to the Dark God in exchange for revenge. On that day, his existence was completely forgotten. Now he was nothing more than a servant of the evil deity. He had become the Grand Apostle of the dwarf who manipulated fate. He sought to destroy the last bastion of humanity, a center of power in the Diamond Palace. But none of that mattered anymore as he burned endlessly. Even in his deplorable state, he managed to impale the mercenary with one of his tentacles. But that wasn't enough to stop Dallin, as he, too, had the ability to regenerate. If the Apostle couldn't gain distance, he wouldn't be able to heal from the flames. What he hadn't expected was being unable to retract his tentacles from the mercenary's body. Dallin wasn't about to stand idle. He was already preparing to punch the Apostle once more, even with his body pierced. He definitely wasn't going to let him escape like that. Now the Apostle's monstrous face was crushed. With things slipping out of control, the Apostle hadn't expected to die in this place. Seizing the moment, Dallin told him they were far from the end. The Apostle's tentacles lay severed on the ground. The Apostle asked the mercenary if he knew that graphite and diamonds were made from the same material. The highest point can one day become the lowest and vice versa. The Apostle had wanted to create a new order under divine will, but it seemed he couldn't defy reason. Perhaps this victory was nothing more than the destiny that had already been written. Listening to all of this, Dallin simply responded that the apostle was spouting nonsense. People had free will and decided the course of their own lives. Even Dallin, who had been pursued from the Diamond Palace. Hearing this, the apostle acknowledged it as a possibility. He tried to say more, but his life slipped away. It was the first time Dallin had heard the dying words of a boss monster. There were two bodies now, the great warrior and the apostle, and he needed both for the rewards. His proficiency increased by 1 point, as did his mana. As a new skill, he gained the ability to manipulate ice. Upon collecting the other body, he gained 4 additional strength points. That was a lot to absorb at once, and his body wasn't adapting well. Immediately, he began to writhe in pain and agony. If anything unexpected happened there, he might not survive. He needed to endure it. There was no other option if he wanted to return to the real world. Suddenly, Dallin found himself in another place. This was the starting point of the story. He wasn't sure if it was a dream or if he had returned after dying. But as he concentrated, he felt something. His physical body was far from this place. He was resisting the absorption of the strength points. It seemed like there was something he needed to do in this place. He opened the door of the cabin in front of him. Inside, he encountered an unusual scene. It was his own room, and someone sat in front of a computer playing a game. It was the game he used to play endlessly, and the character on the screen was the one he used to create. As the person moved the mouse, they were deciding what the next mission would be. Dallin stared, stunned at the scene in the room. It couldn't just be a game. The times he played without the will to win. The NPCs he had killed. The times he gave up on saving people. He had no idea how many worlds he might have destroyed by playing. A hand gripped his ankle, pleading to be saved. Shadows emerged from the ground, all begging for the same thing. Indeed, the person in front of him was himself. But it represented his past and his original sin, not who he was now. Realizing the magnitude of the situation, Dallin became furious. Though he had stopped the destruction, it didn't mean he was free of his sins. But this was the only way he could try to atone. Reaching this conclusion, the environment around him shifted. This time, he promised that in this world, he would not give up, no matter what. A system notification appeared. He had gained a small territory. Outside, many were injured, and the focus now was on helping them. The mage used one of his many spells. Ethereal hands appeared, glowing with a warm yellow light. They began treating the wounded, speeding up the healing process. Once the treatment for that soldier was complete, the mage told him to rest for a while. Looking to the side, the mage noticed someone approaching. The calm footsteps continued to march. Dallin had returned from inside the mine, alive and intact. The mage had been deeply worried, and it was a huge relief to see him unharmed. Looking closer, he noticed something different about Dallin. He immediately asked if Dallin had obtained the small territory. As expected from the elder mage, he noticed it right away. When Dallin woke up, it felt as though he had unlocked a new sense. All of his attributes, except for strength, had increased by 1 point. His proficiency and his abilities had also improved. He suspected what might have caused all this progress. It had something to do with the message he received before he woke up about the small territory. The elder mage probably knew something about it. Dallin had many questions, but this wasn't the ideal place, and the mage was called away to help more injured people. However, the mage mentioned that if Dallin had any questions, he could visit the magical tower whenever he wished. Dallin agreed, knowing he was always welcome. Now his attention turned to the leader of the silent company. Gawain was bent over the corpse of his enemy. Having fulfilled his vengeance, he must feel relieved now. Beside him, Dallin noticed a young person. It was Tommy, still under evaluation it seemed. After the sewer incident, it was necessary to acknowledge his tenacity. Even so, Dallin was confident the elder mage would guide Tommy well. Before him on the ground was a mask. Finally, they had put an end to one of the causes of the destruction. Despite this, it was only the beginning. Powerful demons still roamed the world, as well as witches who manipulated the elements, dryads who went not like humans, bloodthirsty vampires hiding in every corner, and dragons that existed on a completely different level from anything Dallin had encountered so far. They would have to wait for his development, because he would defeat them one by one. With a letter in hand, Dallin continued walking as he read it. Because of his deeds, many commissions were seeking him out now. Even important figures were frequenting the tavern hoping to catch a glimpse of him. It seemed like there were plenty of nuisances for him to deal with now. Finally, he arrived at the tavern, which was much more crowded than before. He hadn't expected to become this famous. Sitting at the bar, he ordered a drink. A stranger approached, asking if he was the famous hero of the place. The man kept talking, but Dallin had no idea who he was. The man complained that none of his requests had been answered and wanted to know if Dallin's fame had made him forget the city and its people. Leaning in closer, the man told the mercenary to stop playing games as he had spent a lot of money trying to find him. Dallin brushed the man's hand off his shoulder, telling him to just drink his alcohol. It wasn't a casual shove. The man's hand felt strange. As Dallin drank, the stranger continued to complain that something was wrong with his arm. Enraged, the man wanted revenge for what had happened and declared he would make Dallin unable to even crawl. The man lunged forward with his saber, aiming to stab the hero. A few arrows struck his arm, and more arrows hit his legs. A woman's voice warned him that he shouldn't be swinging his weapon around in the shop. Bad customers weren't welcome and could leave immediately. She clearly wasn't joking about that. As the man stumbled out, she said Dallin was late and they needed to leave soon. That woman was definitely frightening when she wanted to be. Dallin mentioned that she was busy scaring off troublesome customers, but she said that was nothing. It was thanks to Dallin that the tavern's profits had increased significantly. It was time to talk about mission requests, as a whole stack had arrived in the last week. Looking at the pile, Dallin asked if she could narrow them down to the most likely ones. The woman asked if he had any specific preferences. Dallin requested missions that offered stamina-boosting potions or spells for enhanced vision or rituals that could grant those abilities. Given his immense strength, it posed a problem. His stamina was the only thing holding him back, and he didn't want to experience that pain again. The woman mentioned a mission that could be suitable, but she didn't recommend it. The mission was requested by an apprentice knight of the Order of the Sacred Knights. The request was to slay a demon hiding in a labyrinth and retrieve the sacred sword it had stolen. Intrigued by the description, Dallin said he would take the mission. The woman couldn't believe he actually wanted to do it. Thanks to this opportunity, he'd be able to explore the labyrinth, so he asked her to contact them. Outside, the scene wasn't what he had expected. A woman in armor was dealing with some men, challenging one of them to a duel. To ensure everything followed the rules, she asked if there was a notary among them. The situation was so bizarre that Dallin couldn't tell if it was real or not. Several carriages were entering the city. Dallin introduced himself as a gold-ranked mercenary. The medallion had been given to him by Gawain as a reward for helping them. As a gold-ranked mercenary, he only needed to pay 8 coins. He paid the fee, happy that his status had improved. With the gates open, he entered. Finally, he had arrived at his destination, the land of adventures, the Silver Territory. Looking at the city, he sensed there was something more to it. This was where the entrance to the labyrinth was, where he could obtain a stone of desire. An elderly man approached him and called out. He asked if Dallin had come to the city because of the labyrinth. Dallin confirmed, and the old man reminisced about his own adventures. It was a good city to live in, the old man said, mentioning that his whole family had stayed there. But Dallin wasn't in the mood for conversation. The old man's last words were to wish good luck to the warrior who had caught the attention of the gods, and Dallin turned around. But there was no one there anymore. That was an NPC Dallin had never encountered before. Perhaps it was the one with many faces. Dallin was certain it was, and he was sure he'd see him again. His contractor was Lucia Castachild, a woman with strong convictions and beliefs. Even though she was violent toward demons, she was merciful and kind to people. It was this woman who was now in a heated argument before him. She ordered the man to take back what he said, or she'd crush his skull. All the man had said was that Barrett lost the sword in the labyrinth, which prevented them from completing the mission. In defense of Barrett, Lucia said he was a knight known for his swordsmanship and, unlike them, fought until the end. But the man retorted that the sword does not recognize bastards. Lucia could no longer contain her rage. She drove her sword into the ground and challenged the man to a duel, only needing a notary to officiate it. The mercenary she was facing was enraged and said she must have a death wish. Those watching the scene said it would be entertaining, and some even started placing bets. People were divided between supporting the mercenary and the sacred knight. Dallin brought his hands to his head, thinking the crowd had gone mad. Lucia didn't want spectators, she wanted a notary. Approaching from behind, the mercenary said there was no need for a notary because all that would happen was that she would cease to live. The surprise attack was about to hit her directly. Before the blow could land, someone intervened, saying they should end the fight then and there. Dallin said that Lucia was his ally. They had both said everything they needed to each other, so there was no reason to continue fighting. But the mercenary wasn't satisfied, saying he would start with Dallin if he didn't move. Smashing his club, Dallin pointed out that the mercenary no longer had a weapon to use. With this show of strength, the situation finally calmed down a bit. Lucia asked who Dallin was, and he explained that he was the mercenary she had hired. Later, in a quieter setting, she thanked him for his help. She formally introduced herself as Lucia, an apprentice knight in the Order of the Sacred Knights. The mission request had been lacking in details, and Dallin wanted to know more. Lucia explained that the Sacred Knights were guarding another part of the labyrinth, a fissure located in the southwestern region of the continent. The terrain was incredibly rough, with no barriers, meaning monsters could emerge from it at any time. Before heading there, they needed to stop at Safer Palshan to prepare. Her companion Barrett had just become an officer and had gone to Palshan, but he never returned and was declared dead, and the news soon reached the Sacred Knights. One of the 12 sacred swords had been stolen, and there was a culprit. That person was Barrett, her friend. If he had been chosen by the sacred sword, he could have communicated this, but she didn't know why he hadn't. Now that Dallin understood why he was hired, he wanted to know which of the sacred knights would accompany him. Lucia explained that there were no available forces in this area. With the monsters active, there weren't enough knights, so it would just be the 2 of them in the labyrinth. Seeing this opportunity up close, Dallin realized he had a chance to help someone who would become a heroine in the future. He told her he would wait for her at the entrance of the labyrinth the next day at 12 o'clock. Hearing this, Lucia could hardly believe it. Dallin slammed his empty glass on the table, because now they were going to recover the lost sword. At the magical tower, Dallin leaned over the parapet near the garden. Approaching, the elder mage apologized for keeping him waiting so long. The lecture had taken more time than expected. Another person accompanied him, introducing himself belatedly. It was Tommy, one of the Elder Mage's best students. Tommy had clearly learned something as he now appeared much more mature. He was likely there to discuss the matter they hadn't had time to address earlier, and indeed, that was the case. A great light emanated from Dalin's body. What Dalin wanted to know was about these territories. A large aura formed around him. The Elder Mage was impressed because Dalin always exceeded his expectations. It proved that Dalin had the potential for even greater power. Only those who made peace with their past could achieve this. Dalin listened to these words attentively. Overcoming his past, it was almost exactly what had happened to him. The Elder Mage asked if Dalin knew how to handle his domain, to which Dalin replied that he didn't. The mage explained that a domain was essentially the construction of a fantasy world. Unlike reality, which had many restrictions, in the world of fantasy anything was possible. Having a domain meant Dalin had access to this world as well. Dalin wanted to know how to access this place he had taken hold of. The Elder Mage suggested that it would be better for Dalin to see for himself, and he sent Tommy to rest. The boy agreed but left disappointed. Bowing, Tommy also bid farewell to Dalin. For now, it was too much for the boy to witness a domain. The flow of mana could cause confusion. With that, it was time for them to begin. After casting a spell, a bright light enveloped the Elder Mage's body. This was how his domain was being summoned into reality, bringing impossible possibilities with it. This was the essence of using a domain. Dalin could sense the place. The mana flowing from the Elder Mage was distorting the world around him. Dalin remembered that when fighting the Apostle, the flow of mana around him had changed. Now he finally understood what had happened. The mage asked if, after seeing the demonstration, Dalin could use his own domain now. Dalin didn't think he could just yet, and the mage said it would take time. Powerful mages had limitations as great as their powers. Dalin wanted to know what the Elder Mage's domain did, and he explained that it had many abilities. But primarily, it allowed him to see the memories of the land. Everyone who passed through it left their mark in some way. He could not only see the past, but also glimpse parts of the future. Dalin pondered the fact that the land recorded the passage of time for all. With that, he had one more question he wanted to ask the mage. Since coming to this world, one question had lingered in his mind: who is he? Outside the labyrinth, the time was almost upon them. On the first floor, Dalin was already with his contractor. He asked Lucia if she was nervous, and she admitted that she was a little. This was the past of someone who would one day be called the Demon Slayer. Even Dalin was curious about how someone so young would one day become a sacred knight. Near them, Dalin overheard a conversation about the source of some information. It was the mercenary he had encountered before. The mercenary was claiming that he had seen it with his own eyes and had no reason to lie. The sacred knight had mortally wounded the demon. A low-ranked demon wounded was good bait for adventurers. Those who slay monsters in labyrinths are greatly rewarded. But this way of thinking was flawed because the demon wielding the sacred sword would only grow stronger. So the demon would hide the sword and accumulate power over the years. With the demon vulnerable, they could now do whatever they wanted with it. As the doors began to open, Dalin told Lucia to prepare, but she had expected a portal to appear. Instead, a large light formed beneath them on the ground. The labyrinth was below them, and the doors opened in the floor. Lucia hadn't anticipated that small detail. They fell through the portal, with Lucia terrified by the drop. They descended into a valley-like formation. Dalin managed to land without injury, but Lucia hit the ground face first. Now they were finally inside the labyrinth. Lucia asked where the others were, but Dalin explained that the mana waves were unstable here. Because of this, pinpointing precise locations was complicated, and they had fallen randomly into the first floor. Lucia was curious how Dalin knew so much about the labyrinth, given it was his first time there. Dalin responded by calling himself a veteran novice. Looking at the constellations, he determined they were northeast of the return location, the opposite direction from where the sword had been lost, meaning they would need to cross the forest in the middle. The cave where the demon was hiding was being protected by magical barriers, and over time, it would become a magic-infused cave. Knowing this, Dalin said they needed to move faster. A noise in the night alerted Dalin, making him more vigilant. To him, this was a good sign. Being with a sacred knight had brought them luck, though Lucia didn't understand what he meant. Still, she felt lost in the chaos unfolding around them. Nearby, several ghouls and giant wolves began closing in on them. Lucia prepared to fight and said this didn't feel like good luck. Jumping into action, Dalin told her she would soon realize where their luck lay. Descending from the air, he was ready to deal with the first of their enemies. A flash of light erupted in the forest as Dalin attacked. A figure emerged from the shadows. Dalin now had a mount which would help him reach his destination quickly. The night continued, and the monster camp remained quiet. One of the monsters stood watch, keeping an eye on something in the distance. Not far away, someone let out a scream. Lucia was terrified by the experience. She begged Dalin to stop, saying she was too afraid and feared they were heading straight for the nest of monsters. The monster on watch howled, warning its companions. They were getting close and were about to collide with the barricade. Dalin dodged, but Lucia crashed into the wall. Dalin rushed her aside, asking if she was alright. Lucia said she was fine, but was surprised by how he had used the animal's instincts to return home. Thanks to that, they had covered a great distance in a short amount of time. Now all they had to do was get out of there. But Dalin had other plans. They were in a monster nest, so they needed to eliminate all of them. He instructed Lucia to follow him carefully as he prepared for battle. Using his jumping ability, he was already in the thick of the fight. Calling the monsters to attack him, Dallin fought with skill. Lucia watched, knowing she couldn't stop this behavior. Gripping her sword, she prayed to the god of battle. Her eyes gleamed and her focus intensified. In the blink of an eye, she darted through the monsters, slicing them with her blade. Dallin hadn't expected much from her given that she was still just an apprentice, but she was undeniably talented and had the potential to become the heroine she was destined to be. Watching her abilities now, Dallin realized he had no reason to worry. He continued to move through the battlefield. The two of them didn't stop fighting the monsters around them. After a long battle, they both positioned themselves, ready. They were surrounded, but now they stood back to back. Lucia complained that the monsters seemed endless. Dallin asked if she knew how to make them give up. She responded that they learned it during training, so she knew what to do. The monsters growled, and Lucia said they were nearing the point of annihilation. But before she could say more, a loud growl echoed from a nearby building. A spear struck the ground, and a massive creature held it. This was their leader, and if his necklace was cut, the monsters would retreat. Upon the leader's appearance, the remaining monsters bowed before him. It seemed the commander didn't like watching his subordinates die endlessly. The system notified Dallin that he had discovered two more bodies, the first traveler to the labyrinth and the experienced fighter. Dallin told Lucia she could rest while he dealt with the monster, but Lucia insisted she could still be useful. Just as she finished speaking, pain surged through her body. She had overexerted herself. She realized she shouldn't have spent so much energy dealing with the scouting group. Despite everything, was curious to see that Dallin didn't seem tired at all. Lucia was curious about what kind of commander this wolf-like creature was who didn't fight and yet seemed eager to deal with him. The beasts charged forward and soon their weapons clashed with force. Dallin recognized this monster. It was Bargoaf, soon to become a subordinate of the Eagle God. Bargoaf asked the mercenary who he was. He wanted to know who this person was that had invaded his territory, massacred his people, and what he wanted. Dallin was surprised, not expecting the beast to speak. Dallin responded that he didn't need a reason to take down those who devour humans, and from what the wolf was saying, he must have made a pact with the evil god. To do so, 10 human hearts were required, and the monster remarked that Dallin wasn't an ordinary human. Dallin, irritated with his chatter, said he didn't have time for this and wanted to finish things quickly. The monster accused him of arrogance, declaring he would torture him thoroughly before devouring him. Dallin sarcastically hoped that the beast would at least do his best. The two were about to collide again. A massive wave of debris was kicked up from the force of their clash. Lucia anxiously waited for the dust to settle to see what had happened. Dallin had been captured, held in the wolf's grip. The monster mocked Dallin's courage, but Dallin brushed off the comment. He had expected Bargoaf to be stupid, but not to leave his hands free. Using his newly acquired ice magic, Dallin froze the wolf's arm. In his wild past, Dallin often relied on magic, and now the wolf's arm was completely encased in ice. Bargoaf snarled, warning Dallin that things wouldn't end the way he expected. But Dallin was already activating his combat ability, ready to break the frozen limb. With a single powerful strike, the wolf was now missing an arm. In disbelief at what had just happened, Bargoaf flew into a rage. Dallin took the opportunity to gain some distance, preparing his next move as he approached the monster once more. The wolf, shocked and confused by what was happening, staggered from the blow. Oppressed by the human, Bargoaf growled that he hadn't intended to use his full power. With 10 hearts, he had gained intellect. With 20, the strength to crush stones. With 30 more hearts, he had gained regeneration abilities. Now furious, he wanted to tear Dallin apart. Dallin calmly encouraged him to try his best. Their battle continued, but despite the wolf's strength, there wasn't much he could do. Dallin wasn't sure if his actions were affecting events in the game because Bargoaf wasn't supposed to have made the contract yet. Another cloud of dust rose from their clash, and Lucia anxiously watched, hoping everything was alright. She felt uneasy, not wanting to be just an observer. Behind her, some wolves began growling. This lifted her spirits a little. Now she could do her part. Covered in magic, she provoked the monsters into attacking her. The exhausted wolf leader growled, asking Dallin what he thought of all this. His wounds had completely healed, and there was nothing Dallin could do to stop him. Dallin acknowledged that regeneration was a useful ability, but forming fire in his hands, he was curious about something. He wanted to see what would happen if the wolf were completely incinerated. The sight of flames frightened Bargoaf. Dallin's next punch was strong enough to pierce his chest. Now with his sword in hand, Dallin was prepared to continue his attack. He had no intention of stopping his attempt to burn the creature alive, but things didn't go as planned. The sword didn't cut as Dallin had hoped, and the wolf offered him a deal. Bargoaf claimed he had a chest in his cabin filled with the relics of humans he had killed. If Dallin spared his life, he would give it all to him. Dallin thanked him for the information, and the wolf believed he would be spared. Slowly, Dallin dropped his sword, but just as quickly, Dallin decapitated the wolf, ignoring the offer. Even though Bargoaf had gained power from the evil god, the things he spewed were revolting. With the final battle over, Dallin turned to Lucia. He had thought she would be exhausted, but she had managed to deal with the remaining monsters. He praised the sacred knight for her efforts, and she returned the compliment to the mercenary. Now it was time to continue, but Lucia seemed startled by Dalin's blood-soaked appearance. Seeing her reaction, Dalin asked what was wrong. For a brief moment, she had thought he was a monster. Elsewhere, a demon sensed that another pawn had lost its life. After the cultist, the wolf had been next. The demon couldn't believe they had both lost to humans. The dwarf who sways the future was watching. Anaxagus, the demon, desired nothing less than to overthrow the god from his throne and usurp it. In the hall where he stood, surrounded by bodies, more people arrived. A hunter among them declared that he would cut off the demon's head and keep it as a trophy. But Anaxagus, bored by yet another group of dungeon explorers, gave an order for his corrupted knight to rise. At first, they believed it was just a puppet. But with a gaping hole in his chest, the knight revealed himself to be none other than Lucia's deceased friend. The hunter, eager to end this quickly, stated his plan to take care of the puppet before dealing with its master. Before he could finish his sentence, a sword was already on its way to his throat. All of them were cut down without a chance to defend themselves. The demon smiled at the scene. This was the work of a masterpiece. Before Dalin stood two bodies he had discovered. As he began to collect them, his proficiency increased by 1 point, as did his stamina. He gained another point in proficiency and a new skill. Lapentella's pulverizing sword, far better than he had expected. Now, Dalin sat before a campfire, reflecting. With all he had recently gained, he opened his status window to get a better sense of where he stood. In addition to his new skill, his proficiency and stamina were steadily approaching the level of his strength. Now only 10 points separated his stamina from his total strength. With this, the chances of experiencing another episode like before were greatly reduced. Beyond that, the best acquisition so far had been the pulverizing sword skill. It had come from the last body he collected. Thinking about the combination of his dragon blood abilities with the pulverizing sword, he couldn't wait to use both in combat. Skill and experience. These seemed obvious. He remembered his meeting with the Elder Mage, who once asked him who he was. Using his abilities, the Elder had revealed something unexpected, that Dalin's total life expectancy was only 2 years and 1 month. Out of all the things he could have heard, this was the last thing he expected. Since he arrived in this world, 2 years had passed. This meant his body had been created on the same day he arrived. The elements of the game were deeply connected to this reality, and Dalin just wanted to understand why he reincarnated here. Perhaps he was meant to relive his gaming experiences. No matter how much he speculated, nothing made sense. So he decided to focus on his immediate goal, the item that could fulfill any wish, the Stone of Desire. He needed to find it at all costs and use it to return to Earth. As he pondered, someone approached and called his name. Lucia noticed that he seemed troubled and wanted to know what was on his mind. Dalin brushed it off, saying it was nothing, and asked why she was awake. It wasn't her turn for watch yet. Lucia admitted that she couldn't sleep and offered to take over his watch now. But Dalin preferred to stay by the fire a bit longer, watching the flames burn. Considering everything that had happened recently, it was no surprise she couldn't sleep easily. The thought of her comrade no longer being alive must be too shocking for her. Continuing the conversation, Dalin asked Lucia what kind of person Barrett had been. After all, if the sacred sword had recognized him, he must have been extraordinary. Lucia confirmed that he was, but not just in that way. The Barrett she had known had been the most loyal sacred knight she had ever met. His personality and dignity were so exceptional that he was respected by both newcomers and veterans alike. Lucia herself had admired him greatly. Barrett was kind to everyone, someone truly deserving of admiration. And that's why she couldn't understand the accusations made against him. To her, Barrett hadn't stolen the sword, and she didn't comprehend how it had ended up in a demon's possession. Thinking about this, Dalin admitted that the story didn't make much sense. If Barrett had been recognized by the sword, he wasn't a mediocre knight. And if he had companions with him, a low-level demon shouldn't have been a problem. According to the other mercenaries' account, Barrett had even wounded the demon in the belly. If all this were true, the demon should have been an easy opponent. But before Dalin could dwell further, Lucia interrupted, saying that if Barrett had fallen fighting evil, she was proud to have been a knight alongside him. Dalin responded that if Barrett had friends who thought so highly of him, he was surely grateful to her, wherever he was. Though Dalin's words were kind, it made Lucia emotional. As Lucia was thanking Dalin for his kind words, a swift arrow came dangerously close to striking her head. Dalin reacted in time, preventing it from being a fatal hit. Not yet fully aware of what was happening, Dalin was already on high alert, prepared to respond to any threat. He shouted that only a fool would fire an arrow like that and swiftly returned the projectile in the direction it had come from. His aim was flawless, and it hit a shadow lurking among the trees. The mysterious figure couldn't dodge it and, in their final moments, couldn't comprehend how Dalin had made such a precise shot. As the body fell lifeless to the ground, Dalin was already inspecting the surroundings. More enemies approached, grumbling that they should have ambushed him while he was sleeping. Dalin found this odd. His heightened senses should have picked up their approach. Then, a familiar face stepped forward. A mercenary Dalin had encountered before claimed that he had lost a companion. Mocking, the bald mercenary joked that it had been a while since he had seen that foolish girl too. Lucia, angered, called him ugly. Dalin quickly recognized him as the bald-headed man from earlier and demanded to know how long they had been followed. But the bald mercenary scoffed, saying it wasn't Dalin's business. He was there to settle the score from their tavern encounter. He then ordered his men to attack. Calm as ever, Dallin called over to Lucia, asking if she didn't deserve to hear testimony from someone who witnessed her comrade's last moments. Lucia hesitated as the image of Barrett flashed through her mind. She then gripped the hilt of her sword. With renewed resolve, she agreed, saying she indeed deserved to hear it. Now it was time for the two of them to show what happened to minor characters in a story filled with dismemberment. Dallin charged toward the first group of attackers. The fools shouted loudly for him to die, believing in the power of their positivity. Their swords clashed violently. Dallin and one of the fools exchanged a series of blows. After toying with him for a while, Dallin taunted that the fool was slower than a senile old man. The fool, on the other hand, couldn't understand how his opponent was so fast. While he pondered this, his head was slammed into the ground, cracking it beneath the impact. Dallin pressed the fool's head even harder into the dirt to make sure he wouldn't be getting back up. Nearby, another one of the fools stood paralyzed with fear, having witnessed the scene. Dallin slowly approached him like a villain from a horror movie, and the man stammered, begging him not to come any closer. But a sharp scream pierced the night air. He was now learning firsthand whether God existed. Meanwhile, Lucia took a deep breath to focus. A bright light enveloped her sword, and she invited the rest of the minor characters to attack her. One took the bait, arrogantly declaring that it didn't matter if she was a sacred knight. Bones were still bones, and his sword was brutal. But Lucia easily dodged, now airborne, mocking the chunk of metal the man called a sword. She remarked that he was slower than a drunk infant. She unleashed a flurry of strikes while still in the air. Below, the mercenaries did their best to survive the onslaught. With a piercing, unrelenting blow, one of them lost a piece of his body. Lucia found it so easy that she scoffed, saying all they could do was talk, but when it came to fighting, they were useless. Dallin was pleased with her performance. She never ceased to surprise him. Frustrated, the bald mercenary called his lackeys useless bastards. Seeing the tide turning against him, he decided to slip away casually, hoping no one would notice. Dallin called out to Lucia, telling her to handle the second-rate minions while he went after the bald mercenary. What the man had done couldn't go unpunished. As Dallin pursued, one of the fools, in a desperate attempt to hasten his own death, attacked Dallin from behind. Dallin glanced back, incredulous at the audacity. He activated his jump ability, leaping so high he was out of reach, leaving the fool alive so Lucia could continue learning. Not far ahead, the bald mercenary fled, doing his best to escape the two monsters pursuing him. His panic was evident, with thick veins bulging from his shiny bald head. He believed he would one day get his revenge, but Dallin was already closing in. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed as Dallin landed right on top of him. Dallin called him pathetic for abandoning his companions. As Dallin pinned him down, a voice unexpectedly called out, surprising Dallin. There was another hidden figure among them. This mysterious figure asked Dallin to spare the rest of the fools from further slaughter. Dallin remained steadfast, uninterested in stopping the fight just because the mysterious figure had asked. He was motivated to teach anyone who pulled such stunts a harsh lesson. However, the bearded man remarked that Dallin seemed to be carrying a large chest, hinting that he couldn't let such an opportunity pass by without doing something. It was a tricky situation because Dallin had wanted to leave the chest with Sienna, fearing he might break it if he forced it open. But the bearded man, clearly clever, tried to buy his way out, offering a totem that canceled noise within a certain radius. Now things made sense. This was why Dallin hadn't detected their approach. Intrigued, Dallin asked to test the object first. The bearded man agreed, but said Dallin would have to come closer to do so. The man's malicious grin revealed his true intentions. It was the perfect opportunity to ambush Dallin at close range, ready to let his square-shaped weapon sing a happy tune. Dallin, however, didn't take kindly to being deceived. The bearded man taunted that not even Dallin could dodge a bullet, but by the time he finished speaking, Dallin was practically upon him. It was only in those last moments that the bearded man realized the foolishness of his actions. Dallin struck him, not just with force, but with the rage of having been played for a fool. Unable to breathe, the bearded man writhed in agony, and Dallin demanded to know where they had come from. He took the man's identification, confirming they were mercenaries carrying a golden plaque from Boris. But Dallin hadn't forgotten about the bald mercenary. He wanted to know how long they intended to keep running. Realizing time was running out, Dallin got straight to the point. He approached the bald man and demanded to know who had stabbed the sacred knight in the back. The bald mercenary was shocked. He had no idea how Dallin knew about that. But Dallin explained that a sacred knight like Barrett wouldn't have fallen so easily, and it was up to the bald man to decide whether to tell the truth or die slowly. Reluctantly, the bald man confessed it was he who had attacked Barrett. He believed that by doing so, he would be able to claim the sacred sword and collect a reward from the demon, as both were already badly wounded. Lucia had arrived just in time to hear the confession, finally understanding what had happened. Her friend had died because of this cowardly bald man. The bald mercenary tried to justify his actions, admitting he was wrong. But apologies wouldn't change what was about to happen. With a simple movement of her sword, Lucia dismembered the mercenary's body, turning him into pieces. Looking at the bald man, she declared that was just the first and she wouldn't show him mercy. The bald mercenary, now crawling on the ground, obliterated and covered in massive wounds, regretted his cowardice. Lucia sighed in relief, saying that thanks to the demon letting the bald man escape alive, she was able to complete her vengeance. It was time for him to pay with his life. Facing death, the bald mercenary pleaded, saying he would do anything if she spared him. Lucia hesitated for a moment, confusion clouding her mind. But in the end, she struck him down. Mercy was for chickens, and she was a sacred knight. A yellowish glow emanated from her blade. Soon that glow enveloped the bald man's body as his screams echoed through the forest. Dallin hadn't expected to see those flames in a place like this. They were white flames divine in origin, known as demon-slaying flames. As they burned, they regenerated the nervous system of the victim, forcing them to feel the pain until their life was fully extinguished. Now only the ashes of the once petulant bald man remained before her. Dallin asked Lucia if she was alright, knowing the emotional toll this moment carried. She claimed there was nothing to worry about. He congratulated her on her deeds, hoping she would overcome this and live without regrets. Still immersed in her emotions, she thanked him. It was, after all, thanks to Dallin that she was able to preserve the honor of a friend. But Dallin corrected her, saying it wasn't him, it was her. She had never doubted Barrett and his character. Hearing this, she thanked him once again. Impressed with Dallin's performance, she suggested renegotiating the reward for the mission, and Dallin remarked that money is never too much. This broke the tension, and she smiled widely. Now she was eager to keep moving, as she didn't think she'd be able to sleep yet. As they traveled, Dallin collected another body, gaining 1 point of mana. He acquired more abilities, and by consuming an herb, he gained another point of stamina. 1 more body gave him an additional sense point. Their preparations were now complete. They stood before a cave, and it seemed this might be their final destination. Lucia remarked that something about the entrance felt off. Dallin remarked that a demon's lair would always be strange no matter what, and warned Lucia that there were likely hidden enemies around. Leading the way, he asked her to follow him closely. Stalactites hung densely from the ceiling of the cave. As they moved forward, something caught Lucia's attention. The path had seemingly come to an end, with a massive stone wall blocking their way. Dallin placed his hand on the wall, suspecting it could be opened with some kind of spell. Immediately sensing something, he warned Lucia to brace herself for what was coming. Suddenly, a powerful explosion occurred, nearly catching them off guard. A demon's voice echoed, laughing as he asked if his greeting had been too violent. He welcomed them and boasted that he had been watching them from the stars. Lucia, furious, could hardly wait to tear the demon's body apart with her sword. Dallin, on the other hand, thanked the demon for his warm greeting. It was time for him to return the favor. The demon, excited by the challenge, invited Dallin to do his best, promising to respond with care and kindness. After exchanging sarcastic pleasantries, the two began their fight. As the combat intensified, Lucia used Dallin as a step, launching herself into the air. Now airborne, Lucia prepared to strike the demon with all her might, determined to avenge her fallen comrade. Below her, the demon, seemingly oblivious, didn't react. But Dallin quickly realized it was a trap and shouted for Lucia to abort her attack. As she neared her target, the demon unleashed a powerful attack, like something out of a platform game's final boss fight. The blast was so strong that Lucia coughed up blood. Dallin had to catch her to prevent her from crashing violently to the ground. Both were stunned. This demon was supposed to be low level, yet he was incredibly strong. But there was no time to dwell on it. As the battle raged on, Dallin realized what had happened. The demon was absorbing power from the sacred sword hidden within the dungeon. Given the circumstances, Dallin knew he had to go all out. Using the domain, a power that made the impossible possible, Dallin began to shift the tides. The demon's confidence faltered as he felt an immense pressure building. Before him stood no ordinary human, and in disbelief, the demon asked if Dallin had truly mastered the territory. Confident, Dallin confirmed that he had. He warned the demon to prepare for the biggest beating he had ever witnessed. The demon, despite being washed, had not anticipated that Dallin could wield such power. Yet he insisted that no matter Dallin's efforts, he would not be defeated. Dallin stood his ground, waiting for the demon's attack. When it came, Dallin confidently countered, destroying the demon's assault with ease. Seizing the opportunity, he charged at the demon, whose disbelief deepened as he watched events spiral out of control. The mercenary was ready to end things without hesitation. Panicking, the demon's fear grew. He knew that he was in real danger of dying a painful death. To defend himself, the demon summoned a magical barrier, boasting that Dallin wouldn't even be able to scratch him. Enraged, Dallin retorted that the demon talked too much and did too little. With a powerful strike, Dallin shattered the demon's defense. Though the blow wasn't fatal, the demon lost several of his horns. But that wasn't enough for Dallin. He continued to apply pressure. The demon, now filled with rage, attempted to counterattack. Despite his strength, he couldn't land a hit on the persistent human. Using his abilities was taking a toll on Dallin's body, but his enhanced stamina was paying off. Without it, his body would have already been in pieces. Before him, the demon whined in agony, one of his arms severely injured. The demon moaned, realizing his malicious body wasn't regenerating from the blows. Despite his injured state, the demon still couldn't believe Dallin a human who had just entered the labyrinth, could wield territory. Out of desperation, the demon called for his corrupted knight to defend him. A mournful figure stepped between Dallin and the demon. The knight, with a gaping hole in his chest, prepared to engage Dallin. Though just a body, the knight was skilled enough to block Dallin's attack. This was a setback for Dallin's plans. He hadn't anticipated another enemy. Finally, Dallin noticed something strange about the knight's body. It became clear that this was no ordinary foe. He was his sacred knight. Desperate, the demon fled, ordering his corrupted knight to buy him time. The body of Barrett obeyed the demon's command, blocking Dallin's advance. This was even more unexpected since a low-class demon shouldn't be able to control his sacred knight. That's when Dallin noticed the strange chain around Barrett's neck, Hallman's chains, a powerful relic that forces an opponent to obey its master. Now Dallin understood how things had happened. The situation wasn't good. He needed to end this before the demon could fully regenerate. Lucia, behind him, began to apologize, feeling the weight of the situation. She said that her friend Barrett's body had been taken by evil, and it was her responsibility to resolve it. She urged Dallin to continue pursuing the fleeing demon, as she still had things to say to her stupid companion. Gripping her sword tightly, Dallin confirmed that the body before them was indeed Barrett's. Given the circumstances, Dallin decided to trust her. Lucia Castashel, an apprentice knight and investigator who eradicated the corrupt among the sacred, now had the duty to purify Barrett's body. She leaped towards the corrupted knight, who advanced in response, following his master's orders. Their swords clashed, and the fight between them was fierce. Meanwhile, the demon, who had managed to regenerate slightly, felt elated. Dallin caught up with him and asked if the demon had absorbed more power from the sacred sword. The demon, with a wicked grin, confirmed it, adding that things would be different from now on. Once again, the battle between Dallin and the demon began. But this time, it was harder, as the demon now wielded a new weapon. Dallin knew it was time to use his newly acquired ability. A red glow enveloped him as Dallin activated the pulverizing sword. The demon, now desperate, realized that not only could Dallin wield territory, but he also possessed incredibly dangerous skills. Furious, the demon asked how someone as mediocre as Dallin could do all of this. Desperate, he launched an attack, but his sword was completely shattered by Dallin's defense. Dallin's strike was too powerful for the demon, who was finally sliced apart. The blow had been devastating, and Dallin, surprised by his own strength, smiled. With the demon's defeat, 2 more bodies were discovered in the now silent dungeon. Meanwhile, the fight between Lucia and Barrett continued. They exchanged blows without stopping, but Lucia hesitated to do what needed to be done. Memories of the past flooded her mind. She remembered a wooden sword falling to the ground. Lucia had once told Barrett that he was too strong, which irritated her. Indeed, the future commander had extraordinary physical abilities, but Barrett, not seeing himself as a prodigy, asked her not to put so much pressure on him. Nevertheless, the compliments made him happy, though his change in posture frustrated her. Barrett remarked that Lucia had improved a lot since the last time they trained together. Lucia, proud, stood up, saying she had practiced a lot and would one day defeat him. With a calm smile, Barrett promised to face her whenever she wished. Now, however, they fought, but not in the way Lucia had wanted. She didn't want things to come to this. She didn't want to see the man she admired so much in this state. The confusion and the gravity of the situation were hard for her to bear. With skill, she managed to close the distance between them, pressuring Barrett with precise strikes. Lucia shouted at Barrett's body, saying she didn't want him to appear before her like this, especially not the last time they would meet. But Barrett's unresponsive body didn't react to her words. The clash of their swords lessened, and they distanced themselves once again. Now Barrett was just a body, devoid of reactions. Lucia was resolute that the right thing to do was to end his life there. Barrett prepared to attack again with no emotion whatsoever. He raised his sword to block her next strike. When their swords clashed once more, Lucia was precise, but she suffered a minor wound on her face. Barrett, too, was injured, and his wounds were more severe. Lucia, catching her breath, acknowledged that he was still talented, but this time he had lost. Barrett's body began to be engulfed in holy white flames. Soon, his entire body was consumed by the fire. Lucia, standing before him, was determined to end it all. But then something made her hesitate. As she looked at Barrett, she noticed something that stopped her from delivering the final blow. A look of emotion appeared on Barrett's face, and a brief word of gratitude escaped his lips. Lucia struggled to hold back her tears as she witnessed what was happening. She tightened her grip on her sword, determined to finish what they had begun. This was her final farewell to Barrett Strumman, the Sacred Knight, a great and talented prodigy with impeccable conduct and exemplary ethics. Finally, Lucian delivered the strike that ended everything. Though wounded, a faint smile formed on his face. Prostrating herself, Lucia gave in to her emotions. This was not the ending she had wanted for her friend, who vanished like sacred ashes. Dallin remarked that the knight must have been happy, knowing that his last moments were spent in her company. Tears streamed down Lucia's face. Overcome with emotion, she cried like a child. The dusk lit the sky as Barrett fulfilled his purpose in life. In another scene, 2 men discussed how the demon had also perished, calling him useless, incapable of protecting the sword he had been given. One of them warned the other to be cautious in criticizing a demon, as the other was a traitor among the sacred knights. The man reprimanded the older one, reminding him they weren't in a place where they could raise suspicion. Indeed, there was no harm in being careful. As they left, one mentioned that the other was welcome to visit the cave at any time, as the demon had authorized it. Now it was time for them to plan their next move. Standing before a simple gravestone, Lucia lamented that Barrett would be missed. She added that he would be remembered as a sacred knight who fell while performing his duty. With the mission completed, it was time to discuss payment, and Lucia asked Dallin if he had any amount in mind. Dallin indeed had something in mind, something that only the sacred knights could provide him. At the Order's headquarters in Palshan, they were received by the knights. A man greeted them, saying that their efforts in coming this far were appreciated and recognized. He introduced himself as Albus, administrative officer of the Order. The mercenary introduced himself, and Lucia mentioned that it had been a while since they had been formally presented. Although their achievement warranted recognition from the captain himself, he wouldn't be available to meet them personally, and he hoped they would understand. Their reward would be 30 gold coins and a recommendation for a sacred tattoo. This was a unique ability granted by the god of war to the Order of Sacred Knights, allowing for the efficient use of divine power. The tattoo was primarily used to enhance physical and magical power, though it wasn't limited to just that. Now Dallin would need to go to the Fissure, a place teeming with dormant divine power. Only the captain and vice captain could perform the ritual, so they would need to meet with one of them. Dallin was already planning to visit that location, so he would be seeing them soon. But Albus added that there was something else he wished for them to accept. It was a corrupted relic, the Chain of Halman, which had been lost for 400 years. In its current state, they couldn't use it, but Albus thought Dallin might make better use of it. Dallin's eyes lit up with joy at hearing this, but he knew there was more, and he urged Albus not to beat around the bush. Indeed, Albus had something to ask of the mercenary. Lucia felt embarrassed by the blunt way Dallin spoke. Turning to the officer, she said that this mercenary wasn't someone who could be bought with compliments and gifts. She then handed her reward to Dallin, stating that she had received it because of his efforts and hoped he would accept it. This wasn't the reaction Albus had expected, nor the outcome he anticipated. Apologizing, Albus admitted he had acted inappropriately, but Dallin wanted to know what situation had driven him to such behavior. A moan of hesitation crossed Albus's lips. Someone within the Order was seeking possession of the sacred sword. Lucia couldn't believe it. Barrett had already died because of it, and she refused to accept that someone else wanted the sword. Even Albus found it hard to believe. He had received a letter a few days ago instructing that if the sword was recovered, it should be sent to the Order's headquarters. But upon inspecting the letter, he found the hidden message within it. Lucia didn't understand, but Dallin quickly realized that there was a traitor inside the Order. Without hesitation, he agreed to help them, and Albus thanked him for his support. Albus offered to make another recommendation for a sacred tattoo and to provide more coins, but Dallin refused. He didn't need riches now. He had already received his reward, he said, holding the relic in his hand. Elsewhere, they spoke of ensuring that the message would soon be delivered. A look of surprise crossed the woman's face as she said she had heard rumors that Dallin had left the labyrinth and would only return in a few days. Before she could finish, she heard the sound of footsteps. She turned around to see who had arrived. It was Dallin, and he remarked that if she kept shouting like that, her ears might just fall off her head. Apologizing, she admitted that she hadn't expected him back so soon. Even the man present was happy, barely believing it was him. Dallin confirmed it was indeed him. The man expressed his deep gratitude that Dallin had returned safely, but the mercenary could tell he was very drunk. Noticing the silhouette of what he was carrying, Sienna asked what he had with him. Placing the chest on the table, Dallin told her to give it to an expert who could open it without damaging it and to have whatever was inside discounted in 4 days. Seated at the table, he wanted to know what brought Bulkman there, and Sienna explained that she would tell him. She said that he had asked her to search for things that could increase physical strength. She found nothing in rituals or spells because they either had severe side effects or required impossible to obtain ingredients. So she shifted her focus to herbs, especially those from wandering merchants and specialized cultivators. Bulkma, lifting his glass and raising his voice, said that's when he found exactly what Dallin had been looking for. He asked Dallin if he remembered the small town of Lebebak, and Dallin said he did. Near that town, dozens of mandrakes had been discovered. Dallin could hardly believe what he had just heard. Indeed, it could very well be just a rumor. Even Sienna suspected it was merely gossip, but Bulkma, confident in his financial expertise, claimed that when it came to money, he knew more than both of them. If the rumor were true, it had probably been downplayed. There were likely more mandrakes than people realized. This legendary herb not only boosts magic, but also stamina. However, it could scream so loudly that it might cause a human heart to explode. Meanwhile, the Action Witch had already started executing her plans. Lebebak was located in the southwestern part of the continent, in the same direction as the Fissure, where the Sacred Knights were stationed. Dallin asked if Bulkma was heading there to make money, and indeed, that was the plan. If that was the case, Dallin decided to join him, which delighted Bulkma even more. But then Bulkma paused, remembering something before raising a toast. He realized he hadn't understood that Dallin meant to actually accompany him on the journey. He couldn't believe it. So Dallin repeated that Bulkma had said he was heading to that town and Dallin would be going with him. Inside the fortress, there were horses and soldiers preparing for the journey. It should have been a pleasant business trip, but Bulkma had grown quite tired during the travel. As Bulkma tried to recover, someone greeted him with a good morning. It was Dallin who, noticing his friend's weary expression, asked if something was wrong. Perhaps it was just a hangover, and not knowing who the woman beside him was, Dallin asked about her. Lucia introduced herself as a sacred knight. Since they were heading in the same direction, Dallin had decided to bring her along on the journey. Bulkma felt honored to meet a sacred knight. He started to flatter both of them, which left them feeling a bit embarrassed, and Dallin asked when they would be departing. Bulkma said they would leave early in the afternoon, so Dallin said he would return before then. As they left, Bulkma asked where they were headed, and Dallin replied that he had killed a demon and was going to collect his reward. The essence of demons could guarantee a significant reward for those who could obtain it, and that was the place where they would retrieve it. The management office of the labyrinth held the key to their reward. But there was a far more important reason for their visit. They wanted to speak with one of the transcendentals of the Diamond Palace. Evan invited Dallin to sit in his office, offering something to drink. Before long, a warm beverage was served. Defeating a demon on his first visit to the labyrinth was impressive, but Dallin downplayed it, saying it was just luck, and that luck still seemed to be on his side. Evan observed him with curiosity after that remark. Not only once but twice, Dallin had encountered the Transcendentals. Earlier, he hadn't recognized Evan as he appeared quite different from what was expected in the game. The Man of 1,000 Faces, Leverin Hakim, was essentially a one-man army. Dallin knew he needed to gain his favor and turn him into an ally. Evan mentioned that Dallin was being watched by the gods, and there was only one way to achieve that. Dallin began to mention how apostles and demons, all of them, spoke about their gods. Perhaps the gods had some kind of disorder that made them enjoy spying on humanity. Before he could finish the sentence, the energy in the room shifted completely. Even the tea in his cup almost spilled over. The man before him said sternly, "That tone I just heard borders on blasphemy." Trying to explain himself, Dallin replied, "I'm not exactly a man of faith." The man continued, "I don't know. Perhaps you have no faith at all. And sure, you aren't from this region." It was as if the man knew everything about Dallin, leaving him unsure of how to respond. Looking at him, the man asked, "What's so funny?" Dallin answered, "I've never been past the frozen mountains." Maybe your watcher of 100 eyes and storyteller of 1,000 years forgot to mention that. For some reason, this made the man smile. He hadn't expected Dallin to know about the prophet, and he admitted, "Contrary to what I thought, you're a fascinating man." He added, "Talking to you feels like speaking with my friends, the ones people call transcendentals." It seemed Dallin had survived the worst and now had the man's full attention. Cutting to the point, he asked Dallin, "Do you have the essence of the demon you defeated? If so, I'd like to take a look." The carriages moved through the forest. Inside one of them sat Dallin and Lucia. On Dallin's lap was a bag full of gold coins. He hadn't expected such a significant reward, especially with what Sienna had managed to obtain as well. With this, he could now afford high-quality equipment and even more relics. At the window, a young boy brought a message from Bulkma, asking how Dallin's trip was going. Dallin replied that everything was fine in his carriage. Noticing the boy, he asked, "Are you new here?" The question stirred memories of his earlier days. Curious, Dallin asked the boy's name and found out he was called Perrin. It was his third mission, and he still hadn't received his mercenary registration. Encouraging him, Dallin said the registration would come soon if he kept working hard. The boy's face lit up with excitement, and Lucia, surprised by Dallin's kindness, commented, "I didn't expect that from you." Confused, Dallin asked, "What do you mean?" "I didn't think you'd be kind to a child so easily," she said. "I thought you were just a mission-obsessed mercenary, always chasing money." Dallin chuckled, admitting that the boy reminded him of his younger self. As they continued their conversation, a voice suddenly shouted, "We're under attack." A massive horde of orcs charged toward them. Quickly disembarking, Lucia sighed, wishing for a peaceful journey, while Dallin asked, "Where's Bulkma?" Scanning the area, Dallin's system alerted him to the presence of a young mercenary's body and another who wielded lightning. In the middle of the orcs, one of them seemed to be the leader. Excited, Dallin declared he would lead the charge and called for those willing to follow. As he advanced, the orcs were dismembered mercilessly in his path. However, the snow caused Dallin to slip slightly. Reflecting on how hard he had been pushing himself lately, he wondered if fatigue was finally catching up with him. As he tried to regain his footing, an orc prepared to strike him with its club. Against all odds, the young boy Perrin intervened, saving him just in time. "Are you alright?" Perrin asked as Dallin thought to himself, "This kid's really good." Passing by him, Dallin thanked the boy and assured him, "I'm fine." Now he needed to remain vigilant. Feeling weary, Dallin decided to finish the fight quickly. With one swift throw of his axe, he split the orc leader's head in two. In a hurry, he moved to claim the green-skinned corpse of that disgusting beast. As the battle ended, orc bodies littered the snowy ground. Perrin, full of admiration, said, "Lucia, you're amazing. Do you think I could become a holy knight one day?" Lucia, smiling warmly, replied, "If you keep training, you'll be even stronger than me one day. You're already pretty talented." Curious, the boy asked, "Why are orcs here? They're not from this region." Lucia explained that they might be refugees from territorial conflicts. Listening intently, Dallin wanted to know more about the situation. With monsters becoming more active recently, there wasn't enough space for them in the mountains anymore. This was the first stage of an invasion, where the monsters of the continent grew more aggressive. However, Lucia noted that the invasion wasn't intense enough to have caused the orcs to lose their territory just yet. That would happen during the second stage of the invasion. Maybe it means they have skipped the practice phase and are now truly starting the game. Before the bodies, he begins collecting them. A notification from the system says he inherited the skills of that body. His senses, intelligence, and mana increased by 1 point each. As a newly inherited ability, he can now manipulate electricity. That ability will be very useful in Levibok. While he is distracted, someone from the caravan calls him back saying they are ready to depart. Dallin says he's coming. It won't take long until he meets the Ash Witch. There are many people in the city, probably because the rumor of the mandrakes has spread. He asks where the mercenary is going, and the latter responds that he will stay there for a few more days. Since he will be leaving soon, he bids them farewell, as he can't waste time selling his things. Lucia asks why they joined the caravan of merchants. He asks if Lucia knows anything about witches, but she only read about them in her previous lessons. They have the power of an archmage by birth and were persecuted due to their immense power. As a result, there are very few left, and they are generally hostile towards ordinary humans. Indeed, that is true, and one of them is in this city, one who hates humanity more than the other witches, and he is here to eliminate this witch. Lucia wants to know if this witch is related to the growth of mandrakes. Even though they are medicinal herbs, once harvested, they begin to scream, which could end up killing someone. If hundreds of them were harvested at once, a great tragedy could befall the city. If that's the case, they should hurry, but Dallin asks her to calm down. After all, he has a plan. A small mouse scurries along the city floor. That place they are in doesn't have good energy, and Lucia, being a sacred knight, confirms this. The witch is preparing a powerful ritual, and she needs people to help gather sacrifices. Inside, someone asks who they are and what they want. Dallin is confident that he has found something. That dark mana and the smell is certainly a dark mage. He heard that there was a good fortune teller in that place, and the figure says he didn't know Dallin was a customer. From inside, Dallin apologizes. The mysterious eyes now focus on Lucia. He says they came to the right place. Opening the door discreetly, he invites them in to continue the conversation inside. So both of them enter the house. They follow the short man through the dimly lit place. Dallin senses that there are 6 people upstairs, and counting the man in front of them, there are 7 in total. He wants the man to hurry up and get his fortune read by the woman. But the man says she's not there right now, and she's preparing for something bigger. Before he finishes speaking, several mages jump at them in a hostile manner. They expect them to become sacrifices for the greater cause they've been speaking of. Dallin is unimpressed by it. Lucia also gets ready to attack them. A great flash of abilities lights up the interior of the house. The mages try to attack, but their attempts are completely futile. One of them, now badly injured, realizes that Lucia is a sacred knight. She doesn't bother to confirm it, only calling him disgusting. The others, noticing that she is a sacred knight, panic and focus their attacks on her. A huge mistake, as Dallin smiles at the situation. After all, he is the real danger in that place, not anyone else. It doesn't take long for the ones who aren't dead to be writhing in pain on the floor. One of them is still alive, and the mercenary stares at him. The terrified mage wants to know who they are, if they were sent by the order of the sacred knights. Then Dallin grabs him firmly by the neck. Frightened, the mage decides to tell them where the old lady they are looking for is. That was exactly what Dallin wanted, sarcastically saying that the mage would be her sacrifice. From now on, they would be inside the witch's barrier. Dallin orders the mage to keep walking without stalling. The demonic mana is getting stronger, a sign they are nearing the witch. As they walk, Dallin notices something. Lucia senses his unease and asks what he saw. It might have been his imagination, but he felt the sacred sword move. Lucia says it must be drained of all divine power, but Dallin insists that he felt something and found it odd. Regardless, she also feels a cursed mana in the place. Before he could finish speaking, Dallin saw a cage filled with people. They were writhing in pain, and some of their appearances were disfigured, creating a disturbing and cruel scene too harsh to behold. Lucia took a moment to believe what her eyes were seeing. Among those people was Perrin, the young boy from the journey. She wanted to free him immediately, but Dallin held her back, asking her to wait. In disbelief, she questioned him, insisting they needed to save him right away. It was then that a sinister voice echoed. The witch was there, watching them. "For a barbarian, you sure think quickly," the witch sneered. A strong wind blew in front of them, and the witch revealed herself. With a malicious smile, she said it was very rude of them to invade her territory. "Didn't your parents teach you not to enter other people's homes like that?" she mocked. Lucia, enraged, demanded to know how the witch had the courage to commit such atrocities. However, the witch only took notice of the fact that a holy knight was present, something quite unusual. The mage, now cowering in fear, knew he should not have brought them there and began pleading for mercy, claiming he was threatened. The witch had no patience for his excuses. She reminded him that she had asked for sacrifices, and if he failed, disobedient children deserved death. Before he could finish explaining, his face began to change, contorting in pain. Before the witch could act against Dallin and Lucia, Dallin's axe had already struck her in the face. He was tired of all the pointless chatter and knew that was just a fake body. He demanded the real witch show herself. She stood up, smiling, impressed by Dallin's quick thinking, and said he was smarter than he looked. "This is going to be fun," she stated with a wicked look, asking if they wanted to play with an innocent old grandma. With a gesture, she summoned giant wolves to entertain Lucia. Concerned, Dallin asked Lucia if she could handle it, and she affirmed she could, although she was clearly nervous. They moved into combat. Dallin, using his jump ability, leaped ahead, cutting the path to approach the witch. He attempted to strike her several times, but to no avail. She seemed to enjoy the situation, taunting him as she dodged easily. The witch then cast a fire spell, expecting him to show his true power. Dallin, however, channeled lightning into his axe, surprising the witch. Distracted, she didn't notice that he was actually aiming at her true body, which was far away. A loud explosion occurred in the distance, and the real witch's body was hit. Coughing, she admitted she had been careless. The citizens are tense, unsure of what's happening, with some thinking it might be an earthquake. The witch wants to destroy everyone in the city, but Dallin says he knows about the humiliation she suffered there. Still, her actions are unjustifiable. Her methods are cruel and inhumane. Revenge or not, she would never be forgiven for what she did to others. She should use the life she has to pay for the sins she's committed. His speech made the witch reconsider some things. Even though centuries had passed, she never forgot. The humans were indeed terrified of the power witches wielded. They were persecuted and repressed with violence. Knowing all she had endured in her life, she disliked being judged by the mercenary, as he knew nothing of what she had gone through until now. Her demonic aura grew immensely, repelling Dallin far away. It was then that he noticed something. The witch opened several portals and said she would burn him until only bones remained. As lightning bolts approached, he did his best to defend himself. Dallin struggled to concentrate his remaining strength. With one strike of his sword, he deflected the lightning. A massive flash surged across the horizon. In the clearing of the battle, a huge mark was etched into the ground. Dallin tried to catch his breath while looking for the witch, unsure of where she was or if she had fled the scene. Finally, he identified someone coughing heavily. The fight had been easy. Despite her receiving power from a dark god, perhaps she hadn't fully adapted to it yet. Brandishing his sword again, he was determined to end it all now. Without hesitation, he rushed toward the witch with speed, but she wasn't the least bit surprised by the imminent attack. Before he could reach her, she raised one of her hands. Besides irritating her deeply, he was making her use things she had kept in reserve. Dallin didn't understand what she meant by things. Looking around, he noticed the mandrakes, and it seemed they were starting to awaken. Slowly, they began to rise from the ground. Immediately, a terrifying, blood-curdling scream filled the air. Dallin now found himself in the midst of a deadly and horrifying cacophony. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground. Tomato juice floated from his mouth, and he couldn't move. The witch said the fight had been fun, but now he wouldn't be able to do anything against her. Summoning a powerful spell, she conjured a large fireball above her, intending to finish off the mercenary once and for all. She attacked him, taking advantage of his inability to defend himself. The fireball consumed everything in its path. Once again, destruction could be seen across the horizon. Finally, she completed her attack, remarking that Dallin had lasted longer than expected. She couldn't even remember the last time she had to exert so much effort to defeat a human. As she admired the devastation caused by her spell, she was pleased with how much she had enjoyed herself. Now all that was left was for her to return to the city. But someone asked her where she thought she was going. A different blade appeared. The witch couldn't believe what she saw and demanded to know how it was possible. The mercenary was wielding the sacred sword. Earlier, he hadn't been wrong about the sword. When the witch used her mana, he felt it resonate again. The sacred sword had trembled gently. Even so, the witch was in disbelief that this had happened. The sword could only be wielded by those chosen by the god of war, and it seemed Dallin had been unexpectedly chosen. Dallin taunted her, saying that even the god of war wanted her gone. Referring to the sword, he quipped that it should have vibrated more as he would have used it from the start. Now with the sword in hand, he challenged the witch to attack him again, promising that this time he would finish her properly. However, the witch refused to accept the taunt, declaring that losing to him was absurd. Even with the sacred sword, defeating her was impossible. Dallin glanced around and noticed green ashes accumulating. They were so hot that it seemed if they touched his skin, he would melt. This was one of the witch's innate abilities, the curse of the ashes. As she gathered her power, the witch said that even if he was chosen by the god of war, it didn't matter. He would turn to ashes all the same. The sacred sword had two primary abilities. The first was its immense durability. Dallin prepared himself, channeling his lightning ability. With the sword charged with energy, he readied himself to counter her attack. This is the second ability of the sword, enhancing the user's abilities. The witch is in disbelief that her attack was repelled so easily. While she is distracted, Dallin prepares to strike once again. With the sacred sword in hand, he is ready to deliver another attack. The witch didn't think he could still use his territory. This time, the attack flies through the air, leaving the witch powerless to stop it. With little choice, she uses her curse once again, this time to defend herself. However, Dallin's attack is too powerful now. An explosion of blue light erupts in the clearing, electricity surging through the witch's body. Though heavily injured and panting, she mocks Dallin, asking if he thinks he has won the battle. Dallin is confused by her words, and the witch reveals her plan. She had planted over 2,000 mandrakes in the forest. If they all screamed at once, every resident in the city would die. Even with her death, her revenge, planned for years, would be fulfilled. Dallin responds by acknowledging that mandrakes are sensitive to their environment and only grow in a dense forest like the one they're in. The witch confirms this, but says there's nothing he can do about it. However, she has overlooked something. Dallin mentions that he could simply destroy the forest with his sword. Coincidentally, he possesses a skill that would be perfect for this moment, gained from defeating the demon in the labyrinth, Fire Rain. As he begins to invoke the spell, the witch is stunned. She demands to know how it's possible that Dallin is using a spell once cast by the former master of the Agnella magic tower. Elsewhere, Lucia is still engaged in battle. She runs through the forest, trying to avoid the wolves, knowing Dallin is still fighting the witch and that she must hurry. One of the wolves charges at her with great force. Lucia dodges its attack and lands on a tree branch, which she uses as leverage to jump back and strike. Her blow is devastating, and the wolf's blood sprays into the air. The remaining wolf, terrified after witnessing its comrade's beheading, trembles in fear. Lucia wastes no time and prepares to attack the last one. With incredible agility, she makes multiple swift strikes, leaving the beast severely wounded. Finally, she pauses to catch her breath, eager to reunite with Dallin as soon as possible. Looking toward the horizon, she notices something surprising, fire raining down from the sky, setting the forest ablaze. Meanwhile, all of Dallin's clothes have been burnt away, but his dragon's blood continues to heal him. The witch, engulfed in flames, doesn't understand how a human could know such powerful magic and still possess dragon's blood. Before she can say anything else, her ashes are scattered by the wind. The system notifies Dallin that his target has finally been silenced. Looking at the remains, Dallin remarks how villains always seem to say the same things. Now he must collect the body left behind. But Lucia is approaching, wanting to check if Dallin is alright. He assures her that everything is fine, but Lucia is left stunned by the unusual scene in front of her. Her face turns bright red, as though it might explode. Dallin, ever the oblivious one, doesn't understand what's happening until he finally realizes that he's standing naked in front of her. He explains that the fight was more intense than expected. Lucia, mustering all her courage, shouts at him, saying that it doesn't matter how intense the fight was, he shouldn't be naked in front of her at such a moment. She quickly tells him she will find something for him to wear and orders him to cover up until then. Despite the fierce battle, the city remains calm. Finally, Dallin is dressed in new clothes. Thanks to the gold coins he had, he was able to buy high-quality equipment. 2 days have passed since the witch's death. The mandrakes were completely burned, and the merchants who had come to the city because of them have now left. Dallin announces his arrival and is greeted by Lucia. She asks how he's doing, and he replies that he's better after resting. Dallin then inquires about the boy, and Lucia informs him that he woke up briefly but quickly fell back to sleep. Unfortunately, the other captives didn't survive. Seeing the boy in such a state fuels Dallin's hatred toward Anaxagus. Perhaps the reason he was brought to this land is to defeat this dark god. Dallin turns to Lucia, wanting to know how she's doing after her battle. Lucia is physically fine despite the battle, but she feels sad, lamenting that if they had arrived earlier, the boy wouldn't be in such a state. As for the sense of guilt, there's not much Dallin can do. He understands that losing someone you care about is an experience no one wants to go through more than once. Dallin tells her not to blame herself too much, as even though they couldn't save everyone, they managed to save that young boy, which is already a significant victory. Looking at him, Lucia reflects on his words. Indeed, it's essential to see the positive side of life. As Dallin prepares to leave, he asks her to take care of the boy because he has things to do in the forest. He explains that when she hurried him out of there, he didn't manage to retrieve something important. As he leaves, she teases him, saying it was his fault for not being cautious and having his clothes incinerated. Looking at the devastated forest, Dallin admits he didn't expect the power of the ability to be so great. However, there's nothing he can do now, as it was necessary to deal with the mandrakes, though he feels a little bad for the merchants. Finally, he finds what he was looking for. Indeed, he had been defeated by the witch multiple times. There are 5 bodies here. He begins the process of collecting them. His senses and strength increase by 1 point each. There's nothing special from the herbalist or the warrior, but there are still other bodies left to collect. Among them, there was a sacred knight who had been chasing the witch. Looking at the body, he tries to recall the knight's name. He remembers that the knight had been infatuated with the witch's appearance and pursued her throughout the game. A somewhat embarrassing memory for Dallin. Collecting the body, his stamina increases by 1 point. He also gains a new skill, Curse Prevention Seal, a very useful ability when dealing with dark mages. Looking back, he contemplates what's left. This is the final body to collect, and so he begins the process. Something different happens this time. A dark energy coalesces, forming something resembling a dagger in the middle. Dallin picks it up. It's the Black Moon Spellbreaker dagger, capable of cutting through and destroying enchantments. Although powerful, it can be countered with a sword strike. He hadn't expected to collect items along with the bodies. Excited, Dallin looks forward to finding the remaining bodies. Now that he's done what he needed, he heads back to the city. Behind him, a peculiar flower sprouts from the ground. Timing couldn't be better. Later that night, Dallin is sitting in the tavern, quietly drinking at the bar. The battle had been fruitful. He collected 4 bodies and even obtained an item. But the greatest achievement was being able to wield the sacred sword. The Knight's Order official had told him the sword had lost all of its divine power, meaning it shouldn't have vibrated. Dallin wonders if the god of war really chose him. While he ponders, someone approaches, asking why he's still in town. It's the shopkeeper, who recognizes him even from behind. Dallin asks why he's in the bar and if he's looking for work. Gallius responds that his business is large and preparations take time. Gallius asks about Perun, the boy from the journey, and Dallin explains that the boy's injuries are quite serious. Even Gallius expresses regret over what happened to the boy. Moved, Gallius hands over a large sum of money, asking Dallin to give it to Perun so he can take care of himself while he recovers. Seeing the large amount, Dallin asks if it's okay. Gallius, as a merchant who crossed paths with the boy, says it's the least he can do. Dallin smiles, appreciating the merchant's kindness, remarking that he's much more generous than he appears. Gallius says it's his greatest virtue. However, Gallius then shares some troubling rumors he's heard recently. The dead are rising in the northern frontier of the Empire. Dallin is shocked and asks him to repeat what he just said. Gallius reassures him, saying it's just a rumor for now, and begins to explain the source. In the Northern Empire, there's a town called Langleton, where pagan cultists have appeared suddenly. They've been spreading word that the end is near, telling people to prepare an altar and worship, for he will soon descend. Shortly after the cultists' arrival, strange things began happening at night. Skeletal remains were seen rising from their graves and entering the town. Dallin realizes this can only be the work of a necromancer. If they're speaking of the descent of a greater evil, there's no doubt about what's coming. The immortal demon will be released from its sealing soon. This will be annoying because he is truly immortal, which is why he was sealed. Dallin is thinking of ways to deal with him. This is taking up a bit of his thoughts, but there is a method that might work very well. Gallius wants to know if Dallin has any idea of what might be happening, and he says the rumor must be false but thanks him for sharing it with him. Inside where he is staying, he thinks a little more. Since he is busy transporting the sacred sword, now more work has come up to be done. Then he heard a voice in the background asking to be taken along. Lucia and Perun are arguing. She says that if something goes wrong from here on, the boy could lose his life. But he says he is prepared for that and wants to accompany them on the journey. Dallin says he should stay and recover, but he wants to know why they are arguing. Lucia says that as soon as the boy learned about their departure, he wanted to join them. Perun says he really wants to help them. He promises he won't be a burden. Taking an injured person with them is a big risk. The path leading to the destination of the sacred sword is dangerous, and there might still be a traitor in the order. But there's something about the boy that captivates him. Seeing his eyes, he already has an answer. Dallin wants to know if the boy would be able to pack his own things. Perun says he certainly could. He also wants to know if he can set up camp, and Perun says yes, but it might take a little time. With that, it's already decided. The boy will be hired as a porter and mercenary. This made him extremely grateful. Lucia watches the scene, but is apprehensive. She's not sure if things will turn out well because the boy is still injured. But everything will be fine because he brought something that could be useful. He picked it up on the way here. Perun can't believe what he's seeing. What's in his hands is a mandrake. Dallin gave him the plant, and Lucia wants to know how he got it, as she thought they had all been burned. But one of them was lucky and ended up surviving. With that, Dallin says they are leaving that night, and if the boy doesn't want to be a burden, he should eat well and recover quickly. Night has finally reached the city. They follow the path on horseback, and the boy is sleeping. In Lucia's lap, he is sweating a lot. She informs Dallin about this and says they should stop to rest a bit. The boy is too exhausted to continue. Since they have been camping for a while, Dallin decides to stop so they can rest. Lucia says she's glad they are with the boy and didn't expect Dallin to allow this. He says he didn't imagine she had such a poor impression of him. As Dallin requested, she's been teaching him in recent days, and his skills have improved significantly. His moves during the orc attack weren't a coincidence, and she is thinking of getting him to join the Order of Sacred Knights. Sacred Knight Perun, that's a title that sounds very good. As soon as she finished speaking, Dallin felt a strange energy. The same passed through Lucia, who also felt it. Riding his horse forward, he calls for Lucia, who said she also felt the same thing. They continue on their horses and approach a house. There's a smell of blood in the air. Lucia says they should inspect the place first, and he agrees. Leaving the boy leaning against a tree, he hopes he will be fine and safe. They should enter immediately and the door opens. Inside, they notice it's strong. A woman greets them and calls them visitors. It must have been hard for them to reach there. Her clothes resemble those of a maid. Dallin notices that it's not just the smell of blood in the place. It's the foul smell of blood in the air. It comes from someone who has hunted and consumed dozens of people. The woman asks if it's just the two of them, as she prepares meals based on the number of guests. Dallin says there are 3 and requests 2 rooms and 3 meals. The woman asks them to wait a little longer. He knows she must have deceived many people this way. Every sense in his body tells him this woman is extremely dangerous. Turning to Lucia, he asks if there's anything she needs. Then she says she would like to have her bath prepared before the meal. Dallin tells her to go up first. He will follow with Perrin. He glances at her discreetly. Lucia knows the place is dangerous, but they need to maintain the act. With the meal ready, the woman expects them to enjoy it well. Dallin thanks her for having made the meal. As he breaks the bread, he says he hasn't seen other guests and asks if business is going poorly. But she says there were a few last month and wants to know if he had heard anything on his way there. Dallin eats the bread while thinking. He said he had heard about bodies wandering in a nearby town. Reanimated bodies, she says she has never heard such a crazy story. The boy asks if she is from the Empire, but the woman became defensive. He says he is from the Empire and that she has the same accent as he does. Then she says she grew up there but hasn't returned to her homeland in 10 years. Hearing this, he was surprised that she still kept her accent. Because he's disappeared a year after leaving, he wants to know how she has maintained hers. A silence filled the room completely. Dallin was pleased with the boy's cleverness. This was an excellent excuse to let his axe sing. As he stands up, some men suddenly appear. Injured, they mumble that there was a monster there. Dallin knows that Lucia is upstairs. He asked the men if the monster is a sacred knight. Drying herself, she said they tried to attack her as soon as she entered the bath. This is definitely something serious. Looking at the woman, Dallin ordered her to start explaining quickly. Smiling, she said she would have consumed him calmly, but she can't do that anymore. Chanting an incantation, a detestable aura filled the place. Then undead began to reveal themselves in the room. The reanimated bodies were now there. Indeed, this is the work of a necromancer. Perrin defends himself from the bodies using his sword, but after cutting one of them, he was surprised by the result. Even without half its head, the body kept advancing. The woman says they are already dead and can no longer die because of that. Once they are exhausted, she will eat them and suggests they surrender obediently. Cutting one of the zombies, Dallin says she is right, the dead cannot die. But there are other ways to stop them. The dagger he received is a spell nullifier, and it can end the undead. Wielding it, he advances toward the bodies. Dallin is determined to make sure those bodies don't move anymore. His first strike is powerful. The necromancer cannot believe what she is seeing. Her spell had been completely destroyed. Against incantations and spells, it is necessary to use the right weapon. This dagger destroys most magic with just simple contact, and even small cuts from this dagger can produce a fatal curse on the sorcerer. Meanwhile, Perrin tries to defend himself from a zombie. Lucia realizes the boy is in danger. She asks him to hold on a little longer because she's coming to save him. But he tells her not to worry because he can handle it. The skeleton keeps getting closer. Before he could do anything, the body loses the light in its eyes and falls inert on the boy, who was disgusted. Even Lucia didn't understand and wonders if the necromancer had died. Now the boy asks for Lucia's help and she goes to his aid. Wounded, the necromancer wants to know how her spell was destroyed so easily, but she wasn't in the mood to hear the answer because she could provide them immediately. But once again, the black dagger comes into play. More wounds appear on the necromancer's body. As she agonizes, Dallin wants to know if she ordered sacrifices for the immortal demon, or if she had another plan in mind. It was good for her to speak quickly because he still had the patience to listen to her. Her cannibalism was just a degenerate pastime, definitely a lunatic. Lucia yells at him, saying they still have problems. They went down to the basement and found people tied up. Upon finding them, people told them more things. The immortal demon had already broken free from its seal. Hearing this, he ordered her to rest because they would leave in the morning. He needs to step out for a bit, and Lucia wants to know where the mercenary is going. Without hesitation, he says he is going to capture the immortal demon. She doesn't understand what he said because it is very risky and the demon cannot die. Faced with this, she wants to accompany him on this mission. However, he asks her not to worry about him because he has a plan. Besides, Dallin didn't mention anything about killing him. With the corrupted relic in hand, he repeated that he was going to capture him. 300 years ago, an entity ravaged the world with fear and destruction. This is the immortal demon who was fought by the sacred knights. However, their efforts were in vain due to his immortality. What they could do in the face of calamity was to use divine power to seal him. That's what the game said, and the cave he's heading to is the place where the demon was sealed. At the entrance of the cave, cultists are gathering to commit atrocities. One of them complains about the slow pace. One person asks for permission from the pagan priest. However, he orders them not to delay anymore and to enter the cave immediately. The young man wants to spare his daughter and have her sent back. Slapping the young man, the priest says none of them are in a position to ask for anything, and that this arrogant one would be more useful dead. As he prepares to strike the man, saying the same will be done to his daughter, a furious axe flies toward the cowardly clown. Before he could continue oppressing that family, his head became the new home for the axe. With one clown down, the others want to know who did it, because as soon as they caught him, he would be destroyed. But Dallin was already stepping forward to claim responsibility. Another fool is now under attack. One tries to warn that there are enemies, but his throat receives a fatal cut. Dallin continues to use his dagger to slice through the fools. The family watches the violence unfold as the cultists scream in pain and horror. After the action ends, he thanks the mercenary. However, one of the corpse's eyes opens mysteriously. Their bodies begin to rise from the ground. That is the work of one of them, who is also a necromancer. Dallin wants to know where this clown came from since he hadn't seen him before. The necromancer orders the bodies to attack the mercenary. With little patience, Dallin uses his combat skills to finish them off. Stiven, the bodies are flying through the air like crash test dummies. There wasn't much the necromancer could do now. Dallin threw his dagger at him. It ended up piercing the clown's leg. This made him flee deeper into the cave, and Dallin preferred to follow him to his base rather than finish him off immediately. As he walked, a system sound echoed in his ears. His combat skill was just 1% away from reaching the maximum level. Opening the status window, he saw that his skill proficiency was at 99%. Now he can't wait to see what will change when it reaches 100. One of the demon's hands is still chained. He says those with desires are truly a delicacy. The priest tells the demon to enjoy calmly because more sacrifices will soon arrive. Soon, he will have his full power restored. The necromancer had arrived and says it's an emergency because there's an intruder in the cave. The cultists say he shouldn't have interrupted the ritual. He finally says that a man appeared, killed his companions, and freed the people who were to be sacrificed. The demon scolds them for being unable to deal with a single human. He can't believe he's relying on insects like them. Then he started devouring them instead of the sacrifices they had lost. Blood sprays all over the place. That strong demonic energy was a delicacy for him, and Dallin thanks him for doing his job. This way, he didn't need to finish off the cultists. Looking at him, the demon realizes that this is the one who attacked his cave. He sees that there is a sacred sword on his back, but this man is not a sacred knight. Either way, it doesn't matter anymore. Breaking his chains, he says Dallin should consider this an honor, because he's about to witness the power of the immortal demon. Faced with this, the sacred sword begins to glow with blue lightning. In a single movement, he defends against the attack. The demon is impressed that this human is capable of using territory. Now he's going to show him something special, and Dallin remains focused. The curse of the death mist, which melts everything it touches. Even so, the more he observes Dallin, the more impressed he becomes. Dallin used his ability to prevent curses. The demon doesn't know how the human uses an elven seal, but that only works against minor curses. Now Dallin realizes he's in trouble, and one of the demon's tentacles hits him hard. Thinking he had incapacitated him, the demon wants to know what the mercenary will do, since he had dropped the sacred sword. Thanks to his regeneration, he gets back up and wishes he had a barrier to protect him from the curse. The demon says he will curse him until he dies, while Dallin thinks of a more powerful barrier. Then he used his combat skill again. That made something sudden happen. His proficiency had reached 100%, and the skill could now be used with territory. The mercenary paused for a moment. The demon wants to know if he had given up on fighting. The combat skill involves wearing armor, and he thinks of using territory as if it were his armor. Waiting for a reaction, the demon says he's bored, and decided he would burn him until only his bones remained. A massive beam of flames heads toward him, but Dallin doesn't even react. Flames really are a good idea. He's going to create his own armor, using the power of territory. Concentrating his mana, Dallin begins to emit a bluish glow. Chanting a spell, a huge explosion of fire erupts. The one watching in disbelief is the immortal demon. That new appearance of his is something the demon has never seen before, and he doesn't know how it happened. Dallin wants to know if the demon is done being impressed, because if it's over, it's time to get ready for a beating he won't be able to endure. The immortal demon does not know how to describe this transformation, but it doesn't really matter. From now on, the creature will move using subspace. The creature wants to take advantage of the moment to lower the hero's guard, but before it can finish its sentence, the monster takes an extremely fast and powerful punch. Armin doesn't even have time to react to the hit. Dallin follows up with a combo of punch after punch. The monster keeps getting beaten without pause, trying to understand where this bastard got such enormous power. With no break between the punches, the demon tries to find an opening. What the demon doesn't understand is when the protagonist became so strong. Dallin lands a charged punch right in the middle of the creature's face, slamming it into the ground. Then the final blow triggers an explosion. Without slowing down, the hero continues smashing the demon's face into the concrete with relentless punches. Armin, now in a smaller form, begs him to stop. Of course, Dallin knew his master's escape pattern. He suffered a lot in the game because of it. The creature keeps getting beaten, pleading for him to take a break. In a smaller and less threatening form, the immortal demon, with its head lowered, says it surrenders. While the little monster remains submissive, the protagonist pulls a chain from a bag, thinking that now at last the creature is useful. The prerequisite to using this chain is that the opponent must not resist. That's when the creature's core gets chained. The demon begs for mercy and salvation from the violence at the hands of its new master. Dallin's imposing shadow looms over the little creature. From now on, our protagonist wants to be called Master, and the demon realizes that its new fate won't be pleasant. The first rays of sunlight appear behind the mountain. Lucia and Param wait for their friend's return at the inn's entrance. The night is starting to get worried because the protagonist was supposed to arrive at dawn. In the distance, a silhouette approaches and young Param identifies it as Dallin. Lucia isn't sure. She can't see that far. Our hero approaches, dragging the demon like a toy. The woman notices that her partner is carrying something. Lucia asks if it is what she thinks it is. Proudly, Dallin confirms that yes, it is the immortal demon Arbin, and more than that, the creature is now his slave. Young Param plays with Arbin as if he were some kind of little pet. Lucia asks the protagonist how he managed to capture the demon, since this is a method that not even the Holy Knights thought of, which is why they sealed Arbin instead. Dallin asks if it's true that the Knights sealed the creature 300 years ago during the demon's subjugation. Hallman's chain was lost about 100 years before that during the Vampire Wars. So the Knights did not have this sacred relic available to do what he did. Lucia finds it amusing how extensive the hero's knowledge is, especially compared to the image she usually has of Dallin, which makes the protagonist curious about how she sees him. Param stops biting the monster because he spots something. The young man announces that they have arrived at the Noria Kingdom's checkpoint. At the city's entrance, there is a heavy flow of carriages and travelers. Param is impressed by how many people are there. The young man comments that the rumors are true. The guards have intensified inspections and now they even check luggage. And the hero feels that things will get complicated when they discover he is carrying gold coins. Dallin calls the demon Arbin. The protagonist asks how subspace works, and the creature explains that it has been out of mana since being defeated, so it can only activate this magic through its mouth. But before Arbin can finish its sentence, Dallin shoves the bag of coins down its throat, and the hero orders the demon to store the bag in subspace. Then the travelers approach the city's entrance. One of the guards, looking sleepy, asks the group to stop for an inspection. The first thing they ask for is an identification document, and Dallin quickly presents his. The guard asks where the group is heading, and the protagonist responds that they are going to the headquarters of the Holy Knights. Our hero pulls Param closer. Dallin explains that the knight with them said that her young half-brother has the potential to join the order, and that is the reason for their visit to the city. The guard immediately apologizes to Lucia and explains that the inspections are due to rumors of necromancers. Additionally, the soldier praises the boy, saying he already has the eyes of a true knight, and then he asks for a blessing for the young one. Param is delighted by the way he is treated. Dallin glances at the boy. At this moment, the boy cannot hide his happiness. And seeing the boy so happy makes our hero satisfied with himself. Someone in a great hurry shouts for the crowd to clear the way. A knight tries to enter the city running, but the guard stops him, yet the man on horseback announces that he is a messenger. Lucia seems to recognize the man and calls him Auckland, and the messenger also recognizes the woman. Auckland is relieved to see Lucia because he has something very important to tell her. Dallin identifies that the messenger is a holy warrior. Auckland announces that the commander has ordered Lucia and her group to run. Everyone is left confused by this information. The holy warrior reveals that the holy knights have split into two groups. The message is that an internal war is happening. In the past, the holy knights roamed the entire continent, building their reputation. The fact that they are now confined to a tiny kingdom is due to the commander's greed in wanting to seize power. Now they are going to reclaim the honor they had 300 years ago. And all the knights present shout and salute to the words spoken to them. Along with the Ash Witch, one of the most evil enemies in the central region, the vice commander of the Holy Knights, Everlock Glaston. Dallin was already planning to see this guy, but he didn't expect him to already be causing some kind of conflict. Our hero knows that the end is approaching rapidly. It would be impossible to cause a division among the knights who have been stable for thousands of years, so the vice commander conspired with the witch. Since ally the Ash Witch has died, he must be cornered in making his final stand. Lucia tells Dallin that they can finish the commission right here. Our hero asks if his friend won't need his help, but she responds that she doesn't want to involve an outsider in something dangerous. The knight says she will send compensation for the hero's help in transporting the sacred sword once the situation is resolved. But Dallin says he will take the weapon as an extra payment. The sword chose him, the blade was powerless, but its powers returned after our hero touched it, and to the protagonist, that means God chose him. But it doesn't matter if the payment is the sword or the sacred tattoos, sacred power is needed for these things to work. To obtain that, the best body can be found in the rift guarded by the Holy Knights, and our hero can only enter that place once this whole situation is stabilized. Dallin says he has enough reason to enter this war as well. Lucia thanks her friend for helping. Our hero tells her it's late and she should go to sleep now. Since arriving in Palshan, the protagonist has been getting more and more involved with the evil god Anaxagu. The apostles, the Null War Chief, and the Ash Witch, they are all connected to this evil god. Arbin suddenly emerges from one of his portals, startling the protagonist, claiming that he was born from a cauldron of Anaxagu and saying similar things. Then Dallin smacks the demon for appearing without his permission. And that's when our hero notices something in the forest. The leader of a group of assassins signals for the others to stop moving. Then a command is given for them to attack, and several men armed with swords emerge from the forest, ready for a stealth attack. The target is without shields, unlike what intelligence had reported, and unlike the order of the Holy Knights. If they obtain the sword, that will be enough for their group to win the war. And in a second, Dallin disappears in front of everyone. The leader hears one of his men being attacked, and he even tries to say that a mere mercenary shouldn't wield the sword, but just like all his men, he is cut down before realizing anything. The protagonist combines one attack after another without anyone being able to react. A strange glow comes from within the forest. Dallin reacts quickly enough to parry the chain strike in time. The chain stretches, revealing the origin of the attack. Our hero follows the weapon to its attacker, ready to finish him off. But in a matter of seconds, Dallin senses multiple projectiles approaching. Aimed at the movement of the sacred sword, the protagonist destroys the chain and cuts the bullets before they hit him. The protagonist hurls a magical attack toward the direction where the shots came from. Dallin knows he needs to deal with whoever made that last attack before they escape. The vice commander of the Knights, for political reasons, forced the leader of the special forces to carry out an unofficial task. That's why the protagonist knows that if even one of them manages to escape, the next attack will be much more elaborate and dangerous. The shooter is lying on the ground, injured by magic. Dallin asks if he was sent by the vice commander. The shooter wants to know how the mercenary knows that. For our hero, a dirty trick like this is exactly his style, and that comment sets the soldier off. The shooter quickly stands up, shouting at the protagonist for insulting his commander, and a large fire shot hits our hero in the face. For the honor of the Knights, but before the man can finish his speech, he takes a punch to the face. His face sinks in, helmet and all. Dallin says the soldier shouldn't dare to play with fire. Our hero thinks the knight is too dangerous. That's when the protagonist turns, throwing daggers toward a figure in the middle of the forest. But whoever it is, they manage to defend against the attack with ease. With a sword movement, they delicately deflect the thrown dagger to the ground. The knight apologizes for trying to surprise our hero. Then the mysterious figure picks up the dagger from the ground. The knight explains that he heard the vice commander sent his task force on a mission. This became a help, but ended up arriving a little late. Dallin accepts his dagger back and says the man arrived just in time. The warrior greets our hero as the man chosen by God, and the protagonist accepts and politely greets him back. Commander of the Holy Knights, Edgar Lionheart. Lucia feels a sharp pain. The knight attacks one of the invaders with only a dagger and ends up getting wounded in the process. Edgar always warned Lucia that she gets careless when she has the advantage. Param, excited, asks if it's true that the man before him is who he claims to be, but one with the ability to see the future, the leader of the Holy Knights known as the Guide. Edgar confirms that it is indeed him, but unfortunately, he does not have the power to see everything that happens in the future. The gift given by the God of War allows him to have revelations of the future, and that is the reason the Holy Knights have been able to withstand the many attacks on their order. The power to foresee battles beyond time, but as the Lionheart himself said, is not perfect. So much so that the revolt of his vice commander was not prevented. Lucia asks Edgar if he knew where they were heading. The commander says that God showed him when she crossed the border of the kingdom of Noria. A holy knight, a young swordsman, and the one who left his hometown and became a wanderer. Param is thrilled to be called a swordsman. To Dallin, it is no coincidence that the commander has seen a swordsman without an arm and missing one eye. Now the headquarters of the Holy Knights. Edgar says they need to engrave the sacred tattoo and also deal with the matter of the sword. For the commander, if Dallin is really going to help in this war, then he must learn about the plan as soon as possible. The protagonist asks if he will go alone, but Edgar says that Lucia will continue accompanying him. But the mage elder interrupts the conversation because he is very surprised to see his old friend. The old mage laughs, astonished to see a familiar face in such a distant place. Beside Elder, a young man also welcomes our hero. He says that since the last time they were together, things have changed a lot and he has become much stronger. Dallin asks Elder what he is doing here. The mage explains that the knight's base is surrounded by mountain barriers. Jangla El Gaias, the first mage of the tower and one of the first sorcerers born over 1,200 years ago, is the one who created this protective magic. Dallin didn't know that, but Elder is here to learn how to create these barriers. Changing the subject, the mage wants to know if our protagonist has found a master. Elder can see that our hero has grown a lot since the last time they met, and just by looking at his aura, the mage already feels encouraged. The doors to the meeting hall open. Lucia apologizes for the delay because Param was joining the knights. Now that everyone is present, the commander will explain all the details of their situation and the plan. The vice commander and his special troops are launching multiple attacks, and they have even taken the third sanctuary. Last night, one of the vice commander's men was captured and interrogated. It seems that the knights and the special troops have had their minds affected by a brainwashing curse. Lucia doesn't understand how a knight who possesses divine magic could be affected by a curse when their bodies should be protected from such things. Edgar believes that either a witch or a dragon is responsible for this. Dallin wonders if he is referring to the dragon in the rift and whether that means the creature already has enough power to interfere with the world. The commander believes that to break this curse, they need to enter the ruins underground. Elder wants to know if this is the map of the ancient ruins of the Sandstorm dynasty, and the commander confirms that he is correct. This is a secret map. Based on his army's own intelligence, the source of the curse lies in the deepest part of the ruins. If they use the underground tunnels, they can approach without clashing with the defense forces. Edgar will be the one to gather the troops and distract the enemy army. The vice commander orders his men to advance into battle. Everlock wants his men focused on defending the region. The commander continues explaining the plan, saying that the rest of the group will destroy the source of the curse. Inside these tunnels, Dallin recalls the old days. The protagonist would like to take this opportunity to retrieve his body. These ruins are where immortal demons grow stronger, and it would be a waste to use the creature only as a subspace storage bag. Our hero will be looking for a chance to slip away from the group for a moment. The twins who have the map seem a bit lost, unsure if this is the correct path that connects to the right rooms. Dallin and Lucia grow genuinely concerned, wondering if they can trust these two. One of the brothers says that in the deeper sections there are fewer collapses than in the outer areas, although his uncle also thought that before he disappeared. Dallin is relieved that the sections they are in seem safe, and perhaps the others will be too. Arben suddenly emerges from one of his portals, curious since these ruins are famous for their traps, but so far they haven't seen any. The little demon realizes the fatal mistake he just made and begs his master to let him live. At that moment, a strange noise interrupts their discussion. Suddenly, the ruins begin to tremble. Dallin activates his X-ray vision ability. The protagonist sees that behind the walls, several gears are now moving. One of the twin brothers seems to have stepped on a hidden lever on the ground, triggering a traps. The group hears another noise. One of the walls opens, and arrows fly straight toward them. The trap is about to catch the group off guard, but our hero manages to draw his sword in time to defend himself. One of the arrows flies past the protagonist and heads straight for Lucia, but Dallin manages to save her just in time. The knight is sweating nervously. Our hero knows they are in deep trouble now. Dallin orders everyone to run as fast as they can. Helder casts a spell to shield himself from further attacks. The tunnel begins to collapse right behind the group, and Lucia screams desperately as she runs. The falling rocks block their way back, leaving them with no path to return. On one of the corridor walls, Dallin notices that another trap has been activated, and quickly the protagonist destroys the device before it can harm anyone. Lucia asks how much longer they will have to keep running, and Sir Helton replies that according to the map, there shouldn't be any traps here. But the knight grows nervous, thinking he might be reading the instructions wrong, and our hero starts to believe that they were never avoiding traps. Instead, it seems more like they are running straight into a trap. Dallin gently grabs the demon and asks if he knows anything about these ruins. Arben explains that the one activating the mechanisms is the dungeon's guardian. The demon elaborates that the ruins function by using souls inserted into them, so the traps will not stop until the intruders leave. At that moment, the protagonist realizes the gravity of the situation. They are caught in a trap that actively chases intruders. Dallin shouts for everyone to keep running, saying he will follow them as soon as he can. Elder tries to argue with our hero, but when he turns to look at him, he changes his mind. The mage is shocked at how much stronger the protagonist has become in such a short time. The group agrees to move forward. Dallin launches a charged energy attack straight at one of the walls, and then the underground bricks begin rearranging into a new shape. In an instant, the corridor transforms into a large open space. The protagonist seems to recognize the place he is in. Arben takes the opportunity to point the way for his master. The demon can see the energy left behind by the guardians along the path. Following the instructions, our hero moves in the direction Arben is guiding him. Along the way, massive stone blocks fall toward the protagonist. At the same time, multiple projectiles are launched, and with no difficulty, Dallin destroys all obstacles in his path. The traps don't stop, and our hero keeps cutting down everything that comes at him. Without a single scratch, Dallin clears a path through a fissure in the wall. The mercenary admits that this last attack almost bankrupted him. Arben says that thanks to him, they both managed to reach their destination. The protagonist stands before the king's tomb. Dallin opens the door and a green gas is released. The skill curse preservation seal is activated. Apparently, this is the energy causing the curses. A massive presence inside the tomb accuses the protagonist of being an intruder. The guardian of the king and the ruins states that our hero is interrupting his master's slumber, and for that, he must pay with his life. The skeleton casts a spell, ordering the intruders to be sent into an eternal, painful sleep. What the necromancer quickly realizes is that the protagonist is completely fine even after taking the attack. With his anti-curse skill activated and the dragon's regeneration, Dallin is able to resist, even though the guardian's attacks are stronger than he expected. For our hero, he either succumbs to the curse or he cuts the skeleton in two. The guardian challenges whether the hero's protection seal can withstand an even stronger curse. Dallin leaps toward his enemy. He must end this fight quickly. The skeleton's staff activates the spell just before being struck, and Arben suddenly emerges from one of his portals, delighted. The protagonist believes there is no way to escape this time, but the demon begins devouring the curse. Arben acts like a vacuum, sucking up all the dark energy from the environment. The guardian is left bewildered, unable to understand how this little creature managed to do that. Dallin says his demon did a good job. Our hero tells him to keep eating just like that, and then he attacks and defeats the skeleton. Arben asks if this quest will end once they awaken him. Dallin agrees. Now only the main curse remains. Retrieving his body and the soul jar. It's pure coincidence that our hero found a different purpose. Earlier, when the protagonist thought he had won the fight, the monster absorbed him into the soul jar. Dallin grabs Arben and tells him that what he's about to do is for the demon, so no hard feelings. The creature looks confused, not understanding a thing. Before the little monster can say anything, the protagonist shoves his face into the jar. Arben gets dizzy from the impact and the container shatters. This time, the little demon is furious, in utter disbelief. He screams that he is Arbin, the immortal demon. Completely ignoring the tiny creature, Dallin recognizes the feeling of Corp Collectio. A new notification appears stating that our hero has collected the body of a warrior who played hide and seek with the Guardian. Dallin feels energy flowing through him and gains +1 strength, +1 perception, and +2 proficiency. A new skill unlocks and our hero acquires the sword Rare Donara's B. An item in the form of a compass also appears. The protagonist gets excited about the item called Explorer's Eye Fragment. In the menu, the protagonist is now at level 14, and the new items are available for him to use. The new weapon has a B rank classification, categorized as mythical. But the compass is definitely what he needs most in this situation. With the Explorer's Eye Fragment, the user only needs to focus on their target in their mind, and the compass will point in the right direction. Dallin thinks of Lucia. She has probably already reached the center of the curse. As expected, the arrow points toward where his friends are. While our hero is momentarily distracted, thinking that there will be no more traps in his way, Arbin rises in a new form. Larger than before, the demon threatens the protagonist for all the humiliation he has endured so far, but Dallin ruins his fun with a single strike. The protagonist tells Arbin that if he's done eating, then it's time to go. And the little creature laughs as if it had just been playing the whole time. Just to be sure, Dallin asks the demon if he still has room in his stomach, but the little monster says that he might already be full. Lucia fights against one of the special troops' soldiers and yells at the twins, asking if they have managed to disarm the core of the curse. The knights respond that they are still trying, but it is much harder than they thought. Lucia kicks her attacker away and orders her companions to hurry up. The soldier falls at the feet of his fellow comrades. Lucia finds herself face to face with an entire battalion of soldiers. The knight knows that she made it this far thanks to Dallin disabling the traps. She is cornered, desperate, and in a hurry to finish this situation and go save her friend. One of the warriors curses her as the commander's dirty hound and attacks her with his massive axe. Lucia dodges, the blade passing just inches from her face. At that moment, a rock hits the soldier in the face, saving Lucia. The two mages are also providing support for her in this fight. Elder senses a dangerous presence. The mage pushes his young partner out of harm's way. Then Elder raises a rock barrier to protect himself, but an attack shatters his defenses. The mage tries to create an energy shield, but the same attack breaks through his defenses instantly, and then Elder is thrown far away. The young mage calls out to his master in desperation. The attacking sword glows with a blue aura around its blade. Lucia says that Everlock must have been bold to leave the walls under attack and come down to the ruins. The vice commander tells his former comrade that he never taught her to address his superior by name. Lucia dashes toward her opponent like a lightning bolt, but he easily parries her strike. The vice commander's sword holds back the knight's weapon without much effort. Lucio wants to end this once and for all. She launches a flurry of consecutive attacks against the traitor, but the vice commander manages to repel them all. Everlock says he heard that Lucia had to take the life of one of her own comrades and asks if the man was bound by Halman's chain. The knight wants to know how the vice commander knows that. The renegade reveals that the demon was meant to be left alive to grow stronger. Everlock says he had to send a young knight with a sacred sword, and to think that the creature was defeated by a half-trained knight is humiliating. Lucia fills with rage, swearing to terrify the vice commander. Everlock tells her to do her best. The knight charges at the old man like a missile. Between the two warriors, the ground begins to crumble. Suddenly, Arbin and Dallin burst out from underground in a grand entrance. Lucia is overjoyed to see her friend alive. Brother Heston has given up on destroying the core, but the other twin still believes there is a way. The demon floats toward the core like a ballerina. Arbin finds the curse's appearance so beautiful that he is mesmerized. And since that's the case, he eats the core for his master without complaint. At the same moment, the other warriors begin waking up as if coming out of a hangover. Everlock cannot comprehend how the core is already gone and how a mere barbarian is wielding the sacred sword. Arbin collapses on the ground with a full belly. Dallin challenges the old man. Since he's angry, he should come and take the sword back. Everlock is so enraged by the disrespect that he doesn't even notice a tall, hooded figure approaching behind him. This being tells the vice commander that he is pathetic. Even with his newfound powers, he still cannot handle ordinary humans. The figure continues, saying that if Everlock made a pact with the witch, he does not want to have to come and save anyone's miserable life. A draconic hand reaches toward the vice commander, who is trembling with fear, and in a second, Everlock disappears. Lucia orders the stranger to reveal his identity so he can pay for the crime of invading the Holy Knight's territory. But Dallin steps in front of his friend and orders her to stand down. This is someone she cannot fight. A notification appears identifying the stranger as Blue Scales, and the being finds it amusing that mere insects dare to challenge him. Our hero says that he has some abilities he wants to test against a strong enough opponent. The stranger transforms into a dragon and says that he doesn't really understand the ugly language of humans. So our hero promises to explain what's going to happen to him in a way that leaves no doubt. A soldier informs the commander that the opposing forces are collapsing. Suddenly, the enemy army collapses all at once. Edgar orders his men to prioritize treating the wounded. The commander already understands that his friends succeeded in their mission, Edgar remembers having visions of a monster army invading the knight's castle. He is relieved that this will not happen, at least for now. The leader of the knights senses that something is wrong. While the soldiers assist the injured, the commander begins to wonder if it is truly over. Something seems to erupt from underground in an explosion. Someone asks Edgar if they should send the forces, but the commander tells his men to form up against high-ranking monsters. A massive blue dragon emerges from beneath the earth, and a light seems to shine, heading straight toward the dragon. Edgar recognizes that this is the hero chosen by God. Dallin soars toward the monster like a missile. With the sacred sword, the protagonist attacks the creature. A massive blue ray cuts through the dragon and vanishes into the horizon. The enormous creature retaliates with a breath attack, striking our hero in midair. Without support, Dallin plummets in free fall. The protagonist gets closer to the ground, knowing that he has nothing to push off from to jump back into the battle. The dragon taunts the human, telling him to crawl back to the ground where he belongs. And it even calls our hero a worm. A notification appears stating that the jump skill is now 100% ready for use. The protagonist does not know how to jump without having something to push off from. Not wanting to give him any chance, the dragon prepares to launch another attack. Since he has no solid ground to leap from, Dallin decides to use the wind as a springboard. Our hero pushes off the air and leaps back up at high speed, and he lands a punch right on the dragon's chin. The powerful impact knocks the creature unconscious, and the two of them plummet from the skies. The shock upon hitting the ground obliterates everything around them. For a second, the dust rises, making it impossible to see anything. Dallin charges forward at high speed, ready to strike with his sword again. The protagonist is seen only as a blue blur rushing toward the dragon. On the creature's chest, our hero can feel its heartbeat. Dallin delivers the fastest strike he can, but somehow the enormous monster dodges. The dragon proclaims its victory and launches a deadly attack, but our hero blocks it with the sacred sword. The monster cannot comprehend how the swordsman managed to do that. Dallin asks if his opponent is ready for phase 2 of the fight. The dragon quickly takes off, avoiding another attack. With his sword, the protagonist charges up as much energy as possible to unleash his blue slash attack. Numerous magical seals appear all around the dragon. The monster dares the protagonist to try defending against this attack. Multiple magical blasts shoot out from the seals, heading toward Dallin. The monster is confident in its magic, but our hero, with a smile on his face, announces that the timing was perfect. The dragon feels something in its heart. For some reason, the monster's magic has been broken. Edgar states that he only lent a little help so the monster cannot escape. The commander cannot deny that he likes the idea of Dallin gaining the glory and fame of becoming a dragon slayer. A massive magical barrier forms around the entire fortress. The dragon becomes furious at what is happening. As expected from the knight's commander, Dallin remarks, "To our hero, it would be rude to refuse such a well-prepared meal." The protagonist activates his new weapon and hurls a dagger toward the dragon. The blade flies straight into the creature's heart, but for the dragon, this is still not enough to defeat it. The enormous monster charges forward, breathing blue fire from its mouth. The flames are gigantic and rush toward our hero, but Dallin leaps toward the attack. The swordsman attempts to cut through the magical flames with his sword. Our hero exerts all of his strength to withstand the blow. His hands tremble from the immense effort. Dallin screams until the last moment to hold back the attack, and the dragon roars in fury. Then the protagonist manages to deflect the magic. A pillar of light shoots up to the clouds from the impact of the strike, and the slash cuts through the monster's neck. The sky clears, bringing the sun back again. A new notification appears. Dragon Slayer title acquired. The blue-scaled dragon has finally been defeated. Now that the battle is over, the knights are assisting in cleaning up the area and providing support to the wounded. The commander is truly surprised by Dallin, and on top of that, dragon blood now flows through the protagonist, allowing him to regenerate faster. Edgar says that thanks to the hero, they not only won the war, but also captured a dragon. The commander of the knights lowers his head in gratitude to the dragon slayer. Now Edgar orders the first platoon to move the wounded and the rest of the men to follow him. Alone, Dallin thinks that was a close call. He almost lost to the wyvern again, not to mention that our hero wouldn't have been able to use body collection. Now that the protagonist has collected his body, he receives upgrades in strength, proficiency, and mana. And apparently, that's not all. Dallin found another body, one that fell while trying to steal from the Holy Knight's arsenal. By collecting this spirit, he not only gains proficiency, but also unlocks an invisibility cloak. The protagonist is happy that he managed to get another great item. Now for the final step, our hero approaches the dragon. Dallin draws his sword and plunges it into the monster's flesh. The swordsman takes a quick look around before continuing, and he manages to rip out the dragon's heart. Dallin tosses it to Arben and tells him not to lose it under any circumstances. But the demon is slightly offended at being used as a storage bag for a fake lizard heart, and the exhausted protagonist simply tells him to shut up. The elite squad, the traps, and now even the dragon. This is not something a normal person should have to deal with. Once this mission is over, Dallin needs to return to Paljan. Since he only has one body, our hero needs a power that allows him to stop the end even where he is not present. To expand his power, the protagonist might need to talk to Sienna. Dallin hopes that the raven's nest is still in the same place. He misses their alcohol. But for now, it's time to sleep. Our hero is completely exhausted. Everlock wakes up screaming. Alone, he seems either injured or struggling to breathe. The vice commander finds himself alone in some kind of cave. What he doesn't understand is why the dragon sent him to this place. Suddenly, his divine magic begins to falter. Everlock wonders if it's because of the magic he used against the old mage. The renegade finds it strange that the amount of divine energy he can wield has dropped so drastically. Could it be because of the contract with the witch, or maybe it has something to do with Golachab? In truth, there's no point in thinking about this now. What the vice commander needs to do is focus. Then, at that moment, a sinister voice tells Everlock that he is a useless pawn. The voice states that the wyvern fell to save him, and if not for the contract with Anaxagus, none of this would have happened. Everlock is terrified by the person standing before him, the dragoness Chiangren Tedera Lialark. But the dragon woman does not appreciate having her name spoken without permission, and an invisible force forces the vice commander to his knees. Chiangren says that this man not only failed to fulfill his part of the contract, but has now become nothing more than useless baggage. With great effort, Everlock insists that he did fulfill his part of the deal. The commander says that the dragon woman wanted to escape the rift, but he didn't have enough time to acquire the sacred sword. Instead, he brought the key to the barriers, and because of that, it wasn't a complete failure. Chiangren acknowledges that he did well in that regard. So as a reward, the dragon woman grants Everlock a new power for him to play with as much as he likes. She expects him to meet her expectations. Someone informs Dallin that the vice commander stole one of the Holy Knight's treasures. Lucia scolds the protagonist for talking while eating. Our hero replies that there's an old saying, "A ghost that perish after eating is colorful and charming," but his friend remains annoyed with him. Regardless, Lucia warns that the news about the stolen item is still a secret, and the protagonist is curious to know what this treasure was. His companion explains that Everlock tried to take all the sacred swords while fleeing, but since the rebellion was quickly crushed, he was stopped. To her, it's obvious that the vice commander fled to Chiangren's cave deep beneath the rift. What Everlock stole was the key to the rift's barriers. Dallin admits that this sounds problematic. Surrounding the knight's base is a barrier of mountains. The walls are imbued with mana so that monsters cannot escape through the air. This is the rift's barrier wall. Edgar states that the vice commander only managed to steal one of the keys, so even if he weakens the barrier, it still won't be possible to cross it. Lucia says it will take time for the vice commander to activate the key, but just knowing that a renegade has that item in his possession is already problematic. Dallin immediately volunteers to help. Lucia is a bit caught off guard, but the protagonist says that's why they're telling him this story. Somewhat embarrassed, she admits that yes, they want the hero's help, and Dallin asks if a team has already been assembled. The commander explains that an inquisitor, along with high-ranking knights, Felver, and Tommy, complete the team. The protagonist reminds them that he is a mercenary. If the price is reasonable, he will do whatever they need. Lucia then asks what the price of a dragon slayer is. To track Everlock, they will need to venture into the depths of the rift, which is the same as walking into the mouth of a monster. The hero then wants to make a few suggestions since they are in a difficult situation. Dallin has 3 requests to make. The protagonist holds the compass, knowing that the vice commander is hiding within the rift. Without even realizing it, the sacred tattoos are completed. Dallin thanks the commander, he has been very helpful. Edgar says that it's the protagonist who has been putting in the hard work. Normally, it takes a week of rest to heal a tattoo on the skin, but the mercenary got 3 done in 1 week. The markings will assimilate into the skin in a few days. Now all Dallin can do is rest. The protagonist received 2 sacred tattoos as payment for the last mission, and 1 more for what's to come. However, the dragon blood in his body is trying to regenerate the wounds caused by the markings, but the divine power is keeping the runes intact. Dallin takes the opportunity to open the menu and check his abilities. Dragon blood is one of many powers and one of the most basic skills a user can have, and the protagonist's proficiency is already at 90%. Our hero is surprised that the proficiency has increased so much in such a short time. It will likely be the first C-rank skill to reach 100%. The skills jump and combat armor have also reached 100%. This makes the protagonist curious about how strong he will become once his C-rank skill reaches maximum proficiency. The horses are already departing for the mission. Everyone in the team is riding out of the valley. Dallin also got what he wanted as his second payment. He easily obtained a magical relic in the form of an axe. Perhaps the commander didn't care much because he thought it was a fair payment. A man approaches our hero to talk to him. The high-ranking knight introduces himself as Morg, saying it is an honor to fight alongside the Dragon Slayer. Morg says that Lucia told him Dallin was able to defeat multiple gnolls inside a labyrinth, and that is incredible. Hearing his friend's name makes him think about how she is doing. Lucia says she will remain at the knight's barracks. After a brief silence, the protagonist says that if that is his partner's decision, he won't oppose it. The reason is that now that Param has officially become a holy knight, Lucia will guide and train the boy at the barracks. Compared to the protagonist, she's not as strong as him, so she believes that in this way, she will be more useful. Dallin tells Morg that he wasn't alone. Lucia was with him. And the knight says he is excited to see the young woman grow and evolve one day. The soldier eagerly recounts how the protagonist conquered the labyrinth, and for our hero, all this enthusiasm reminds him of someone. That someone is Elder. However, the mage has been much quieter than usual ever since the battle for the sanctuary ended. Morg, still full of energy, tells Dallin to pay attention because he's not done talking yet. And the knight continues rambling on, and our hero wonders if he will have to endure this for the entire journey. Inside the rift, the third supply fortress, Morg announces that this is the last stop. After this, it will reach Estra Fortress in 2 days. The deeper they go into the rift, the more the environment turns into a labyrinth. The river that flows through the territory forms a boundary dividing the land of humans and monsters. Estra Fortress was built around the river and is the largest defense base after the headquarters. To reach this fortress, they must pass through 3 supply outposts along the way. Morg explains that after arriving in Estra, they will keep moving without stopping, so they will conduct a full analysis of the plan. The place believed to be Everlock's hiding spot is beyond the river in the Demon Valley, a place where the terrain consists of both small and large valleys, twisting and turning, making it extremely difficult not to get lost or to track someone. Fortunately, the group has Elder, the mage with the ability to read the Earth's memory. The mage responds that, unfortunately for humans, the Earth never forgets, and by looking at the memory of the rocks, they will find Everlock. Morg confirms whether the protagonist has a relic capable of tracking people, so Dallin shows the group his magical compass. With that, they now have 2 ways to find the vice commander, and now they must discuss what to do once they reach Everlock. At that moment, the mercenary senses something. The protagonist closes his eyes and concentrates, and energy passes through the horses and moves toward the entrance of the gate where the group is heading. Dallin opens his eyes, now with an idea of what he is dealing with. Morg continues discussing the plan, but our hero interrupts him. The protagonist says that they should continue the conversation later. Now the horses are at full speed. Morg tries to ask the mercenary what is happening, but he himself starts feeling something as they approach the area. Atop the tower, a soldier is giving orders for his men to defend their posts, and at that moment, he spots the knight approaching. The soldier recognizes who is coming, so the leader gives new orders to open the gates for the Dragon Slayers group. The same soldier receives the group, saying that they have been expecting them. He apologizes for not giving them a proper welcome, but the situation is urgent. Morg requests a status report, and the leader explains what is happening. From the wall, the entire group sees the situation with their own eyes. Enemy banners flutter in the wind. The protagonist knows that they represent Cheongren. An army of thousands of gnolls is advancing for war. Thousands of creatures charge toward the walls. The captain orders the archers to prepare their arrows. Then the army fires upon the monsters. The gnolls reach the walls, ropes and grappling hooks in hand. One of the hooks latches onto the edge of the wall. Quickly, one of the monsters climbs up, ready to attack. But at the last second, the captain is saved. Dallin and the others in the group join the battle. If Cheongren's army has reached the supply post, it means Estra Fortress has already fallen. This garrison is only a supply station. It doesn't have enough people to hold the defense, meaning it's only a matter of time before it falls. In that case, Dallin must quickly secure command and defeat the Gnoll army. The protagonist calls out to Morg. Then the Dragon Slayer announces that he is leaving this place in his partner's hands. Before the knight can respond, the hero leaps off the wall, and Morg shouts after him. Dallin activates his jump skill and practically walks through the air. The mercenary stops midair right above the monster army. To reduce the number of enemies, he needs to cast a large-scale spell. With the sacred sword, Dallin charges up a massive magical attack. And this is the last thing one of the gnolls sees. Activating the skill, Hegelia's Fire Rain, C-Class. A rain of fire meteors descends from the sky onto the creatures. The monsters can do nothing but scream in terror. Among the fireballs, a blue light can also be seen falling. Dallin lands with his sword buried in the ground, ready to finish the creatures. With a powerful swing of the sacred blade, the protagonist sends a wave of energy toward the gnolls. The protagonist predicts that someone he is expecting will soon appear, and at that moment, the monster commander lands in front of the protagonist. The two stare at each other, neither showing fear. Determined to end the battle quickly, Dallin continues sending creatures flying with his sword. Morg is astonished by the power of the Dragon Slayer, but this moment of distraction allows one of the gnolls to attack him. The knight doesn't even realize that he is about to leave this world, and by some miracle, a rock erupts from the ground, saving Morg's life. The knight expresses his gratitude for being saved. Thanks to Elder Felver, he is still alive. Kami warns his master that more monsters are coming and that he will handle them. The young mage casts a spell that launches a pillar toward a tower, and just in time it strikes one of the gnolls who is scaling the walls. Elder knows that the number of attacking monsters is overwhelming. The worst part is that the territory they must defend is too wide, but they cannot give up now. Dallin is also giving it his all so they can win. Elder also wants to push himself so that he doesn't fall behind. A powerful golden aura surrounds the old mage, and the aura keeps expanding more and more. Some soldiers are defeating the monsters. Others are being defeated. Elder senses all of this through his aura. The spell Grand Territory is activated. This is a technique required to be considered an archmage. By using the memory of this battlefield, he can see the future of those standing within this territory. With this power, the mage can oversee this enormous battlefield. Several stone pillars rise from the ground, striking the knolls all over. The same happens where the protagonist is fighting. Before the hero lands a hit on the monster, a rock strikes the creature's chin. To Dallin, Felver has already done more than enough. And at that moment, the mage falls to his knees. His apprentice shouts in worry for his master. Mage Elder cannot believe that his body cannot sustain this magic. Tommy warns that his master has pushed himself far beyond his limits. Dallin continues launching knolls into the air, but the mage feels something, a memory from the earth, and the apprentice is pleased with what he sees on the horizon. Dallin has stacked up a pile of monsters and stands atop them all. The mage's health worsens, because Felver has seen something terrifying. He knows that Dallin has lived many, many lives. The Inquisitor Pidna states that the Order must continue its activities in the region. Another member of the Order says that their priority right now is to recover the barrier key. Pidna comments that the Null army came from inside the rift, which has a clear meaning. Astra Fortress has fallen into the hands of the enemy. For Pidna, rather than continuing the hunt, the Order should gather the remaining supplies and soldiers and return to headquarters. But Domer doesn't like what the Inquisitor is saying. Perhaps their victory in yesterday's battle was God telling them to continue the operation. Pidna, on the other hand, believes it might be the Lord telling them to prepare for an even greater fight. The Inquisitor continues, stating that there is no guarantee the Null army has been completely defeated, and this is dangerous. The base leader suggests a vote. Whoever is in favor of continuing the mission should raise their hand. The protagonist is the first to lift his hand, but before that, he wants to give his opinion. Even if no one else wants to go, the hero will continue alone. At first, only 2 other people raise their hands. 2 days later, near Astra Fortress, Morb sees smoke at the end of the road and believes this is not a good sign. All the horses begin galloping toward the fortress. Dallin finds it strange that the Inquisitor ultimately decided to come with them. Pidna, visibly agitated, wants to know why the protagonist is willing to risk so much. She believes they should turn back. For our hero, the answer is simple. If they retreat, it will only give the creatures more time to prepare their next attack, and besides, knights should not run away from danger. To Dallin, the Inquisitor simply has a different way of thinking, but she is still a very responsible knight. The other members of the Order seem shocked by the sight before them. Even Domer is speechless. Astra Fortress is completely destroyed. Amidst the ruins, only one man remains alive. The man stands up, wondering why the group took so long to arrive. Everlock says that if the Northern Barbarian hadn't come, then he would have had to go after the protagonist personally. Dallin declares that the Vice Commander has betrayed his god, but Everlock replies that he is completely loyal to the god who gave him power. At that very moment, Domer attacks the Vice Commander but barely misses. The Inquisitor shouts with hatred, declaring that the man before him is a corrupt renegade. Domer announces that Everlock, along with the 5 others present, will punish the Vice Commander for his treason. But the renegade doesn't even take the warning seriously. He doesn't want to waste time on pawns. When Everlock was corrupted, he was granted power by the evil god Laplam. The fortress itself was also corrupted by the Knight, giving the Vice Commander 3 possible moves. He could turn the base into a stronghold led by dragons or open a portal to hell. Astra could also serve as a phantasmal palace. Everlock states that he has already begun transforming this terror into a ghostly palace, and that there is nothing anyone can do to stop the power of the evil god. Dallin immediately grows tense, thinking he might not be able to stop it in time. But before the renegade can complete the ritual, a rock strikes him. The Vice Commander doesn't understand how he was hit, considering he used magic to distort space and create distance. Perhaps Mage Elder is forcing the earth to be pulled even from the distorted space. Dallin takes advantage of the moment to throw his dagger. The blade strikes, breaking the renegade's defense. That single moment is enough for the protagonist to close in an attack. The sword lands a direct hit on the barrier, and the protagonist manages to pierce through it. Finally, the hero has entered the other realm. Now the protagonist is in the domain of the evil god, Hell. Crossing through the space lies Lipolim's, the Palace of Phantoms. Within it is the Garden of the Hollows. Since the ceremony has not been completed, this is not the true palace, meaning Everlock is trapped in a reality within the barrier. And because of this, the protagonist believes he can defeat him. Dallin leaps between branches, dodging attacks. And with his sacred sword, he slashes through all the branches around him. Then he lands on the ground without a single scratch. Warplant attacks rush for the hero, and with his axe, he repels the branches once again. The longer one resists inside the Garden of the Hollows, and more they become trapped within it. Hundreds of branches merge together into a single weapon. Dallin grows more excited. He has found the core of the garden, which means he has reached its depths. The core charges toward the protagonist, attempting to impale him. But the branches move too fast, getting ahead of Dallin. And before the hero even realizes it, countless hand-shaped branches are also reaching for him. But Dallin slices through both the hands and the massive form rushing toward him. The smoke from the explosive attack rises in the garden. The protagonist appears to have finally reached the bottom. More branches lash out toward the mercenary. But Dallin is happy. He has found what he was looking for, the flame that will end this place. A notification appears. The body of a knight imbued with sacred fire has been found in the shadows of hell. Finally, Dallin has obtained what he needed, and before he can be attacked again, he activates the body collection ability. The protagonist gains proficiency, senses, intelligence, mana, and a notification stating that divine power now flows throughout his body. At that very moment, the tips of the branches begin to catch fire. The Garden of the Hollows, which draws mana from the Eagle God, can only be defeated with divine power. The skill Sacred Fire Ember has been acquired. The power to turn any flame into divine fire. Dallin summons a meteor shower. The fireballs begin setting the entire forest ablaze. With his new ability, it's time to destroy the shadows of hell. Everlock knows he's screwed. Watching the Garden of the Hollows go up in flames sends the Vice Commander into a panic. Even after his army conquered Estra Fortress, Everlock barely managed to descend into the shadows of hell without everything going terribly wrong. How many more of his plans is this mercenary going to ruin? At that moment, something seems to strike the renegade's face. Everlock searches for where the attack came from. Dallin appears between the burning trees, grinning he has found his target. The renegade's face heals on its own. Completely unhinged, Everlock attacks without thinking. At blazing speed, the two warriors exchange deadly blows. But to Dallin, something feels off. Why isn't the renegade advancing to the next level? The two fighters are moving so fast that only the glimmer of their swords can be seen. Everlock is completely blinded by rage. Amidst the clashes, the protagonist activates his fire ability. In that brief moment, the renegade realizes he's screwed. Dallin lands a flaming kick, launching his opponent deep into the forest. The flames consume everything, breaking the spell. Our hero realizes that the power of this skill is even stronger than he expected. But at that moment, the protagonist feels something strange within his body. It seems this skill takes a huge toll on the user's body. But Dallin has no time to control this power. He needs to deal with it somehow. At that moment, an explosion erupts. It's Everlock now in a grotesquely deformed form. Barely able to speak properly, the renegade still manages to curse the protagonist and call him a barbarian. But Dallin finds it ironic. Of all people, does this man really think he has the right to call him a heathen? The creature that was once human lunges our hero. With a clean sword strike, the monster is sliced in half. Yet somehow, the renegade manages to regenerate. Dallin grows irritated. Even in this form, the man is still annoying. Everlock continues relentlessly attacking the protagonist with his sword, but the renegade simply cannot comprehend how the barbarian is defeating him. The former vice commander wants to know how Dallin was hiding this divine power. His multiple hands summon magical runes in the sky. Numerous magical attacks rain down upon the protagonist. But once again, Dallin activates his fire skill. A shield forms around the hero's body, protecting him from all the attacks. The mercenary remarks that he never hid any of his power. The creature, enraged, charges at his opponent, and with one attack, Dallin pierces through the vice commander's body. Everlock cannot comprehend this situation. In the end, Dallin is the last one standing, victorious. A voice calls out to our hero, seeing a like on this video that helps Mamoru make more juicy content for his viewers. Activate the cheeky little bell, and I'm out.